The Breaking of the Storm. Written by Mogera. My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic. Twilight Sparkle. Rainbow Dash. Scootaloo. Original character. Main 6. Romance. Adventure. Description. The winter passes into spring, bringing with it many changes both for good and for ill. Don Lightwing must contend with the pending disaster as a powerful adversary approaches with designs to end his life. Rainbow Dash finally leaves to join the Wonderbolts but finds her dreams jeopardized by some pony from the past. Meanwhile, Twilight Sparkle and those close to her are drawn further into the machinations of the noble court. Oh, and some pony is planning to destroy the world probably, maybe, let me get back to you on that. Table of contents. The coming end. Meeting of minds. Breakdown of negotiations. Dreaming of destiny. Not always right. Melody of healing hearts. Wrapping up. So long and thanks for all the cider. Night visitor. Joining the team. Dark designs. Training interrupted. Shuffling priorities. Loving the sky. Mounting perils. Bug hunting. Hammer time. The ultimate punishment. The morning star falling. Passing judgment. Arrival. Faltering wind. Shining wind. A catastrophe of two ponies. The raising. Broken and battered. Painless passing. Moving on. Fool's errand. The coming end. Chapter 1, The Coming End. Well now, I thought I would find you here. Tara Hart's ear barely flicked in acknowledgement of his leader's voice. He had been expecting to hear from Morningstar sooner or later. However, he hadn't been entirely expecting to have the soft-spoken unicorn come for him in pony, even if Morning was one of the few who could actually reach this spot on his own. If there was a pony who could be said to embody the very definition of what it meant to be an earth pony in physical form, it would be Tara. His dark brown coat, which evoked an image of the freshly turned earth of a field ready for planting, did nothing to cover up the solid, heavy muscles that stood out beneath it. Tara's physique looked as though it had been carved from the side of a mountain. It was solid, unyielding, invincible looking. His muscles seemed to strain against his skin and coat, as though they could barely contain the rumbling power within him. His pale green mane swirled in the wind, looking almost like a row of freshly sprouted wheat when they were drawn upright by the draft swirling around the two ponies. Tara's eyes, which had been closed before, slowly drifted open, revealing a pair of impassive gray orbs which he slowly oriented on Morningstar. The unicorn met Tara's stoic gaze with an expression of faint amusement in his cyan eyes. His rosy pink coat, accompanied by a mane that washed through different shades of orange to a sunny yellow at the tips, stood out against the featureless white of the snow all around them. However, the off-white color of his horn was difficult to make out given their surroundings. Neither pony seemed to notice the whirling maelstrom of snow and ice that surrounded them. The icy blasts of wind made neither pony shiver or flinch. They both stood completely unbothered by the inclement weather, as though they were chatting under the warm sun of a fresh spring day. Any pony who might have seen them would have been shocked by the sight. Fortunately, it was highly unlikely that any pony would stumble upon them at this place. In the spot they were standing right now, it could be said that the ponies who would be able to reach that spot and survive numbered less than 20 in the entire world, well without assistance, at least. The mountain, ensconced deep within the range that sprawled across the country of Nepal, was known by many names, Chomolungma being one of them. Some people referred to it as the sacred tent pole of the sky, and old myths described the mountain as having been raised from the base earth to hold the tapestry of the sky in place. It stood as the highest mountain in the world, its peak punching up into the air, well beyond the height of even the highest Pegasus cloud cities. Even amongst the Pegasi, there were a scant handful that could reach this altitude without assistance and still fewer that could remain at said altitude for any length of time, much less indefinitely. Up at this altitude, the air was exceedingly thin, without enough oxygen to support the average pony. On top of that, what air was present was often a deathly cold wind, driving snow that could freeze an unprotected traveler solid in just a few minutes. Winter was even worse, when the temperatures were at their lowest and the snows at their deepest. The powerful gusts of wind could knock an unprepared pony over. They'd been reputed to even simply lift up lighter ponies and toss them down the sides of the mountain or into crevasses, never to be seen alive again. For the average pony, simply climbing to the summit was a life-threatening ordeal. Warm layers, several of them, were required, along with either the spells or equipment to supplement the oxygen needed to function at higher altitudes. Climbers moved in expeditions with upwards of 10 members, not including guides and porters to carry valuable, life-saving equipment. Reaching the top of this mountain was an accomplishment that represented an enormous investment of time, money, and determination beyond the scope of ordinary ponies. Tara Hart had not needed money and determination, at least. He'd simply climbed to the top as though he'd been taking an afternoon stroll through a summer field. He carried no equipment, no spells to aid his breathing, not a single stitch of thread against the cold. He stood at the peak, naked to the elements, unaided, unsupported, and unbowed. Tara had been in this spot for at least 2 months, give or take a week or two, Morningstar figured. As soon as Morningstar had declared that Tara was to see to the colt Don Lightwing's extermination and set a time frame for when the event would take place, Tara had left the temple, traveled across the seas to Saddle Arabia. From there, he'd navigated his way to Nepal, on the borders of Pachydermia, and climbed the mountain. Then, he'd waited. Morning knew that Tara hadn't had a bite to eat since he'd headed up the mountain all those weeks ago. Nor had he drunk anything. Tara hadn't even bothered to swallow some of the abundant snow as the source of moisture that most ponies needed. Tara didn't need to. A master of the mountain route could sustain himself with the power of the earth alone. Tara's magic hardened his flesh against the elements, sustained him in this airless environment, and even eliminated his need to subsist on food and water. At this moment, Tara Hart seemed less a creature of flesh and blood and more a being of pure spirit, powered by his will alone, sustained by the endless magic of the world itself. He'd spent weeks in this spot, endlessly honing that power, building upon it, preparing himself for his expected battle. It was a sign of just how seriously Tara had taken Morning's directive. "It isn't yet time," said Tara calmly, regarding Morningstar. Morningstar smiled at his second in command. Like Tara Hart, Morningstar stood naked upon the peak with no visible signs of protection against its severe conditions. Rather, he was instead sporting a more interesting feature. A pair of wings, almost like those of a Pegasus, extended from his shoulders and curved outward around his body. The wings seemed to create some break in the wind so that it and the snow it drove ahead of it swirled around Morning without touching him. Those wings seemed to enrich the air in the unicorn's immediate vicinity as well, allowing Morning to breathe without difficulty. The presence of wings on a unicorn's body would have normally served to mark Morning Star out as an alicorn, but these wings were different. Their off-white color, which matched the color of his horn, clashed harshly against the natural color of his coat. Also, while they were attached to his body, the muscle and bone structures normally present to support wings and their motion were absent from Morning's physique, giving the appendages a disconcerting, alien appearance when contrasted with the rest of his body. They looked less like actual body parts and more like replicas that had been tacked on as an afterthought. Tara knew for a fact that those wings were not composed of any mundane matter known to mortal ponies but rather, matter of a higher order. Morning Star could do things with those wings that completely defied the laws of the world as ordinary, and even extraordinary, ponies understood them. I'm aware that it isn't time yet, replied Morning Star. I merely came here to check with you on your plans for the whole affair. It will take some time for you to return to Equestria, much less reach Ponyville from this point. We are talking a journey of over a month, at least. If you leave it until too late, you might miss the ideal time to strike. Worry not, replied Tara coolly. I know when I need to leave. Once I do, I will make straight for Ponyville. The rolling stone does not stop until it reaches the mountain's base. Of course, said Morning Star, that seems like overkill. I cannot take enough care, replied Tara Hart simply. This colt has already shown himself to be dangerous both directly and indirectly. I will take no chances. I will bring all of my strength and ability to bear in order to kill him. Morning nodded. The rolling stone was a technique, if it could be called that, particular to the mountain route. It was the ultimate expression of one's determination to seize victory by destroying one's opponent. The technique was born from a proverb regarding a stone rolling downhill, which did not come to a stop until it had reached the base, its destination. Until then, it only continued to gather speed and inertia, building up its momentum with each successive bounce and turn. It was, in essence, a pilgrimage to the site of battle. Starting from this distant peak where he had spent the past weeks and would continue to spend several additional ones to build and hone his power, Tara would descend and walk as straight a path to Ponyville as the journey allowed. He would walk day and night, not ceasing his journey until he reached his destination, and his target. Only after Dawn Lightwing's corpse lay upon the ground would Tara's journey be completed. It was aspects such as this that set the mountain route apart from the other three pillars. The Gale King might have been more versatile and mobile. The Stillway might be endlessly diverse with countless potential approaches and applications depending on the wielder. But, of the three pillars, the mountain route was unmatched in sheer brute power and destructive strength. When Tara Hart finally began his descent, he would be nothing less than an unstoppable juggernaut of destruction. There would be no obstacle that could impede him, no pony that could waylay him, until he had fulfilled his mission. Morning Star had no doubt once Tara reached Ponyville, Dawn Lightwing would be dead. It's a shame really, he thought. I think he's much more useful alive. But the die has been cast. There's nothing to be done about it now. If that's the case, I wish you luck, said Morning Star. I suppose that we will speak once again after the deed has been done. Tara nodded curtly. Your will shall be done, Holy Father. Morning's smile became an amused grin. Good hunting then. Morning Star's wings dissolved into a mass of swirling feathers that enveloped the unicorn in a whirling cyclone that dispersed the snow around him. A second later, the feathers scattered, leaving no trace of the unicorn that had been standing amidst them. Tara's eyes closed once again as he sank into the deathly silence of the mountain's peak. The town of Ponyville shined white beneath the sun. A thick, even layer of snow lay spread across the town, covering yards and roofs alike with several inches of the white powder. Its uniformity was broken by the occasional hillock made from snow piled from shoveled walks and cleared streets, as well as the presence of the occasional snow pony and other, even more outlandish snow sculptures. Even though Heart's warming season has passed and the new year had arrived, the festive atmosphere still hung about Ponyville, evinced by the countless decorations that still hung from trees, lampposts, and the sides of houses. Most ponies wouldn't bother taking their decorations down until shortly before winter wrap-up. School was still out, so there was plenty of time for the foals to frolic and play in the snow before they were expected to assemble for classes once again. From her postation, soaring above the snow-covered houses of Ponyville, Rainbow Dash drew in a deep breath of the crisp winter air, savoring it as it briefly chilled her lungs before exhaling it back out to watch it condense into mist in front of her. I'm going to miss this. She sincerely doubted that this would be the last time she spent winter in Ponyville, but it would be her final one as the head of Ponyville's weather team. Once winter wrap-up was completed, Rainbow would be off to join the Wonderbolts full-time. She wasn't entirely certain what her full duties as a Wonderbolt would entail. Of course, there would be the shows and flight demonstrations that had enthralled her as the filly. But the Wonderbolts were a high-level emergency response team, responding rapidly to and handling the worst of natural disasters. At some point, it was even expected that they would have to follow their leader, Spitfire, into battle. Because of all that, Rainbow expected to be moving to Cloudsdale permanently. She would, of course, drop by Ponyville to visit all her friends when she got the opportunity, but those opportunities promised to be limited and for short durations. Her time as a resident was almost done. Shaking her head, Rainbow chased the melancholy thoughts of leaving Ponyville behind out of her head, taking the advice of her colt friend, Soren, to savor the good times as much as possible, rather than dwell on the fact that those particular good times were coming to an end. She had the rest of the season to spend with her friends and the ponies closest to her. Speaking of friends, Rainbow had a promise to keep. Taking another deep breath, Rainbow tilted her wings and banked into a turn that would take her on a leisurely course to the old quarry just outside of town proper. As the town drifted away beneath her, Rainbow's sharp ears pricked upwards as she picked up a low popping noise coming from her destination. The old quarry outside of Ponyville had not been used as an actual quarry since long before Rainbow Dash had moved to town, long before any of her friends had been born, in fact. There was nothing particularly mysterious and ominous about the place. An enterprising business had moved in some time ago to carve stone from the ground for shipment to nearby cities. Sadly, the placement of the quarry had been less than ideal. Though the stone harvested from it had been of good quality, it wasn't the pristine white marble favored by the masons and builders of Canterlot, the closest city with a high demand for stone. All the other nearby cities tended to have convenient quarries of their own that had scooped this one for business, and Ponyville simply didn't have many buildings that required quarried stone for construction. Sid had closed down, the equipment had been removed and its owners had gone off in search of greener, or rather rockier, pastures. Fortunately, the open shape of the quarry precluded it being too much of a hazard for any pony that might have wandered through it, which was just as well. The other residents of Ponyville had found other uses for the quarry in the meantime. The ambient magical currents that swept through the ground seeded and produced a steady supply of high-quality gemstones, which were especially useful to ponies like Rarity and the local jewelers. Said gemstones had also had the unfortunate side effect of attracting a colony of diamond dogs in the past. Fortunately, the dogs had left after being introduced the incredible weapon that was Rarity's whining voice. Now, the quarry served a different purpose altogether. For the past few months, Don Lightwing, Fluttershy's adopted son, had been taking Scootaloo out here in order to train her in the Pegasus martial art, the Gale King. With its out-of-the-way location and its level terrain, the quarry served as the perfect place for Don and Scootaloo to hold their practice sessions, which could potentially level buildings if they dared to do it in Ponyville proper. Even more recently, Don and Scootaloo had been joined by Stormfront, one of the mercenaries hired to help protect the town from the fallout caused by Don's presence, and Rumble, one of Don and Scootaloo's friends. The two of them were also training out in this area as well. With the onset of winter, Don and Scootaloo had spent less time in the quarry, the chill air and deep snow making the prospect of hard practice uninviting while the season progressed. Still, the Gale King was not exactly made to be practiced indoors. While Don and Scootaloo could work on their forms and meditation in a sufficiently roomy house, actual practice was out of the question anywhere but the great outdoors. Another popping noise, louder this time, sounded from somewhere in front of her. Rainbow's ears swiveled to pick up the sound's point of origin and she carefully angled her flight in its direction. She had no idea what Don and Scootaloo were working on, but she didn't want to get smacked by some technique that hit her because the two younglings hadn't seen her coming. Another pop sounded, this one even closer than before. This time, Rainbow heard a calm voice accompanying the sound. Again. She recognized the voice, as soft as Fluttershy's but deeply resonant, making it both audible and understandable even though it was at such a low volume. However, it was louder and slightly harsher this time. Rainbow recognized this as Don's instructor mode voice, the tone he used whenever he was working with Scootaloo on the Gale King. They might have been cold friend and filly friend outside of training, but out here, Don was the teacher and Scootaloo was the student, roles that both of them respected. At the sound of Don's voice, there is another pop, this one faintly softer. As Rainbow pushed through the low clouds that were blocking the vision of her descent, she saw what was happening. A substantial portion of the ground in the quarry had been swept clean of snow. Rainbow would have been impressed had she not already known that it was fool's play for Don, who had probably cleared the space with a few relatively gentle gusts. The two young martial artists stood on the flat ground, which, in addition to being cleared of snow, had also been cleared of the rocks and boulders that had originally littered the quarry grounds. This was hardly new. In the process of practicing the Gale King, the powerful winds generated by the style had smashed most of the larger stones in the vicinity and swept the smaller ones away. Don Lightwing didn't look all that different from most foals his age. His ebony coat stood out starkly against the snow around him, less of the ground beneath him. His mane and tail were a light silvery color that stood out against his coat. Though the mane wasn't particularly long, it was smooth and flowing in a way that made Rainbow wonder if Don was unconsciously borrowing aspects of his mother's hairstyle, though his mane wasn't nearly long enough to look totally like hers. His flank was yet unmarked by any kind of cutie mark, which was rare for a pony his age, although less rare around these parts given the ponies he associated with. Without question, Don's most captivating feature was his eyes, a pair of vivid turquoise orbs. The color wasn't all that remarkable in and of itself. What truly stood out were his pupils, which were cat-like vertical slits in the center of each iris. They gave Don's gaze a disconcerting, unnatural quality that, the first few times Rainbow had seen them, had sent shivers down her spine. It was these eyes that were the main source of the many problems that had followed Don into Ponyville, namely their resemblance to the eyes of Nightmare Moon, Princess Luna's power-mad persona that Rainbow and her friends had bested at one point. The eyes of Nightmare, as they were known, were viewed by many ponies as unnatural and freakish. However, the real problem lay in the fact that they figured into the folklore of a particular group called the Order of Celestial Light, better known to Rainbow and her friends as the Cult Solar, a group of crackpots that worshipped Princess Celestia, against her will, no less. According to the lore of the Cult Solar, ponies with the eyes of Nightmare were actually demons, sent by Nightmare Moon, aka Princess Luna, which the Cult Solar did not bother to differentiate between, to do her bidding. Don's manifestation of the condition was especially unique. Whereas most ponies with the condition only manifested the eyes during times of great emotional distress, Don's eyes seemed perpetually locked in their altered state, possibly since birth. This had only caused him additional problems as, wherever he went, those eyes drew trouble to him like lightning to a metal rod. Rainbow turned her attention from Don to Scootaloo, Rainbow's honorary younger sister. Scootaloo had always been a rambunctious tomboy of a filly, as evinced by her constantly mussed and ruffled fuchsia mane, which showed only the barest attention to its care and maintenance. As Rainbow came in for a landing, she noticed that Scootaloo was panting hard, sweat matting her bright orange coat. She'd put on a lot more muscle lately, all of it compact and supple, the muscles of a martial artist. Seeing Scootaloo having grown from a small, almost runty filly, into the hardened athlete before her made Rainbow smile. Scootaloo's wings, which had once only been capable of buzzing and best served as a means of propulsion for her scooter, looked more well-developed and powerful. From what Rainbow had heard, Scootaloo's signature scooter now lay in her room, gathering a layer of dust now that she no longer needed it. From her position, Rainbow could easily see the newest and most significant change to Scootaloo's features. Decorating her flank was a single white swan, its wings arched and its neck curved in a posture that Fluttershy had referred to as busking. Scootaloo had recently acquired her cutie mark when demonstrating her passion and dedication to learning the Gale King. Rainbow still remembered the moment in exacting detail quite fondly. As Rainbow came in for a landing, she watched as Scootaloo sank into a crouch. Just as Rainbow's own booted hooves touched down on the ground, Scootaloo kicked off, lunging forward and kicking back with all four legs. At the same moment, her wings blurred in a sweeping motion that started out in front of her before whipping around in tight arcs across her sides. At that instant, her body blurred and she shot forward across the ground. Her acceleration was so swift and sudden that Rainbow briefly lost track of her and had to quickly turn her head to see Scootaloo flaring her wings out like parachutes as she reared up to kick all four hooves out in front of her, bringing her body to an abrupt halt. Scootaloo settled back in the ground, panting and shaking. Her legs were quivering beneath her and Rainbow could see the tremors working their way through Scootaloo's entire body. Even her partially extended wings shook a little as she folded them back in. How long have they been at this? Rainbow wondered. Is it time already? Rainbow jumped at the sound of Dawn's voice. While she had been looking at Scootaloo, he had come over to stand almost directly in front of her. It took Rainbow a second to settle her nerves at having the colt unexpectedly standing so close to her. Yeah, she said, it's time for you two to call it a day. Scootaloo and I have plans. Awesome, said Scootaloo, her voice sounding like a relieved moan. You gonna be okay? Asked Rainbow, looking around. The snow had been cleared from the ground, but that didn't change the fact that the air was still cold. Already, she could see the tired tremors of Scootaloo's worn-out muscles give way to the shivers of a filly who just realized it was cold out. Looking around, Rainbow suddenly spied a set of saddlebags resting on the ground. She could see the end of a scarf protruding from one flap. As she watched, Dawn trotted over the bags and opened the flap of one of the other one. He pulled out a rolled-up towel and tossed to Scootaloo, who quickly took it and used it to gratefully wipe away her sweat. As she worked, a happy sigh escaped the filly. Oh, that feels good, she moaned. Twilight's warming stones are so awesome. Rainbow blinked and looked back at the saddlebags again, realizing that the stone must be hidden inside to keep things warm while the foals practiced. Twilight had invented the stones, which were enchanted to absorb heat, store it, and release it later. Rainbow hadn't realized that Twilight had apparently gotten them to work so well already. It would certainly make things easier for Scootaloo and Dawn with regard to their practices. Rainbow was willing to bet that, after Scootaloo finished toweling off, her winter layers would be waiting inside one of the other saddlebags, already nice and toasty warm. A couple of minutes later, Rainbow's guess was proven right as Scootaloo walked up to the bags and pulled out her winter jacket, as well as her scarf and a set of boots, all of which she put on with relieved groans as the warmed garments settled on her still slightly damp coat. At the other set of saddlebags, Dawn was doing likewise. Rainbow noted that he hadn't needed to towel off after the session, which suggested that he hadn't been working as hard as Scootaloo had been. She admired his resilience to stand around in the cold, even if he hadn't been exercising himself as hard as Scootaloo had been. You ready, Squirt? Asked Rainbow, grinning at her younger sister. Why you bet, stammered Scootaloo, the quiver in her body finding its way into her voice, giving Rainbow pause for a moment. You gonna be able to fly there? Asked Rainbow, eyeing Scootaloo carefully. Why yeah, said Scootaloo. She should be alright, added Dawn, coming up behind Scootaloo and slipping her own saddlebags over her before doing the same with his own. An easy flight should also work as a cool-down exercise, so I'm recommending it. Scootaloo nodded without protest and spread her wings. Rainbow raised her eyebrows but decided that she didn't need to try and dissuade the filly yet. So long as they took it easy and didn't try to pull any fancy moves on the way to Rainbow's cloud house, they should be fine. She watched as Dawn and Scootaloo shared a gentle nuzzle before Scootaloo leaned in to peck her colt friend on the lips. Waving goodbye, Dawn took to the air himself, winging his way back to Ponyville and back to the home he shared with his mother and her colt friend. Turning back to Scootaloo, Rainbow grinned down at the bright orange filly. Let's head out, kiddo. Okay, said Scootaloo, a little weakly, but with plenty of enthusiasm. She returned Rainbow's grin and the two of them lifted off. It was a slow, easy flight back to Rainbow's cloud house. Well, it wasn't exactly Rainbow's anymore. Legally, the cloud house actually belonged to Scootaloo now, though the deed was being held by Scootaloo's mother until the filly came of age. With Scootaloo's permission, Rainbow was allowed to continue using the place for the remainder of her stay, until the time came for her to leave for Cloudsdale. Rainbow figured that kinda made Scootaloo her landlady. You excited about this? She asked as the two of them angled towards the hovering mass of white clouds in the distance. Oh yeah, said Scootaloo with a cheerful grin. Now that Scootaloo was technically the house's owner, Rainbow was taking this opportunity to give the orange filly a rundown on using and maintaining the place once Rainbow was gone. Scootaloo wouldn't actually be permitted to live there on her own until she'd come of age, but she'd still be taking care of it and would have free access to the building otherwise. Seeing that Scootaloo was a little wobbly in the air, Rainbow resisted the urge to just swoop below the filly and carry her the rest of the way. So what were you and Dawn working on? He's teaching me that cool, super speed skip thingy that he does. You know what I'm talking about, right? That thing where he looks like he's teleporting. Rainbow nodded at Scootaloo's words. She knew exactly what the filly was talking about. One of the skills Dawn had acquired from the Gale King was a trick that allowed him to rapidly accelerate over a short distance and come to a stop just as quickly. At times, the colt could make it look like he was teleporting, or even look like he was in two places at once. Rainbow herself was no slouch in the speed department, considering that she was rated as one of, if not the fastest flyer in all of Equestria. But even she couldn't achieve that kind of sudden acceleration, even if she was much faster in the long run. That didn't quite look like what you were doing, she pointed out. What she'd seen Scootaloo doing had looked nothing like Dawn's trick. That's 'cause I haven't finished working on it yet, Scootaloo pointed out. Right now, Dawn's just trying to get me used to pulling off the start. Then he'll have me work on making the stop smoother. It's tricky because you have to use your hooves and wings together and everything needs to be done in the right sequence or it doesn't work properly. It went without saying that Scootaloo hadn't exactly gotten the sequence down yet. In fact, she'd made the same observations Rainbow had when Dawn had first been walking her through the maneuver. But that doesn't look anything like what you do, Scootaloo pointed out as Dawn's hooves settled back in the ground. Because it isn't, Dawn said. In a sense, you could say that this is the beginner's version. Right now, we're working on getting you used to the mechanics of the technique. But you hardly move your wings at all, Scootaloo pointed out. Dawn nodded. The more familiar you become with the technique, the more compact and easier your movements will become. Start out large and work your way small. Oh okay, said Scootaloo nervously. The principle behind the move was surprisingly simple. Using all four of her hooves, she would kick off the air, using her Pegasus magic. At the same time, the sweeping motion of her wings would guide the air in front of her around her body to reduce her drag almost to nothing, allowing her to accelerate rapidly without having to worry about wind resistance. In practice, it wasn't so easy to do those things all together in a single technique, even though Scootaloo had practiced with each component separately. Alright, go ahead and give it a try, said Dawn, clearing out in front of Scootaloo. Work on going directly forward for now. Once you have that down, we can work on the other directions. Swallowing nervously, Scootaloo nodded and crouched slightly. As she pushed off with her legs, sending out her Pegasus magic to push off against the air itself, she thrust the tips of her wings forward before sweeping them back in tight arcs, launching herself straight ahead. For an instant, Scootaloo thought she'd hit a brick wall that broke across her face. Her eyes stung as she forced through and the resistance slammed into her shoulders and chest as well. Less than a second later, it was gone. Her wings flared out, causing her body to rear up. On reflex, Scootaloo kicked ahead of herself with all four of her legs, sending out bursts of wind that slowed her down and allowed her to drift back to the ground. At the same time, her ears caught the sound of a loud pop behind her. Not bad for the first time, remarked Dawn, coming up to stand by her. Can you tell me what you think you did wrong? My timing was off, said Scootaloo. I started with my wings too soon and the air resistance returned before I was all the way through the move. That's part of it, agreed Dawn. However, there is another issue. Scootaloo blinked. There is. Dawn nodded. You are still thinking of your wings as a means of propulsion. For this technique, that is not their purpose. In order to do this, you have to rely on your hooves and legs to provide the drive. The purpose of your wings is to guide the air around your body so that you accelerate smoothly. Otherwise, you simply hit the air further ahead. At the same time, rapidly leaving your original position leaves a sort of vacuum, which creates drag, which slows you further. When done correctly, the air that you move out of your way ahead of you fills the space behind you so that the vacuum doesn't pull you back. That's why it's important that you keep the arc of your wing strokes tight. Scootaloo nodded. Okay, she said. Ready to try again? Asked Dawn. Yeah. Then begin. Now that practice was over, Scootaloo's muscles ached fiercely. Using her legs to push off so sharply had quickly begun to hurt after several repetitions and she felt the strain all the way through the muscles around her core. Her wings were sore too, given that Scootaloo wasn't used to moving them in such tight, close motions. Spreading them out to slow her down after accelerating hadn't helped either. From her perspective, Scootaloo's entire body was a mass of aches and pains. So it was with a grateful sigh that her hooves came to rest on the packed clouds of Rainbow's front porch. Rainbow put a hoof to her mouth to stifle a chuckle when she noted that Scootaloo looked about ready to faceplant on the porch right then and there. Come on, Squirt, let's get you inside. It's a lot warmer in there. Scootaloo mumbled a wordless agreement, mostly in the form of noncommittal grunts, and managed to get her hooves all the way back under her and walk the rest of the way to the door. When they got inside, Rainbow took their jackets and scarves while she left the boots on the mat inside the door. When one lived in a house made of clouds, one had to make sure that there was a way to make sure non-cloud objects that weren't buoyed up by Pegasus magic didn't immediately fall through. One solution was Skysteel, which was steel with cloud worked in via Pegasus magic during the forging process. It was expensive and having furniture made of Skysteel was usually a sign of wealth and status. For ponies with less money available to them, one had to get creative. Even if Skysteel furniture was out, one could easily buy legs and supports made from Skysteel to hold them up, but even those were a pretty penny and Rainbow didn't have many such accoutrements. Instead, she used the same trick that most cloud-dwelling Pegasi did, one that was free, but that required a fair bit of effort and commitment to maintain. For surfaces like tables, counters, the mat that the boots rested on, the hooks that the saddlebags and winter layers hung from, Rainbow had sculpted and compacted cloud well past the usual standard for cloud furniture. Under normal circumstances, the packed cloud would precipitate. But by putting her magic into the compacted cloud, Rainbow kept it from doing so, fueling the cloud and keeping it in its current state by feeding it a stream of Pegasus magic until it couldn't contain any more. Items made that way could maintain their solidity for up to 6 months. If Rainbow didn't recharge the magic in them by then, they would revert back to their state as highly concentrated moisture and simply rain out, dropping whatever was resting on them in the process. Rainbow had always made sure to recharge her surfaces every 2 months. Under normal circumstances, a pony like her, who was usually less than well organized, could easily lose track of the different surfaces in different rooms that had to be fixed that way. But Rainbow had a few advantages, the same as any other Pegasus. Even a beginner-level cloud handler could sense the consistency and density of a cloud just by touching it. Furthermore, the solid-state surfaces, as Rainbow called them, had been shaped and molded into flat, smooth surfaces that stood out against the lumpy, puffy texture of normal clouds. Finally, when said surfaces were nearing the limits of their magical charge, they took on a grayish tint, like a building storm cloud. With those indicators, Rainbow had only missed recharging a surface a couple of times in the course of her ownership of the house. It also helped that Rainbow had built nearly the whole place with her own hooves, including the solid-state surfaces. Scootaloo obviously wouldn't have those advantages when she moved in, so she'd have to learn where all the important surfaces were, how to keep track of them, how to recharge them, and figure out how to remember where they all were and made sure she got to all of them in time. Note to self, make sure Scootaloo doesn't keep anything important here until she's got the hang of that. But that could come later. It was one of the many things that Rainbow would be teaching the filly about being the owner of a cloud house, but some things were more important than others. Sue. Scootaloo's attempt to speak was cut off by her yawn. What are we doing first? Right, said Rainbow with a wry smile. The first thing I'm gonna teach ya, Squirt, is how to use the shower. Huh. Rainbow chuckled. I bet your body hurts something fierce. At Scootaloo's nod, she chuckled. A nice warm shower will help relax those muscles so that they don't cramp up on you. Plus, it'll feel good after being out in the cold like you were. You've already done your cool down exercises, so it'll be good for you. Scootaloo nodded eagerly, liking the idea. Okay. Rainbow led Scootaloo to the bathroom. She showed the filly how to operate the shower and set the temperature. The shower stall itself was a square space carved from the cloud walls with a rain cloud hovering overhead. Said rain cloud was connected to a thunderhead, which regulated the water's temperature as it rained down on the pony in the stall. It was an intricate piece of work, one few items that Rainbow had not made herself when building the house. Leaving Scootaloo to enjoy the shower, once they'd found the right temperature for her, Rainbow headed into the kitchen and began to root around in the icebox, looking for the right stuff to fix a growing filly's post-workout meal. Rainbow was in the midst of grating a block of cheddar when Scootaloo came ambling into the kitchen, practically glowing after her shower. There was still a slight sag in the filly's posture, an indicator of just how tired she was. But she was clearly eager for more instruction about living in a cloud house. What's next? She asked. I'm glad you asked, said Rainbow with a laugh. Let me show you how to use the stove. The stove. Scootaloo blinked and stared at her idol in stupefied amazement for a moment. I didn't know you could cook, Rainbow Dash. Rainbow couldn't help herself. She gave Scootaloo a flat look. Yeah, of course I can cook. I'm not a 3-star chef, but I can whip up a decent meal. Scootaloo blushed and grinned sheepishly. Sorry. Rainbow sighed. Sorry about that. I've had ponies make those kinds of assumptions about me before, but I can cook. You kinda have to if you want to be an athlete, much less a wonderbolt. You've gotta learn to take care of your body, which includes taking care of what you put inside of it. Rainbow showed Scootaloo how to turn on the stove, how it worked, and set a frying pan on top of one of the electrical burners to heat up while she worked. Rainbow turned to the counter and picked up one of the 4 eggs she'd gotten out of the icebox and cracking it on the counter. She opened it into a separator that she held over a copper bowl, setting the yolk aside in a separate vessel. She did the same with a second egg. Then, taking a whisk, she whipped the egg whites into a heady froth. Taking the yolks, Rainbow used a fork to beat them into a light, creamy consistency before quickly folding them back into the whipped egg whites. She then quickly poured the mixture into the frying pan, swirling it about as the curds began to coagulate in the heat, forming a thin, solid layer along the bottom and sides of the pan. She then tossed the filling onto the egg curds, the grated cheddar, a few sliced artichoke hearts, and some smoked salmon. Using a spatula, Rainbow folded the eggs over so that the fillings were completely enclosed and then slid the completed omelet onto the plate. Whoa, exclaimed Scootaloo as Rainbow set the omelet on the table. It looked a little different from the omelets her mother made. As she watched, Rainbow topped the whole thing off with a generous helping of salsa and a dollop of sour cream. There you go, said Rainbow triumphantly, eat up before it gets cold. Okay, shouted Scootaloo eagerly, picking up her fork and diving in. The omelet was delicious. The whipped egg whites gave it a fluffy texture, almost like a souffle. The fillings weren't Scootaloo's personal favorites, but she had to admit that they tasted really good, especially the smoked salmon. She devoured the whole thing with a gusto before settling back with a satisfied sigh, finishing just as Rainbow took a seat at the table with an omelet of her own. That was awesome, said Scootaloo, patting her stomach. Thoughts it, said Rainbow with a giggle, it's good meal for after a workout. Eggs and salmon both have plenty of protein, so they're good for helping build up your muscles after you've exercised them. Where'd you learn to cook like that? Asked Scootaloo. From my dad, said Rainbow, this was my favorite food growing up. He always made these omelets for breakfast on the weekends. We used to have fun experimenting with all the different things we'd put into them. Why'd you stop? Asked Scootaloo. Rainbow raised an eyebrow. I moved out. As much as I like Dad's cooking and as much as he may have loved cooking for me, I don't think he wanted to fly to Ponyville every Saturday to make me breakfast. And, while his cooking was good, I don't quite think I'm up to flying out to him every weekend either. That got an embarrassed chuckle from the filly. Oh. Ya gotta learn to take care of yourself, kiddo, said Rainbow. Your mom's not gonna be able to do it forever and she shouldn't have to. Right, said Scootaloo, but couldn't you just get stuff from one of those fancy health food stores that are all the rage right now? Rainbow's wing extended, all of her primaries folded over, save for two. Two things, she said sagely. First off, eating like that is expensive. It's not the kind of thing to try on a weather pony's budget unless you're really high up the chain. I don't know what job you'll end up with, but chances are that you aren't gonna start out at a level that'll let you eat like that regularly. The inside feather folded down. Secondly, even health food stuff can have some questionable ingredients in it. When you make your own food, you're in full control of what goes into what you cook. That's good for a lot of reasons. There were a lot of particulars to that last statement, but Rainbow didn't feel like going into the nitty-gritty details at the moment. That could come later. She finished her omelet at a more sedate pace, watching as Scootaloo's eyelids began to droop. The filly had just finished a hard workout, taken a nice warm shower, and had a good meal. Now it was all beginning to catch up to her as her body relaxed from its previous exertions. I guess it's a good thing I got Melon's permission for this, thought Rainbow as a fond smile played across her lips. It had been a while since the last time she'd had Scootaloo all to herself. It had been even longer since she'd had Scootaloo for a sleepover of some sort and never at her house before. Rainbow dearly wished she'd taken more advantage of all the opportunities she'd gotten to spend time with her little sister. But she was determined to make the most of the time that she had left. All right, said Rainbow, setting down her own fork before letting out a loud belch, let's get this cleaned up and get ready for bed. Huh, yelped Scootaloo, jerking out of her tired days. But what about the house? Rainbow chuckled. I'll teach you some more about it tomorrow, she said. We've got plenty of time, so there's no need to cram. Besides, you look like you could use some sleep. I guess I should head home soon, said Scootaloo, her ears drooping. Nope, said Rainbow proudly. I checked with your mom earlier. You're good to stay here for the night. The filly's ears shot back upright. Really? Yep, replied Rainbow, so come on. Let's get this cleaned up. It was relatively simple to show Scootaloo how the sink worked and how to clean dishes in the cloud house. The important part was not to let anything small slip into the drain, or it would be a straight drop to the ground for the unfortunate item. The filly fumbled a couple of times, as much from tiredness as her unfamiliarity with cloud appliances, but managed to help with the cleaning. After that, it was back to the bathroom, so that they could brush their teeth and get cleaned up for bed. Rainbow led Scootaloo to the bedroom and helped her into the bed. Thanks for everything, Rainbow, said Scootaloo. Rainbow climbed in next to the filly and pulled the covers over both of them. You're welcome, Squirt. You're the best little sister I could ever ask for. Scootaloo wriggled around until she'd snuggled up against Rainbow, who wrapped a four-leg and wing around her. There, draped in the warmth of the clouds, the two of them drifted off to sleep. Author's notes. And so it begins again. I'm sorry it took so long for me to get this up. Look to my blog if you're wondering why. Anyhow, I figured to get things started with a hefty dose of waff before getting to the really serious stuff. Once again, this was one of those stories that continued to grow as I wrote it, which means that the final product ended up being much longer than I'd originally planned, which is just as well, given that we're approaching the climax of the series. Next chapter, Twilight plays hostess. Meeting of Minds. Chapter 2, Meeting of Minds. Ooh, I'm not sure about this, moaned Twilight Sparkle as she paced back and forth frantically along the platform. Not to be a jerk, but I'd like to point out that you're the one who made me send the letter, said Spike, looking none too pleased with Twilight's antics. If you weren't sure about it, you shouldn't have accepted his offer. I know, snapped Twilight, but I can't help but wonder what angle he's working. What the hey is he after? What does he gain by coming to talk to me in Ponyville? There's only one way to find out, replied Spike. He watched Twilight trot back and forth for a few more minutes before raising an eyebrow. Are you sure you don't want me to get Arkenstone? No, shouted Twilight, freezing in place before whirling around to face Spike directly. I already told Arky I could handle this. None of my training will be worth anything if he has to look over my shoulder all the time. Spike snorted, sending twin emerald streams of flame spurting out his nostrils. As always, it was frustrating to watch Twilight worry herself into a fit every time something like this happened. But there was little that he could do to stop it short of dumping a bucket of water on her head, which given that it was in the dead of winter, wouldn't be much appreciated and would probably do more harm than good. At least it was easier to get Twilight's attention now that he was at eye level with her when he reared up on his hind legs. Spike's purple-scaled body had been growing all throughout the winter, his back, tail, and neck elongating a little more with each passing week. His face was quickly losing the chubby baby fat that had defined its shape for years and was slowly stretching outwards, now looking slightly more angular, with his snout morphing into something of a beak-like shape. His new wings, which had grown out of his back over the summer, were a fair bit larger now, actually stretching out past his shoulders. Though they were still too small to carry the young dragon in flight, their growth was the best marker of how much Spike had grown over the past few months. Twilight was still Twilight, of course. She hadn't changed all that much over the months, in looks or personality. Not even getting herself a cold friend had done much to tone down the perpetual worrier part of her personality, and she would agonize constantly over the most banal trivialities imaginable. Not to mention that Spike still didn't trust her by herself in the kitchen very much. The whistle in the distance made Twilight freeze yet again, her head whipping around to follow the tracks that led up to the city of Canterlot. A plume of smoke in the near distance heralded the approaching train. He's almost here, Twilight squeaked, quivering. Am I ready? Of course I am. I've reviewed everything 5 times. 10 times, corrected Spike. 10 times. I've got this. I can do this. How do I look? Spike raised an eyebrow, like you're gonna blow a gasket if you don't calm down. I know you're worried about what this guy can do, but isn't showing so much anxiety the worst thing to do around a member of the noble court? Twilight groaned. Of course, you're right. Raising a hoof to her chest, Twilight took a deep breath before slowly letting it out. As she did, the tension began to flow out of her body and she began to relax a little. Spike couldn't help but smirk at the sight of it. That calming technique Cadence showed her is practically a miracle worker. A few minutes later, the Ponyville train platform began to vibrate as the train drew closer, accompanied by the squealing of brakes as they worked to slow the behemoth vehicle down. Gradually, it came to a shuddering halt next to the platform. Spike used a hand to back Twilight up a little so that the ponies on the train would have room to disembark once the doors opened. The crowd that emerged from the cars was light. Now that heartwarming was over, there weren't as many ponies with a reason to travel and even fewer who had legitimate reason to visit Ponyville. It wasn't like the village was a major tourist destination or anything. However, Twilight and Spike's attention wasn't on the regular cars. Rather, they gravitated towards the car that had been coupled between the rest of the passenger cars and the caboose. It was one of the luxury private cars favored by ponies of the noble class, most of whom loathed the idea of sharing space with the common ponies, even those wealthy enough to afford first-class passage. The car itself was practically a hotel suite on rails. It would contain a luxurious bedroom, a sitting and dining room, and even its own kitchen where the passengers' servants could fix meals for their employer. Practically every single one of the Canterlot nobility had their own car, which could be coupled onto any train to carry them to any part of Equestria. Some even owned multiple such cars. The elaborateness of the furnishings served to declare the wealth and status of the occupant to the few privileged enough to be allowed on board. Even as Twilight and Spike watched, members of the station staff were already going through the process of uncoupling the car so that it could be towed to an adjoining track, allowing the train to continue on its way without the car and so that the car could be coupled to another train heading back to Canterlot at a later time. The doors to the private car slid open, allowing a pair of unicorns clad in light leather armor with steel edges. The steel had been colored a light purple color, which set it apart from the brown of the leather. Twilight found herself wondering nervously just where that leather had come from. "Ah, Dame Sparkle," said a stallion in a smooth voice as he appeared in the doorway of the car. "Thank you for being so kind as to greet me at the station." His coat was a light purple color, only a shade off from Twilight's own, though most of it was concealed by the stark white suit jacket that he wore. His mane, likewise, was a darker purple that, again, came close to mirroring Twilight's, albeit without the streak of hot pink that ran through Twilight's own mane and tail. His eyes, however, were a dark shade of brown, intelligent and calm as they looked out at the mare and the dragon. His expression was warm and friendly, surprisingly lacking the arrogance and condescension that seemed to characterize ponies of the noble class, particularly when they had to deal with a pony like Twilight, who had been knighted for her part in the defeat of Discord. As far as most nobles were concerned, Twilight still counted as a commoner for the most part, and few of them seemed to think that the nobility she had been conferred was remotely equivalent to the nobility that they had been born with. Twilight bowed her head, bending her forelegs to lower her stature a little, as was appropriate for greeting a fellow noble of superior rank. "It's an honor to have you visit my humble home, Lord Baron." Baron Elderflower of Dream Valley smiled a little bit wider at Twilight's formality, as though her display had pleased him. He lifted his head all the way up and inhaled deeply, as though he were trying to savor the fresh country air. Exhaling back out his nostrils, he returned his attention to Twilight, still smiling. "Humble though it may be, there is certainly a quaint charm to this place. I can see why you enjoy it, sir. It's certainly a pleasant change of pace from Canterlot." That was a reach, considering he hadn't even stepped outside of his private car yet, much less seen any of Ponyville up close and personal. Sure, even from a distance, the town exuded a wonderful, rustic charm that had attracted any number of visitors. However, one had to actually walk down the streets to truly get a sense of the life and energy that ran through the village. The voices of the stallion and mare working to uncouple the Baron's car reached their ears. His coming to Ponyville had created a lot of extra work for the train crew. The caboose and his private car would have be towed onto a separate track, then the caboose would have to be towed back so that it could be reattached to rear of the train. Ponyville Station, not exactly being a hub of commerce, didn't give them a lot of room to maneuver, and they couldn't afford to take too long if they wanted to keep to their regular timetable. Nonetheless, Elderflower didn't take a step past the door. In fact, a light flick of one ear was the only acknowledgement to the voices, as though he had all the time in the world and the petty concerns of the working pony didn't mean a thing to him, which they probably didn't. After all, who was he to care if some commoners got their schedules messed up? It set both Twilight and Spike's nerves on edge, one of those things that showed through the Baron's kindly, personable demeanor and showed that he was a pony who set himself apart from others and considered them beneath himself. Since we have this opportunity, said Elderflower, I am more than happy to invite you to join me in here. I assure you that it is perfectly comfortable, if a bit Spartan for my tastes, and that we can talk easily. I have a fine selection of drinks on offer that we can enjoy while we talk. Twilight gave the Baron a brittle smile. Thank you for your kind offer, my lord, but I am more than happy to host you in my home. I understand that it is probably beneath your usual standards, but I assure you that it will serve well enough. Elderflower inclined his head toward them in the barest hint of a suggestion of a nod. Of course, he said, I am here at your indulgence, Dame Sparkle. I am happy to hold our conversation in the venue of your choice. It would be rude otherwise. Only then did he step leisurely down from the car and away from the door, giving Twilight and Spike a clear view of his cutie mark, a bookshelf full of neatly arranged books, in the process. His two guards moved with him. There was barely any delay as two powerfully built earth ponies harnessed themselves to the caboose, pulling it in the private car away from the rear of the train. There was a sense of urgency to their movements that prompted Twilight and Spike to throw them an apologetic glance as they worked. However, the Baron's eyes didn't so much as twitch in their direction. I am grateful, Lord Baron, said Twilight, returning her attention to Elderflower. Please follow me. By all means, said Elderflower, his polite smile still in place. Let on. Coco, be a dear and fetch me the red velvet, please, called Rarity from the far side of the workroom, where the sewing machine hummed relentlessly. Right away, Coco Pommel called back as she rushed to retrieve the roll of fabric from its cubbyhole, moving carefully not to disturb or trip over the numerous items strewn across nearly every available horizontal surface as she did. Having worked as an assistant and apprentice to two other designers, Coco was more than a little familiar with the idea of organized chaos. Every designer had their own arrangements that suited the way they worked best, even if it did look messy. The off-white earth pony reared up so that she could clench her teeth onto the edge of the fabric and pull the roll from its resting place. Fortunately, it was low enough that she didn't need a stepladder to retrieve it. Rarity's workroom had been designed and organized with a unicorn in mind. For a pony with telekinesis, the height of a particular shelf was less of an issue. In fact, a stepladder was the first of a fair few accommodations Rarity had needed to make in order to allow the apprentice designer to work effectively. Coco shouldered the red velvet with a toss of her two-tone cyan mane and quickly toted it over towards Rarity. She set the roll onto the table next to where Rarity was working, but not so close that it might roll on top of the fabric Rarity was currently feeding into the sewing machine. How are those hems coming along? Asked Rarity without looking up. I'm nearly finished, replied Coco, only a few more stitches. Wonderful, I'll check your work in a little bit. When you're finished, could you take the finished pieces out and set up the displays for them? Of course, replied Coco with a smile and quickly returned to finish her own task. Working for Rarity was a demanding task. Even when she wasn't working on a commission, the alabaster unicorn always seemed to be working on something, either tinkering with an existing design or playing around to come up with something new. She was always inquiring for Coco's input as well, asking the younger mare's opinion on her work and demanding honest expression. The illusion of a faultless designer who could spin masterpieces out of thin air with nary a thought had been almost immediately dashed to pieces. Granted, Coco realized that she should have known better than to think that Rarity was some kind of maestro of effortless creativity. She soon realized that Rarity worked very hard to achieve the success for which she was renowned. It didn't diminish the respect and awe that Coco viewed Rarity with. Rather, the revelation only increased Coco's respect for Rarity. The fact that Rarity was more than willing to both solicit and listen to Coco's opinions about her work only made Coco admire her further. After all, Suri Polymer hadn't cared one whit what Coco thought, not that Suri had done much of her own work, only what she couldn't foist off on Coco. Even more amazingly, Rarity allowed Coco to experiment on a few designs as well. She'd happily provided Coco with her own space in the workroom and even a supply of her own materials to allow Coco to try her hoof at her own designs. Rarity critiqued Coco's works with the very same acute attention to detail that she expected Coco to examine her own designs with. As a consequence, a few of Coco's own creations now stood on display in the Carousel Boutique's showroom, a shocking surprise to Coco, as she'd never expected Rarity to allow an apprentice's work to be showcased alongside her own. It was the work of a few minutes to finish attaching the hem to the dress Coco had been working on. Setting it aside, she took the completed dresses Rarity had designated and carried them out into the showroom to set about hanging them on ponyquins and setting them on display. It was less easy for Coco, who had to make do without levitation or any of the fine manipulation that magic would afford a unicorn. But it was something she was well practiced with and it didn't take her long to get everything set up. She was setting one of the pieces on display up to be more visible through the window when she happened to look out. There, amongst the ponies coming and going along the street, were Twilight Sparkle and her dragon assistant, Spike. Coco had been amazed to meet and talk to an actual dragon, albeit a young one. She'd found Spike a charming and erudite young fellow, with a rather sharp wit as it turned out. On the other hoof, Twilight Sparkle was an amazing pony, if rather flighty and more interested in talking about books, things she had read in books, and things she'd heard that books had been written about than anything else. Coco could see why both of them were such close friends with Rarity, despite their quirks. However, her attention was stolen by the stallion walking along with them, a stallion who was all too familiar Coco, even though she'd only met him once, a few months ago, back in the crystal caverns underneath Canterlot. With a startled squeak, Coco ducked down beneath the window, her body trembling. She felt as though her blood had turned to ice in her veins and she shivered violently from head to hoof tip. Why is he here? What does he want? Did he see me? Carefully, Coco raised her head so that her cyan eyes could rise above the level of the windowsill and look out into the street. Baron Elderflower, Spike, and Twilight were walking off down the street, their backs to the boutique as they headed towards the library, where Spike and Twilight lived. There seemed to be no indication that Elderflower had noticed Coco at all. She let out a quiet sigh of relief and struggled to stand back up. Fear had turned her limbs to rubber. Miss Rarity, Coco called into the workroom. Yes dear, what is it? Rarity sang back, clearly still immersed in her own work. I need to take a moment to use the bathroom, Coco called back, her voice wavering as she fought a war against her own nerves. By all means, go right ahead, Rarity answered. You know you don't have to ask me about that. All right. Coco headed up the stairs and into the living quarters above the boutique, where the bathrooms were. She stepped into the bathroom and closed the door behind her before locking it. Only when the latch clicked into place did Coco slump to the floor and let out a sound that was halfway between a sob and a sigh. It hadn't been that long since she'd come down from Canterlot with Rarity, having transferred her apprenticeship from the aging seamstress she'd previously worked under, after Surrey, of course, to the Ponyville designer. Before she'd left, Coco had endured a conversation with one Perlin Bluestreak, a mercenary in the Baron's employ. She'd first seen the young stallion deep in the caverns below Canterlot slaughtering 2 score of trained bodyguards with almost contemptuous ease, a scene that had driven a paralyzing fear of him down into the marrow of her bones. To make matters worse, Perlin had apparently taken some kind of interest in her, frequently visiting her at her new job, a position she had the Baron to thank for, and hovering behind her, often watching silently. Coco's last conversation with Perlin had made it painfully clear that Coco owed her new position as Rarity's official apprentice to the Baron's manipulations. Perlin had also made it quite clear that the Baron considered her to still be in his service. The revelation had instilled a sense of quiet dread in Coco that hovered over her in a manner not unlike Perlin's presence had in the days since that fateful conversation. The blissful, dream-come-true sense of actually working for and with Rarity had abated that dread somewhat. But the sight of Baron Elderflower walking outside had brought that dread back out and even magnified it. She couldn't imagine what he expected her to do, but Coco knew that, when he gave the order, she would have to carry it out or she would feel the chill of Perlin's mithril feathers soon enough. Of course, carrying out whatever sick, despicable order the Baron gave her would probably mean the end of Coco's fashion career and the termination of Rarity's regard for her. Her life or her life's calling. Either one would come to an end the moment Baron Elderflower ordered her into action, and Coco wasn't entirely sure which was worse. She lay there, shivering on the floor for some time before forcing herself up. She couldn't afford to let Rarity start worrying about her, which Rarity almost certainly would if Coco spent too much time in the bathroom. Please, she pleaded silently, not caring that the Baron couldn't hear her. Please don't ask anything of me yet. Let me have this dream a little longer. Baron Elderflower followed Twilight Sparkle, hanging a little bit behind and to the right of her through the streets of Ponyville. Walking on her left side, level to her shoulder, was the young dragon who had accompanied her. The Baron's 2 guards followed slightly behind them. Elderflower hadn't been the slightest bit surprised when he realized that Twilight intended for them to walk all the way from the station. The town wasn't very large, so a carriage wouldn't have been practical anyway. The crisp, cool air was not unpleasant, though Elderflower thought himself a little underdressed for the weather. A mild warming spell had quickly remedied the problem. He hadn't been at all disappointed that Twilight had declined to join him in his private car, her response to his offer carrying all the caution of a fish studiously avoiding taking the bait, fully aware of the hook hidden inside. It was perhaps an unnecessary caution on Twilight's part. Although it would have been easy to drug her and spirit her back to Canterlot while she was inside his car, Elderflower hadn't made any particular plans towards that end. Not that he hadn't entertained the possibility. If nothing else, Elderflower prided himself on his ability to improvise to take the fullest advantage of the situation. However, trying something so overt and forceful was a greater risk than he was willing to take at this juncture. But worth considering in the future, he mused, though he hoped that he could swing Twilight around with simple logic and rational argument, it was more likely that he would ultimately have to resort to other methods to make her more pliable towards his way of thinking. Elderflower decided to turn his thoughts towards reviewing what he knew of Twilight Sparkle. Like all the nobility, he had, of course, conducted extensive research into her and her history. She had been born to common parents, neither of whom had been earmarked as being exceptionally talented. She was the younger of 2 foals, her older brother going on to enter the royal guard, become captain, and eventually marry Princess Cadence, which linked Twilight to the royal family by blood. Twilight herself had shown a surprising degree of intelligence and aptitude at an early age, prompting her parents to try and enroll her in Princess Celestia's school for gifted unicorns, a difficult prospect given her family's limited finances. During the entrance examination, Twilight's magic unexpectedly flared while being tested on a dragon's egg, hatching the egg into the baby dragon now walking by her side. Impressed by the raw potential of the filly, Princess Celestia made Twilight her personal student on the spot. From there on, Twilight's progress through the school had been nothing short of meteoric. Between Princess Celestia's instruction and her own phenomenal talents, Twilight excelled in nearly every single one of her classes. Elderflower remembered some of this himself. He had only been 2 years ahead of Twilight when she'd entered the school. It had only taken her 1.5 years to completely overtake him and all his peers. By the time she officially graduated from the school itself, Twilight had been recognized for earning no fewer than 3 principals, an almost superquine feat of brilliance. Not much later, she journeyed to Ponyville and managed to unlock the elements of harmony, defeating Nightmare Moon and restoring Princess Luna after 1,000 years of absence in the process. Later on, she successfully re-imprisoned Discord after he escaped and was officially knighted, along with her helpers, by Princess Celestia. Throughout all of this, she had remained in Ponyville as its resident librarian, evidently continuing to further her education. All of this was of little actual interest to Elderflower, as it was general minutiae that just about any pony could have dug up about Twilight Sparkle. His own memories of her were rather sparse, seeing as he had only observed her in passing during the years they had spent in school together. She, of course, had been an object of fascination from the moment of her admission. The fact that she'd been made Princess Celestia's personal student, in spite of her unremarkable lineage, had marked her out to all the ponies attending the school, particularly those from noble bloodlines, more than a few of whom thought that Twilight's status was a personal insult against them. Elderflower himself had known better, even then. It had become quickly obvious just why Celestia had taken Twilight on from the moment the Lavender Filly's name appeared at the top of the class rankings almost immediately after her entrance. The reason became even more apparent when Twilight was quickly advanced through classes and still managed to remain at the top amongst students a year or more her senior. Her raw magical potential was a talent not seen in centuries, possibly millennia even, along with a mind to match. She also isn't bad to look at, noticed Elderflower, discreetly eyeing Twilight as they proceeded along. Granted, she didn't display the cultured elegance of a true Canterlot unicorn, her commoner sensibilities showing through quite clearly in her simple state of dress, which was nothing more than a jacket, scarf, and boots to ward off the winter chill. That wasn't to say that she was unappealing. The word that Elderflower would use to describe her was definitely cute. As potential consorts went, the Baron reasoned that he could definitely do worse. Her magical talent certainly more than made up for any lack in physical appeal. He was fairly certain that a mage of her power would bear equally, if not even more powerful foals. That was assuming, of course, that such a relationship was in the cards. Unlike Steel Flint, Elderflower knew better than to bank on such a direct approach, taking advantage of Twilight's connection to the princesses. He doubted he would have any success in that department anyway, given that she was probably still smitten with that earth pony she had attended Steel Flint's gathering with. Elderflower knew better than to underestimate that Arkenstone fellow. For all that he was an earth pony, he had still entered into a duel with Steel Flint, a stallion known for his prowess in battle magic, and had somehow emerged victorious. There was a great deal more to Arkenstone than met the eye, and Elderflower would have to mind him carefully. Elderflower had also researched Arkenstone's history. The results had been much more spotty than Twilight Sparkle's. Arkenstone had been born to the butler of the Duchy of Paradise estate and had been raised to be the personal butler to none other than Prince Blueblood. During his foalhood, Arkenstone had been a close friend to Twilight's older brother, and apparently Twilight by proxy. Then, for reasons unknown, Arkenstone abandoned the original career path set out by his family and journeyed to Ponyville. It had been difficult to ascertain what he'd been doing, but all the evidence seemed to suggest he'd spent his time on the farmstead that would later become famous for being home to Applejack, the bearer of the element of honesty. From there, things only got more difficult still to track. Arkenstone had seemingly wandered aimlessly, even leaving Equestria behind and traveling through Saddle Arabia, possibly as far as Guaxia, before returning. Sporadic reports had him in various communities holding any number and variety of jobs, almost all of them being utterly menial. Only recently had he returned to Ponyville and settled down to open a tea house of all things. Ultimately, none of this was particularly useful in determining what Arkenstone was capable of. All that Elderflower could determine was that Arkenstone was a dangerous obstacle, one that needed either be circumvented or removed. But that can wait for now, thought Elderflower. If I can convince Twilight Sparkle to see reason, then it may not even be necessary. Though his bloodline would definitely benefit from Twilight's inclusion in it, not to mention how his status would benefit from having a personal pipeline to the royal family, that was not necessary to his plans. Though it would be a pleasant bonus. And here we are, said Twilight proudly. Elderflower couldn't keep his jaw from dropping slightly at the sight of their destination. He'd read the reports, but lifeless text on paper couldn't compare to the sight of an actual living tree with doors and windows set into it, and even a balcony protruding from an upper story. It was a marvel in its own right. Such a building, if it could even truly be called a building, would have had no place in Canterlot. But it looked right at home, here in the middle of rustic Ponyville. Twilight opened the door wide, revealing the interior of what was unquestionably a library. That was less surprising than the nature of the building itself. Elderflower already knew that Twilight lived in a library from the reports, and it was completely in line with her character. Even when she had been a student at Celestia's school, Twilight had eschewed living in the regular student housing for making a home for herself in one of the annexes to the Royal Archives, practically setting up her own personal library from the texts she acquired thanks to her connections as Princess Celestia's student. A lot of her fellow students had seen the move as arrogant, believing that Twilight was setting herself apart from the rest of them to mark herself as superior. However, Elderflower had realized even then that she'd been using her connections and privileges to do the only thing she really cared about, furthering her studies to the exclusion of all else, even interaction with other ponies. The interior of the library had been carved out of the wood of the tree itself. The ground floor was a single large room, lined with shelves. There were doors leading out presumably to other rooms, but those other rooms seemed to be for private use, given that there was no sign that any of the library's patrons were using them. Aside from that, a single staircase wound up the wall, running along the rising tops of bookshelves to reach an alcove that formed the entirety of the second story. From his position on the ground floor, Elderflower could see the furnishings of a bedroom up above. Those were clearly Twilight's living quarters then. They were not alone. There wasn't a huge throng, but there were a few ponies wandering about. A couple were examining titles on the shelves while a few others were reading around a single large table that occupied the center of the room. Right this way, my lord, said Twilight, heading for the stairs. Elderflower followed behind her, while his guards once again brought up the rear. He noticed that the dragon had peeled away and was making for one of the other doors. As the young drake pushed the door open, Elderflower's eyes made out the fixtures of a kitchen that lay beyond. He continued to follow Twilight up the stairs. The lavender mare was stripping off her winter clothes as she went, her magic floating them over to pegs to hang from, while the boots drifted to a mat by the door. They entered into the bedroom alcove, not even pausing as Twilight led them out onto the balcony. Elderflower raised an eyebrow as he stepped, not into the biting cold of a waning winter's day, but the pleasant warmth of a sunny spring day. His eyes caught the faintest violet flickers in the air, forming a faint, almost invisible barrier that had been wrapped around the edge of the balcony. Temperature wards and a climate control spell. Both of them are so finely woven as to be nearly invisible. There were probably privacy wards as well to keep the odd passerby from overhearing their conversation. It was an impressive feat, to say the least, a fine reminder of Twilight's skill as a mage. She'd obviously prepared for their meeting. A table had been set out on the balcony, along with cushions. As meeting places went, they might as well have been sitting on rocks in the wilderness. Most nobles would have considered such arrangements to be openly insulting at best. However, Elderflower thought that the sheer novelty of the location made up for the lack of creature comfort somewhat. Besides, this is probably the best she can do with her limited means, thought Elderflower. I'll just appreciate the effort that she went through. Twilight and Elderflower took seats across the table from each other, sitting down nearly in unison. The two guards that had accompanied the Baron positioned themselves inside the door, looking out over the library. Spike will be back with some refreshments, said Twilight. I'm sure you're tired after your journey, so I hope that they'll be to your liking. I am sure that anything you have to offer will be suitable, replied Elderflower, giving Twilight a patronizing smile. In truth, he was certain that anything she could provide would unimpressive, if not downright repulsive. But the Baron was prepared to suck mud through a straw if it meant increasing his chances at success. My father would probably be throwing a fit if he knew how far I was going to see this through. It was definitely above and beyond what a pony of his station would normally be expected to do. But the work was just too important to foist off on some pony else. Well then, said Elderflower, resting his elbows on his table so that he could set his chin down on his steepled hooves, let's begin, shall we? Of course, said Twilight, you mentioned in your letter that you had something important to talk to me about. What is it? Elderflower's eyes narrowed as he watched Twilight's face. He could just barely make out the anxiety swimming just barely beneath the surface. She clearly practiced hard in preparation for this and was doing a very good job at maintaining a political poker face. Firstly, I would like to apologize on behalf of my peers and superiors who may have offended or troubled you over these past months, said Elderflower, keeping a smile up for Twilight's sake, as the old saying goes, an idle mind is discord's playground. Suffice to say that the nobility have little to keep them occupied but their power games. Part of what I am seeking to do is to rectify that situation. How so? Asked Twilight, canting her head slightly. Elderflower sighed. Though I can't speak well of the rest of the noble court's intentions, the truth is that I too would like to take advantage of your connection with the princesses. I believe that, if you were to assist me, then we could get Princess Celestia to see reason in this matter. Twilight's expression hardened. What matter, exactly? What I wish is to get Princess Celestia's approval to establish the noble court as the House of Lords to the Parliament, with the existing Parliament being designated the House of Commons. The two houses would then share responsibility for the governance of Equestria. Twilight opened her mouth to automatically reject Elderflower's idea. However, before she could even start speaking, her rational mind clamped down on her tongue to keep her from voicing her rebuke. That's actually pretty reasonable. It was certainly a far cry from what she had been expecting. It actually made a fair bit of sense. She remembered Celestia talking with her advisors about the possibility of creating a second House of Parliament as a check on their overall power and to get them to discuss the legislation they'd been creating more thoroughly. But still, thought the noble court, she frowned as she looked over at Elderflower. But I'm not sure the noble court is the best choice. Her mind drifted back to what she remembered of the noble court and their behavior. She remembered Steel Flint's attempt to overwhelm her with suggestion spells before attempting to physically force her to submit to him and attempting to kill Arkenstone after that. She remembered her visit to Canterlot being plagued by countless overtures, romantic and otherwise, by ponies who thought she would trip over her hooves to gain their favor. She remembered disparaging remarks about her friends and the town she had chosen to call home. She remembered a certain mare going so far as to take another mare hostage and threaten Dawn's home with Fluttershy in an attempt to manipulate her. She tried to imagine ponies like those in charge of a genuine house of equestrian government. The thought made her shudder. I can understand that you might be reluctant to support this, said Elderflower. You have suffered at the hooves of my peers, for which I apologize greatly. He sighed. But that is part of why I want to do this. I believe that this will solve your problems as well as mine. That got Twilight's attention and she found herself staring at Elderflower in confusion. What do you mean? Ultimately, the goal of the ponies trying to control you is to enhance their status amongst their peers. This has little tangible effect on Equestria as a whole since they are not in a position of genuine governance. Sadly, as I told you before, idle minds and all that. Because they have no concerns of actual governance to keep them occupied, they instead turn their minds to amusement and the inane power games that obsess those of our class. Given something to actually apply themselves to, they will cease obsessing over such minor affairs and work towards the genuine good of our nation. Elderflower gave Twilight a warm, friendly smile. What do you think? It would certainly be better than the situation we have now. Twilight hummed and rubbed her chin. She had to admit that Elderflower made a very good argument. It stood to reason that a great many of the excesses of the noble class stemmed from the lack of anything worthwhile to do with their time, at least that's how it appeared on the surface. After all, there were members of the noble court who were quite productive ponies like Prince Blueblood and Fancy Pants, who had applied themselves to governmental and economic roles separate from their status as nobles. Granted, that was because they had, more or less, abandoned the statuses afforded to them as members of the noble court and applied themselves to fields outside what nobles were normally willing to engage in. You might have a point, Twilight admitted, but I'm not entirely sure that I trust the noble court to be responsible with even a portion of a branch of our government. The notion that ponies would be in a position to decide the course of Equestria's legislation simply because they had been born into a particular family didn't sit well with her. After all, the entire reason Celestia had begun to marginalize the governmental powers of the noble court in the first place was because of petty tyrants who had used the circumstances of their birth as an excuse to do whatever they pleased with the ponies they ruled. Even if we don't establish a House of Lords for the Parliament, there are things that those who truly want to participate in Equestria's government can do. That may be so, admitted Elderflower, however, that is an unacceptable outcome. Why is that? Asked Twilight. What you are saying is that we should cast aside the privilege our titles grant us and operate outside the bounds of the nobility, said Elderflower. That is unacceptable. Twilight let out a disappointed sigh. I figured as much. In other words, what's truly important is that you take control of the government as nobles. That is correct, replied Elderflower. It is not merely our desire. It is our obligation. Being born into the noble families of Equestria, it is our responsibility to seize the nation and guide its course, lest all fall into chaos. But that obligation is being denied by Princess Celestia's misguided ideals. Thus, it falls to us to correct Equestria's course before irreversible damage is done. The games my peers have been playing with you and your friends are merely a symptom of this disorder. However, I believe that, with your help, we can change things for the better and restore history to its proper course. Elderflower fixed Twilight with a stare, a fanatical light burning in his eyes. Twilight Sparkle, will you help me with this? Author's notes. So, a lot of you have clearly noticed that the past couple of chapters have been rather exposition happy. That was a deliberate effort on my part, as I felt I needed to work more on building up the beginning portions of my stories. When you read a series of actual books, Jim Butcher's The Dresden Files being my go-to example, as always, you'll note that, with each book, the author doesn't simply start off expecting you to automatically know who the characters are, no matter what book of the series you're on, but instead takes the time to reintroduce the characters with each successive book. That was something that I'm trying to work on with this latest story in my series. My next effort should be to work on integrating the exposition more organically into the narrative so it doesn't feel quite so clunky. Once again, thanks to all you wonderful people, this story has made it into the featured story lists, though not to the top this time, I think thanks to it being overshadowed by accidents happened by one Majin Saiko, which is understandable, given that it's such a short, easy read. And really good on top of that. Granted, the numbers seem to indicate at least 90% of you have already read that story, but on the off chance that some of you haven't yet, go give it a gander. It's barely over 1,000 words, so it's a quick read. It's also a textbook example of a good author doing a lot with very little, using a very small number of words to tell a quick, entertaining story, certainly worth the 5 or so minutes, at most, you'll spend reading it. Go on, I'll wait. You're back, good. Next chapter, Twilight and the Baron Throwdown, philosophically, that is. Breakdown of negotiations. Chapter 3, Breakdown of negotiations. Are you all right? Asked Dawn, watching as Arkenstone sorted the spices for one of his tea blends for the 5th time in a row. Arkenstone's ears swiveled in Dawn's direction. He was a well-built stallion, about average in size but showcasing chiseled, well-defined musculature that was the envy of many bodybuilders. His coat was a mild beige color, whilst his mane and tail were a chocolate brown shade. Arkenstone's flank was decorated by a cutie mark shaped like a pair of crossed swords, gray with black inlays. The stallion's eyes were perpetually closed and he was completely blind. Whenever those eyes opened, which was rare, they were a milky, featureless white that gave Arkenstone a fearsome, almost inequine quality that could be both unsettling and intimidating. Normally, he was a pillar of serene calm, particularly to Dawn. Arkenstone's relaxed, easygoing attitude was a result of his immense experience as a member of the Celestial Order of Knights. The knights were sworn to the service of Equestria, with an authority that rivaled that of Princess Celestia herself whenever she was not present. The knights lived quiet lives, frequently masquerading as something or some pony else and never revealing themselves publicly. For that reason, very little was known about their membership and most ponies believed them to be tall tales outright. But, in fact, they were an order of the most powerful ponies in all of Equestria, each of them individually capable of routing entire armies on the battlefield. At present, there were only 7. However, on this day, Arkenstone's normally calm demeanor was notably absent, instead replaced by an uncharacteristic nervous tension that made itself apparent as the stallion fidgeted and fretted, making otherwise easy and mundane tasks take much longer than they normally did, whether it was washing the same table 3 times or reorganizing the kitchen for the 4th time in a day. It was painfully clear that Arkenstone's mind was elsewhere. I'm fine, replied Arkenstone. His tone was calm and relaxed, but he quickly turned to restart the process of sorting that he'd just restarted, again. I can't help but think otherwise, said Dawn, raising an eyebrow. You're worried about something. It was merely a twitch, just the barest jolt from Arkenstone's muscles. But it was enough for Dawn to tell that his guess was spot on. Given the fact that Arkenstone appeared to respect Dawn's agency as a fellow martial artist, it was unlikely that whatever had the stallion so worried concerned Dawn directly. Is it something with Miss Twilight? Another jolt confirmed Dawn's suspicions. He sat and waited, head slightly canted to one side, both ears pointing upright attentively. For a moment, it looked as though Arkenstone was simply going to carry on as though Dawn hadn't said anything. Then, the blind stallion let out a resigned sigh and pulled away from the counter to sit in front of Dawn. She's meeting a baron of the noble court right now, said Arkenstone. Dawn's lips pressed together tightly and his brow furrowed as he thought about what that meant. It was common knowledge to Twilight's close friends that members of the noble court had been seeking ways to manipulate Twilight Sparkle with the goal of making use of her close relationship to Princess Celestia for their own ends. Dawn had been the subject of those machinations himself. He'd seen and experienced the full extent of the influence that certain member of the noble court had. And Twilight was meeting with one of them directly. That most certainly was troubling news. Shouldn't you be with her then? Asked Dawn, looking up at Arkenstone. Arkenstone let out another sigh. Twilight wanted to try this on her own and, as much as I would like to protect her constantly, I can't be looking over her shoulder all the time. It's for the best that she try to fend for herself as much as possible. But that doesn't make it easier to not worry, Dawn pointed out. Arkenstone shook his head. No, it doesn't. Twilight stared incredulously at the Baron across from her. I can't believe that he'd seriously think that I'd go along with this, she thought. In front of her, Elderflower was calming himself down, clearly a bit embarrassed about having gotten so worked up there for a moment. Behind Elderflower, the door back into the library opened and Spike came ambling out balancing a tray with a pot of tea and a pair of cups. He set the tea down on the center of the table and left without a word, casting a nervous glance over his shoulder at Twilight as he went. She gave Spike the tiniest of nods and the dragon took his leave. Using her magic, Twilight poured the tea for both of them and then took a sip to steady her nerves. It was her favorite oolong blend, one that Arkenstone had mixed especially for her. The heady aroma of spices swirled up into her nasal passages and calmed her slightly. Across from her, Elderflower raised an eyebrow as he tasted from his own cup. My, he said, this is quite a remarkable flavor. I don't believe I've ever tasted its like and I have some of the finest teas in all of Equestria imported directly to my estate. It's a local product, said Twilight, unable to hide a proud smile. Arkenstone creates his own blends and sells them at his tea house, which is right next door. Oh yes, Arkenstone, your cold friend, said Twilight flatly, her eyes narrowing as she cut off whatever patronizing and demeaning term Elderflower was going to use to describe her special sumpony. The earth pony, right. Elderflower took another sip of the tea, clearly approving of the flavor even if he probably didn't approve of where it came from. Setting the cup down, Elderflower slowly shook his head. I don't know what you are hoping to accomplish by allowing him to court you, but it surely can't be worth the price you are paying for such associations. A few faint wisps of smoke rose out of Twilight's mane and it took all of her willpower to keep from bursting into flame on the spot. If anything, she replied, not able to completely keep the anger humming through her veins from leaking into her tone, I'm the one courting him. Elderflower froze. Though her response hadn't left him completely slack-jawed, he was now looking at her with startling intensity. The only thing I am hoping to accomplish in our relationship is to someday settle down with some pony who cares about me, who loves me as I love him, and build a family, snarled Twilight. There's no ulterior political motive, no sneaky power play. As far as I'm concerned, there isn't really a price I'm paying for that. If Twilight had to compare Elderflower's expression to anything, she'd say it was like an elementary-level student who'd only just learned basic multiplication trying to grasp the principles of advanced quantum physics, as though Elderflower was trying to wrap his head around a concept that was completely beyond his comprehension at the moment. That is extraordinarily unwise, said Elderflower finally. You need to realize that the price of such things is very high, Dame Sparkle. Your name and the name of Princess Celestia are at stake. Lowering yourself to associate with ponies beneath your station in such a manner will diminish your standing. My standing, snapped Twilight, glaring all the harder at Elderflower, is just fine. The ponies whose opinions actually matter fully approve of our relationship, and I haven't the least concern for what any pony else might think. Her eyes narrowed dangerously at Elderflower. No matter what their rank might be, Steel Flint said a lot of same things to me. Maybe you should ask Arkenstone what happened to him. Admittedly, using Arkenstone's combat prowess as a threat against the Baron was something of a low blow for Twilight, particularly because if Elderflower called her bluff, then she would be forcing Arkenstone to do to Elderflower what he did to Steel Flint. She realized, at that moment, she'd made a poor decision to bring that up. If she forced Arkenstone to follow through on her threat, then she was simply turning him into a tool to use against her enemies. Please don't go through with it, Twilight pleaded silently. It was too late to retract her words now. Elderflower coughed somewhat nervously. Thank you, he said, but I think I'll take you at your word. I apologize for my harsh remarks. I sometimes forget that not every pony thinks the same way I do. He gave her an apologetic look. I hope that you'll forgive me, but sentiments such as the feelings you speak of are something I do not have the luxury for. I'd think that all you'd have time for was luxury, thought Twilight irritably. It wasn't as though the nobility had any actual obligations expected of them anymore. If you consider something like being in a loving relationship to be a luxury, then perhaps you need to reconsider what's truly important to you. The Baron frowned at her. I'm afraid that's a commoner's perspective. However, my work is far too important to spend on the things you suggest, so they remain mere frivolities to me. That's your loss, thought Twilight. Elderflower sighed and shook his head. I'm afraid we allowed the conversation to get sidetracked. My point in coming here remains. If we are to avoid disaster, Equestria's course must be corrected. Allowing current trends to continue would only lead to the country falling into mob rule. To prevent that, we need to ensure that the ponies truly suited to governance are placed in a position to do so. Twilight's eyes narrowed. Like you and the other members of the noble court, I suppose. Elderflower shrugged. It is in our blood, he said simply, though time has passed, though we do not do as much as we used to, it is still the prerogative of our families to guide the course of Equestria. It is what we were born to do, our destiny. Twilight couldn't stop herself. A low snort forced itself from her nostrils. Still, it was better than simply exploding into laughter in front of a baron of the noble court. She could see that Elderflower was not happy with her response. The slight narrowing of his eyes and the tightening of his lips betrayed his anger. He was not happy, and he was doing his absolute best not to let it slip. Instead, he appeared to school himself back into a calm neutrality and raised an eyebrow. Apparently you disagree. I do, said Twilight, taking a second to fill her cup again. I've seen the noble court and the ponies of so-called superior breeding. I've seen what they're truly capable of. Ultimately, most of you are nothing more than overgrown bullies who would be utterly incapable if you didn't have your inherited wealth to spend your schemes into something resembling success. The idea that your bloodline's making you better suited to rule is a farce, just like the farce that being born into a particular family inherently makes you superior or inferior to any pony. You scoff at the qualifications that the members of our current parliament have for their office, but, at the end of the day, you and yours are ultimately less qualified to serve in positions of governance over Equestria. Elderflower was glaring openly at her. However, he maintained his composure. You need to learn to be more reasonable, Dame Sparkle. If ponies abandon their proper roles in the world, then order will dissolve and chaos will replace it. The ponies in Parliament are not there because they are truly the best suited to govern, but because they have been elected. Their elections are nothing more than glorified popularity contests. The pony that better outspends her rivals on advertisements tends to be the one elected, not because she is actually the better choice to represent a region. To make matters worse, these officials then waste precious time focusing on making sure that they can be re-elected, rather than actually doing their jobs. They need to be checked and made to actually do their jobs. Furthermore, our government is not just being run by commoners but by Pegasi and Earth ponies, ponies whose role is not meant to be governance. Only we unicorns, the members of our tribe, have cultivated the wisdom necessary to truly rule Equestria. The Pegasi are fighters, brutes to be sure, but powerful warriors. Their society has been built upon the principles of strength, will, and a fierce competitive spirit. That outlook does not lend itself well to fostering the stability of a nation, but it does serve the cause of that nation's protection. That is why the strength of the Pegasi is needed by the guard to protect our nation from external threats. The Earth ponies are concerned with affairs of the land and its tending. They foster the growth of our crops and support our ponies by providing the food we need to survive. Their service is so essential that we simply cannot afford to allow them to waste their talents and power in the folly of reaching above their station. Without everything in its proper place and every pony doing the work they were meant to, then nothing can be accomplished. We all need to embrace our destinies if Equestria is to survive and prosper. Right now, ponies are abandoning the roles assigned to them by fate to seek out whatever whim catches their interest. Our nation will collapse and our enemies shall feast upon its corpse. He stared down at his teacup. Your colt friend is remarkably skilled if he has managed to create such an excellent blend of tea. Seeing as he has his own tea house, I imagine he must have many more blends like it. His business is clearly successful, so he does them all well. It's clearly what he was meant to do. Imagine what it would be like if he had thrown all that potential away to pursue some ridiculous fantasy like being a scholar or an accountant. You can't deny how well he fits his role. If the Baron had meant for that last argument to be a definitive one that would convince Twilight of his views, he was sorely mistaken as she began to giggle unabashedly in front of him. Eventually, the giggles gave way to straight-out laughter as Twilight fought to keep from doubling over under the weight of her own mirth. The Baron's eyes narrowed into slits as he stared at Twilight, trying to figure out what was so funny. I fail to see the cause for your amusement, he said in a harsh tone. I can't help it, replied Twilight, managing to suppress her chortles well enough to answer him. It's just. If that last part was meant to show how ironclad your argument was, you clearly have no idea how badly you've just lamed it. What? I guess you haven't actually seen Arkenstone in the flesh, explained Twilight, now smirking triumphantly across at Elderflower. Arkenstone's special talent has absolutely nothing to do with tea, whether it's mixing, it's brewing, or it's serving. His cutie mark is completely unrelated. In fact, he is the perfect example of the pony you've been decrying. He opened his tea house and started up his business as a means of indulging in his favorite hobby. Elderflower's jaw dropped and he glanced down incredulously at his teacup, as though seeing it for the very first time. That's the problem with your worldview, Lord Baron. Ponies have far more potential than you give them credit for, regardless of the standing of their birth or their tribe. If a pony truly loves something, then they have the capacity to see it through, regardless of whether or not it falls under the purview of their cutie mark or their social standing. By trying to squash them down into your little pigeonholes, you are the one who is cutting them off from the chance to realize their full potential. When we're free to choose our own way through life, we are ponies. You would have us submit mindlessly to authority and embrace whatever role is determined for us. You would have us be a hive of insects. Elderflower's jaw snapped shut and he stared at Twilight with a grim frown of disapproval. Surely, you of all ponies, Dame Sparkle, would know better than to scoff at the importance of destiny. I beg your pardon, said Twilight. You owe everything that you have, everything that you are to destiny, to embracing the role that has been laid out for you. You were chosen by the elements of harmony to wield them, and your compatriots were chosen for the task even before that. What? Asked Twilight, her sense of triumph fading as an uneasy knot formed in her stomach. Now it was the Baron's turn to smirk. I've done my homework, Dame Sparkle. It was rather simple to put events together to understand the larger picture. You obtained your cutie mark during the entrance examination for Princess Celestia's School for Gifted Unicorns. In the process of your examination, a sudden explosion in the distance caused you to lose your composure and resulted in your magic flaring uncontrollably. That flare was what attracted Princess Celestia's attention and what led her to making you her personal student, which is what resulted in you obtaining your cutie mark. At roughly the same time, your friend, Miss Rarity, was drawn away from town by her magic. Shortly after that same explosion, she returned with a massive haul of gems that she used to augment the costumes for a school play that she had been working on, which led to her cutie mark in turn. At the same time, records hold that Miss Applejack was staying with her relatives in Manhattan. Those records show that she left and immediately purchased tickets on the next train back to Ponyville, again, after that same explosion. Shortly afterwards, she was reported as having obtained her cutie mark after returning to her family's farm. Miss Pinkamena Diane Pie was a bit more difficult to track during that period. However, shortly following the explosion, a local store's records showed the sudden purchase of a large number of party supplies to be delivered to the rock farm where Miss Pie had been born and raised. Likewise, she too was soon reported to have obtained her cutie mark in that period. Finally, records from Cloudsdale Flight School tell, somewhat briefly, that Miss Fluttershy went missing during the period of the explosion. She was located by her parents shortly afterward and withdrew from the school almost immediately, ultimately to pursue an apprenticeship with a Miss Willowbrook here in Ponyville in order to become Ponyville's wildlife manager. Interestingly, she was documented as having her cutie mark when departing from Cloudsdale. And then there's the thing that ties all these incidents together. Records were spotty, but eyewitness testimonies indicate that the source of the explosion was Miss Rainbow Dash performing the first sonic rainboom seen in centuries, something that has become her signature move of sorts, if I recall correctly. Several witnesses confirmed the emergence of her cutie mark as a consequence of it. I'm told that she's been officially admitted to the Wonderbolts. I hope you'll convey my congratulations to her. Twilight's skin crawled. She wasn't sure what disturbed her more, the fact that Baron Elderflower had researched her life and the lives of her friends to such a detailed degree, or the fact that his reasoning was fairly correct to a certain extent. He had a point there. She'd even gone and written a friendship report about it once, that she and her friends had a special bond even before they'd met. From that perspective, she could see what Elderflower was getting at. Her closest relationships were with 5 special ponies, her fellow element bearers. They'd each been gifted with one of the elements of harmony when they'd gone to face down Nightmare Moon. The pieces had fallen into place as easily and surely as though each of her friends had been carved with that specific role in mind. But something deeper down told her that there was something wrong with Elderflower's argument. There was a chink in the chains of logic that he was trying to use to bind her. But she couldn't, for the life of her, see what it was. Even now, Elderflower, having finished his recounting, was watching her with a great deal of interest, clearly amused by the sight of Twilight struggling against his reasoning. He was waiting for her response, whether her acknowledgement that he was right, or something else. Whatever the case was, it was clear that Elderflower believed that he'd successfully cornered her. Finally, Twilight lifted her head up and she fixed Elderflower with her sternest gaze. You do make a good point. I've always thought that it was fate that I met my friends and that we went on to take up the elements. But my heart tells me that there's more to it than just destiny, that we didn't succeed simply because we took up roles that were assigned to us. There's more to it than that. Elderflower sighed. Your heart, I see. In the absence of logic, you embrace emotion. I'm most disappointed in you, Dame Sparkle. You cannot admit the fault of your own beliefs. No more, said Twilight, than you can apparently admit yours. After all, Elderflower hadn't effectively thwarted the examples she'd laid out either. Still, I believe I've made my point, said the Baron, so I will ask you once again, Dame Sparkle. Will you help me bring order back to Equestria? My answer is no, replied Twilight evenly. I'm not fool enough to believe that Equestria is just fine as it is, or that the government couldn't be improved. Sure, many of the ponies currently serving in Parliament may not be the best ones for the job. But the way to solve those problems is not in the solution you pose. No good will come out of trying to stamp every pony into a particular role at birth or any other point of their life. Your way is not the answer. Elderflower closed his eyes and slowly shook his head. And here I was hoping that we could come to an agreement. He opened his eyes and stared straight at her. But I know, one day, you will see things my way, Dame Sparkle. Someday, you will understand the truth of my words. Then, I'm certain that you will be of great help to me. No, said Twilight decisively, I won't. I think our conversation is over, Lord Baron. I'm grateful that you were willing to come so far out of your way to visit me. But it's clear that we have nothing more to discuss. I must ask you to leave for now. Elderflower didn't look happy with her continued refusal to acknowledge even a minor victory on his part. However, he also clearly understood that this was a battle not worth fighting anymore. I thank you for your hospitality, Dame Sparkle. Though you continue to deny it, I hold out hope that you will see reason someday. Until then, he inclined his head politely to her, which Twilight returned. The Baron turned and went back through the balcony door, heading through the bedroom and down the stairs into the library. His 2 guards fell in behind him, smoothly and without the slightest signal from their employer. Elderflower continued out the library's front door and turned down the street towards the train station. Twilight followed the Baron to the door and stood there watching as he marched off into the distance. He would probably be in town for another couple of hours at least, until the next train going on to Canterlot arrived and his private car could be attached to it. But for the time being, he was no longer something she had to deal with, which was a huge relief. So why was it that a small knot of unease continued to churn in her gut? The snow crunched loudly beneath Baron Elderflower's hooves as they carried him away from the library. The guards trailing behind him easily noticed that the Baron was exerting more force with his steps going away than he had when coming. In other words, he was stomping like an angry foal on his way back to the station. Neither of them said anything about it. Neither of them was stupid enough to even think about saying anything. They followed the Baron's course as he made his way back to the platform. From there, they navigated to the separate track where his private car was being held, waiting to take them back to Canterlot on the next train heading that way. Elderflower didn't exchange a single word with the station staff. There was no need to. One of the staff accompanying him would have taken care of it already. The door to the car slid open in a sheath of the Baron's magic. Stay there, he snapped at the guards behind him. I do not want to be disturbed. Neither of the guards moved, not even to nod in acknowledgement. Instead, they simply fell into place on either side of the door and stood rigidly, awaiting the next order to come from Elderflower. Elderflower's nostrils flared and he let out a snort of satisfaction before he stepped back inside the car, slamming the door shut behind him. Making his way into the car's sitting room, he went to a glass-faced cabinet on one wall and opened it. A single short glass and a decanter, both made from finely cut crystal, floated out and settled onto the narrow table that dominated the center of the sitting room. Elderflower settled onto the couch that lined the wall on one side, sinking into the soft cushions as they took on his weight. He removed the stopper from the decanter and poured a stream of amber liquid into the glass. Elderflower took a long sip from the glass, completely draining it in one pull. He savored the harsh bite of alcohol as it slid down his throat and seemed to warm him from within. However, that did not stop his mind from wandering back to recent events. He still remembered perfectly Twilight Sparkle's behavior, how she'd opposed him, disrespected him, and contradicted him. He'd known better than to believe that he could sway her so easily. He'd known that this meeting would amount to little more than a prelude to the true game. But that knowledge did nothing to reduce the searing anger that blazed away inside of him at how blatantly she'd insulted him. By all rights, she's nothing more than a jumped-up hedge witch. She had the luck to be born with more power than she had a right to, and she dares to pretend that she knows better than me. I can trace my lineage back to Equestria's foundation and beyond. My family have been part of this nation's blood and bones since its very inception. Who is Twilight Sparkle to believe that she knows better than me what is best for this nation? His rage vented itself into his magic. The brown aura holding the glass suspended in the air began to flare and his telekinetic grip tightened until the crystal cracked, then shattered, and was then crushed into sparkling dust, which slipped away from Elderflower's magical hold to form a glittering pile on the table next to his decanter. Elderflower regarded the pile for a moment before huffing and using his magic to sweep it away. Stewing in anger will do nothing. I'd known from the beginning that Twilight Sparkle would be uncooperative. Her attitude problems are merely an extension of that. Getting angry over it is meaningless. I'll simply have to move on. His opening gambit had failed, but the game was merely beginning. Fetching another glass from his liquor cabinet, Elderflower settled back onto the couch and poured himself some more whiskey as he pondered his next move. Twilight's eyes flickered from one book to another as her magic slid them back to their proper places on the shelves. Nearby, Spike ambled back and forth across the room, sweeping up the dirt and debris their various guests had tracked in over the course of the day. The two of them worked in a relaxed, easygoing silence. Nothing was said, nothing needed to be said. In a few minutes, Spike would go start dinner and that would be that. The creak of the library's front door made Twilight's ears perk up and she turned to look, seeing the familiar beige figure of Arkenstone as he stepped inside. She could see him faintly sniff the air a couple of times and then his body sagged in relief. The motion was barely noticeable, but Twilight knew him well enough to catch it. The last book was sliding into place on the shelf as Twilight made her way over to Arkenstone. He barely had time to shut the door behind him before Twilight pressed her lips to his, continuing forward until she forced Arkenstone to settle back on his haunches. Not breaking the kiss, she lifted up her forelegs to wrap them around his shoulders, settling onto her haunches as well. She felt Arkenstone's arms rise to return the embrace and the two of them held each other tight. Finally, they broke the kiss. Arkenstone slowly leaned forward so that his chin rested on her shoulder and his neck pressed against hers. Rough day, he asked softly. You could say that, said Twilight, a blissful smile spreading across her face as she allowed herself to relax in her cold friend's arms. What about you? Nothing too bad, he said, though my nerves got the better of me a little. I don't blame you, she said, that was something I don't want to repeat. They continued to hold each other until they heard the sound of Spike opening the door and heading into the kitchen. The faint clatter of pots and pans followed as the young dragon got to work on the evening's dinner. Meanwhile, Twilight and Arkenstone made their way to the cushions by the fireplace and stretched out next to each other so that Twilight was lying up against Arkenstone's side, her head draped languidly across his forelegs as he rested his own head across hers. Twilight sighed softly, basking in her stallion's presence. Just by being there, Arkenstone managed to chase away the anxiety that had been dogging her throughout the day. Her thoughts about the things that Baron Elderflower had said had been hounding her relentlessly through the afternoon, nestling in the back of her mind like an itch she couldn't scratch. To keep them at bay, Twilight had tried to lose herself in her work, seeing to the library and its visitors, using them as a distraction as she tried to ignore the pricking needle the Baron had slid so carefully into her thoughts. Destiny. Her traitorous thoughts had posed the question over and over throughout the remainder of the day. Are my friends just because of destiny? Are we together just because that was what was meant to be? Did we ever really have any choice in the matter? If the Baron's assertions were correct, then what did that mean for everything else that Twilight had believed in? Were her theories about the elements of harmony and their nature that she'd spoken of to Sunset Shimmer incorrect? Had she been operating off of mistaken assumptions all this time? No, that couldn't have been the case. Elderflower had a point about her friendship. To a certain degree, Twilight had forged a connection, a bond with the others before they'd even met. But, at the same time, there remained a particular flaw to Elderflower's logic that she couldn't quite puzzle out. It continued to niggle at her just as insistently as the unpleasant doubts that Elderflower's words had inspired. Light, Twilight. Huh, Twilight's mind came back to the present as she felt Arkenstone's muzzle gently prodding the back of her head. She realized that she'd allowed herself to get lost in her confusion over the day's affairs and that her thoughts had wandered off. Spike's nearly finished with dinner, said Arkenstone softly, we should go join him soon. Oh, right. Twilight's ears drooped and she remained where she was. After all, Arkenstone had said, soon, not now. Slowly, Arkenstone lowered his head and planted a feather-like kiss just behind Twilight's ear, making it twitch and eliciting a giggle from the lavender mare as her body squirmed slightly against his. Are you all right? He asked softly, your mind was a long ways away. Just, Twilight sighed, I was just thinking about everything that happened today, like what Elderflower said, about things. Things you want to talk about? Inquired Arkenstone. Not yet, said Twilight, I'd really just like to forget about it for now, if my own mind would let me. If you need to be alone, let me know, said Arkenstone, I won't bother you. No, said Twilight, leaning harder up against him, I like you just where you are. She felt Arkenstone's quiet chuckle build within his chest before it made its way out his mouth. Very well then, he said, I'll stay right here. Hey you two, shouted Spike from the kitchen, dinner's ready. Twilight jolted up, nearly catching Arkenstone in the chin with her horn at the sound of Spike's voice. The two of them froze in startled silence before turning to look at each other. In unison, they broke out into laughter before they got to their hooves and made their way to the kitchen. As they walked, Twilight felt the uneasiness continue to fade away. It didn't matter what doubts tormented her, so long as the ponies closest to her remained by her side, she'd be fine. Are you certain that you're all right? Asked Rarity, watching Coco carefully. I'm fine, said Coco Pommel, the faint stammer in her voice saying otherwise. Rarity could clearly see that something was wrong. Something or some pony had given Coco a terrible fright at some point. She'd been paler than usual when she'd come back from the bathroom and her hooves had been shaking faintly, enough to throw off her work, which was usually impeccable. Most ponies might not have noticed, but Rarity's experience and talent had cultivated a keen eye for detail and she'd known immediately that something was amiss. She'd made no attempt to force Coco to stop working. Rarity herself was no stranger to having nerves take the edge off her work. Heaven knows how many stitches she'd botched or how many ill-considered ideas she'd thrown together when something bad had rattled her cage. Her mind still tormented her over some of the things she'd made while trying to throw off the memories of Discord's influence after returning that beastly creature to stone. Letting Coco work was probably the best way to help the young mare deal with her fear and anxiety over whatever it was that was bothering her. If you say so, said Rarity, a little dubiously, but please don't feel that you have to push yourself if you don't feel well. I'd be happy to give you tomorrow off if you need. Oh no, said Coco, please don't trouble yourself on my account. She gave Rarity a smile that was not entirely convincing, I'll be fine. Very well then, said Rarity. Before Coco could react, the older mare's arms wrapped around her shoulders and Coco found herself being pulled into a tight hug. Remember, said Rarity softly, her voice almost a whisper, if you need to talk, I'll always be here for you. Thank you, Coco whispered back. Finally, Rarity let her go and watched as Coco scampered out the boutique's door. Coco broke into a gallop and didn't stop until she was well out of sight of the boutique. When she was sure that there was no longer any chance of Rarity seeing her, Coco sought out a bench off to the side of the street and sat down on it. Only then did she break down into sobs as her heart threatened to tear itself apart in her chest. Part of her wanted to rush back to the Carousel boutique and tell Rarity everything, tell her about Baron Elderflower's machinations, about Pearl and Bluestreak's hovering presence, about the threat looming over her and everyone who associated with her. However, another part of her, a colder part, reminded her that, in doing so, she'd be signing her own death warrant. Once word got to the Baron that she'd betrayed him, Perlin would come for her and that would be the end of it. Of that she was certain. Oh, she'd heard that some of the ponies Rarity associated with were competent fighters. But, as her mind replayed the image of the mithril-winged colt mowing down trained fighters like a scythe through wheat, she realized that none of them had a chance in Tartarus of actually saving her if Perlin came for her life. Then some pony laid a hoof on her shoulder. Coco froze, her entire body going rigid with momentary panic. Elderflower could still be in town. If he was here, then Perlin might be as well. Shivering violently, Coco forced herself to turn her head and look back at who was gently resting a hoof against her withers. Her eyes widened as a pair of turquoise eyes with slit pupils met her own. Are you all right? Asked Don Lightwing, his tone soft and gentle. Coco sniffed hard and nodded. Don raised an eyebrow at her but made no effort to press. Instead, he gently sidled up against her. Come, he said, it's cold out. You'll get sick if you stay out here too long. His words made Coco suddenly very conscious of the ambient temperature. She shivered, thankfully not from nerves this time, and got to her hooves. Don walked alongside her as they made their way to the house. The only serious complication, aside from the hidden ones that had followed Coco from Canterlot to her apprenticeship, was that Rarity did not have space for her in the Carousel boutique. Naturally, Rarity had the master bedroom. Another room belonged to Sweetie Belle, Rarity's adorable little sister. The other bedroom was currently occupied by Flaxseed, a unicorn stallion with a gold-colored coat, whom she'd rarely seen while working at the boutique. It seemed that Flaxseed was the nervous, unsociable sort, who was a bit leery of showing himself openly. Coco occasionally caught glimpses of him peeking into the workroom or disappearing out the door of one room as she entered through another door. She didn't think they'd even exchanged even 10 words since Rarity had introduced him. As a consequence, that meant there were no more rooms to be had at the boutique. Fortunately, there had been a solution. Fluttershy, Rarity's friend, was sharing a house with her colt friend, a pleasant tan-colored stallion named Caramel. Don, Fluttershy's adopted son, was staying there as well. Fortunately, they had a guest room open and had happily agreed to allow Coco to stay there. They arrived at the house. Coco sat back and waited for Don to unlock the door, watching with fascination as the colt deftly manipulated the key between the feathers of his primaries. No matter how many times she saw it, Coco never tired of seeing the strange skill in action. Once inside, Don and Coco stripped out of their cold weather clothing before heading to the living room. Coco noted that though the lights were on in the kitchen, there were no other signs that any pony else was in the house. Mom and Dad are out on another date, explained Don, stacking wood in the fireplace before extending his wing towards it. With a loud snap, a small bolt of lightning jumped from the outermost primary of his wing and into the wood, setting it alight. It was another strange skill that fascinated Coco. She'd never asked, but she assumed it was an extension of Pegasus weather control magic. In the fashion industry, she'd worked with quite a few unicorns, but never Pegasi, except for those who handled shipping and deliveries, so she knew very little about their magic. As the flames spread to the rest of the pile, Don went to the closet and fetched a blanket, which he then draped over Coco's shoulders. Giving the colt a grateful smile, Coco reached up with her hooves and drew the blanket around herself. Don nodded at her, then retreated into the kitchen. A few minutes later, Don returned with a steaming cup of herbal tea. Coco sniffed it and was grateful to find a blend of spearmint and chamomile. As she slowly drank it down, the warm fumes from the tea cleared her sinuses and relaxed her breathing, sending a soothing feeling throughout her body. Thank you, she whispered to Don, who'd settled onto the couch with a book. You're welcome, said Don. I know you don't wish to talk about what it is that's bothering you. But we are all willing to listen, should you change your mind. I'll think about it, said Coco, knowing that she never could. Don simply nodded at her and turned his attention to the book. In the meantime, Coco settled back and continued to sip her tea as she watched the fire through the night. Author's notes. So, another day, another chapter. Yes, Elderflower's a jerk, though I tried to give him some legitimate hits in during the Dotterm conversation. Namely, he highlights some points of frustration many of us have with elected governments in the real world. No system of government is truly perfect, until the day we finally welcome our robot overlords, who may just as well exterminate us as rule benevolently with literal iron fists. Where was I going with that? Elderflower also gets to point out a few of my and some other people's gripes about the Cutie Mark Chronicles, namely that the whole thing stinks of predestination, though said things aren't gripes for Elderflower, but points in his favor. That's gonna get some additional coverage next chapter. Now, if you're looking for some other reading while you wait for tomorrow's chapter, I have another story to recommend. This one is Chaser, by Slissy Huddles. It's another interesting take on the adult pony without a cutie mark genre that I was rather taken by. There isn't a whole lot of action or anything like that, but I dig the characterization. This one looked like it was gonna be abandoned for a while, as seems to happen to a lot of promising stories shortly after I start following them. Universe, why do you hate me so? But the author has now bounced back and, hopefully, we will get to see it completed. Next chapter, Twilight dreams of Genie, Luna. Dreaming of Destiny. Chapter 4, Dreaming of Destiny. Twilight tossed and turned underneath her blankets, her eyes still closed as she pulled them tighter about herself to try and lull herself into sleep. Unfortunately, even though she was tired, the meeting with Elderflower had taken a lot out of her. Sleep eluded her grasp. After dinner, she'd relaxed a little more with Arkenstone, enjoying the feeling of his presence as they read in front of the fireplace. But, all too soon it seemed, Arkenstone had to return to his own quarters in the tea house and was time for Twilight to go to bed, Spike having already turned in an hour earlier. However, the doubts that Twilight had managed to shelve during the evening returned in full force when she laid down and closed her eyes. It wasn't so much that it was undermining her faith in her relationship with her friends, rather that the answer to her conundrum, the refutation of what Baron Elderflower had argued, refused to let her rest. It was probably one of Twilight's greatest vices that, when she had a puzzle to ponder or a conundrum to consider, her mind just would not rest until she'd analyzed the issue to her satisfaction. Still, exhaustion and the darkness of night took their toll and Twilight finally felt herself slipping away from the waking world. Unconsciously, she already realized that it would be a rough night for her. Falling asleep when she was so agitated rarely resulted in pleasant dreams. They weren't out-and-out nightmares. But often, the dreams that came to her when she was in such a state tended to be bizarre beyond reason, deliberately tormenting her with their illogical nature. It always felt as though she was trapped in a state halfway between being awake and asleep. It was never very restful. However, as the waking world faded away, a shimmering blue light washed through her mind and drew her into darkness. The scenery was familiar. Looking around, Twilight saw that she was now standing in a dark void. All around her, countless points of light glowed like stars dotting the night sky. Immediately, the answer came to her. After all, she had been here once before. Good evening, Twilight Sparkle. How do you fare this night? The starscape before Twilight's eyes swirled, seeming to come alive until a dark blue hoof stepped out from within, followed by the rest of the alicorn's slender body. Princess Luna now stood before Twilight, standing tall and proud, her mane and tail blending seamlessly with the tapestry of stars around them while her crescent moon cutie mark shined, almost like the real thing, through the darkness. Reflexively, Twilight bowed before Luna, who sighed. You need not observe such formalities with me, Twilight Sparkle, especially here of all places. Rising up, Twilight looked up at Luna, feeling a bit confused. But why am I here? She asked. I was hoping to speak with you, said Luna. I heard that you had a busy day and that something was bothering you. You, did. Twilight blinked and tilted her head. Luna coughed awkwardly and rubbed her foreleg, averting her gaze. Your cold friend and young assistant may have sent you a letter expressing their concerns about your anxiety. That made Twilight frown at the realization that Spike and Arkenstone had talked to Princess Celestia without asking her about it. Still, what was done was done. Luna continued, apparently ignoring the slight agitation the facts she just revealed had caused Twilight. Of course, my sister is not adverse to talking with you and is more than happy to listen to your troubles. She wouldn't be able to come to you directly for a while, as busy as she is, and I don't think that you'd want to come back to Canterlot so soon. Twilight nodded. Of course, she and Celestia could always speak through letters. But that would be a stilted, drawn-out conversation, even factoring in the fact that neither of them would have to worry about waiting for delivery thanks to Spike's flame. But it would strain the poor dragon something awful to send and receive so many letters over such a short period of time. Spike would do it in a heartbeat, of course, but Twilight didn't want to abuse her #1 assistant's dedication like that. Thus, I volunteered to visit you in Tia's place, which I can fortunately do without leaving the comfort of my audience chamber, said Luna, her eyes glittering with amusement. I thought you couldn't hold an audience with a pony unless they were in your immediate vicinity, Twilight pointed out. After all, she'd had to come to Canterlot herself in order to speak with Luna like this before. Luna shook her head. To put it specifically, a pony must come to me if they seek an audience with me. However, I can seek out another pony in the dreamscape with perfect ease. The fact that your rest was troubled by your anxieties only made your presence all the more visible to me. I'm grateful, said Twilight, but are you okay with taking time away from your duties to do this? Who says I am neglecting my duties? Asked Luna with a sly smile. I watch over the dreams of all my little ponies. Surely, I would do little good if I could only help them one at a time. That made sense when Twilight considered it. Even if only a few ponies out of every 1,000 were having particularly troubled dreams that might require Princess Luna's intervention, the millions of ponies that made up Equestria would mean that there were hundreds, if not thousands, who needed Princess Luna's attention every night. She certainly wouldn't get much done visiting each pony one at a time. That's amazing, said Twilight. Princess Celestia sure can't be everywhere at once. Well, said Luna, blushing from Twilight's praise, it's not quite the same thing. The rules of the realm of dreams are different from those of the waking worlds, so I am not as limited in my options. It's nothing like omnipresence, rather, it's more like. Luna tilted her head and rolled her eyes upward in contemplation. What is that word the hip modern ponies use? Oh, that's right, I'm exceptionally good at multitasking, when I'm asleep, at least. I wish I could multitask in my sleep, said Twilight with a wry smile, prompting a giggle from Luna. Now then, said Luna, let us return to the subject at hoof. What has you so worried, Twilight Sparkle? Twilight sighed and turned to look at the tapestry of stars drifting around them. Well, I had my meeting with Baron Elderflower today. Luna nodded slowly. Yes, Tia was quite worried about that. I trust that he did not try anything untoward. Twilight shook her head vigorously. No, of course not. He wouldn't do anything that blatant. We had a nice, civilized discussion and tried to completely undermine each other's belief systems through reasonable argument. Luna stared at Twilight with a blank expression. That does not exactly sound like the definition of civilized conversation to me. Twilight sighed. For the nobility, that's what qualifies as civilized, she answered with an angry snort. I had to be prepared to go blow for blow just to keep up. And, how did your contest pan out? Asked Luna. Twilight's ears drooped down. I guess it was pretty much a draw, she said. Neither of us conceded and neither of us left the table happy with the outcome either. It has always been said that the hallmark of a good compromise is that no one is happy with the result, mused Luna. That's not relevant, said Twilight. We didn't compromise on anything. This was a philosophical slugfest where neither of us really got the upper hoof. So we've just retreated back to our corners for the next round. I rather like that metaphor, said Luna with an amused smile, but I get the feeling that, in spite of your admission that it was a draw, that the Baron of Dream Valley got in some fairly substantial blows, as it were, over the course of your contest. You could say that, said Twilight. And what is it, exactly, that he said that vexes you so? Inquired Luna, leaning in closer. Well, Baron Elderflower researched the pasts of my friends and I, explained Twilight, and he used that information to point out how we were all connected to each other before we even met, how our meeting was practically destiny. Luna gave Twilight another blankly confused stare. I am not certain that I understand how this is a blow to you, she said. It's just. Twilight took a deep breath. The Baron's philosophy is rooted in his belief that every pony has a predetermined purpose in life and that ponies straying from what their purpose is meant to be is placing Equestria in danger. He isn't just talking about cutie marks either. He believes that ponies' roles are further predetermined by their tribes. That is an incredibly archaic point of view, said Luna thoughtfully. Twilight nodded her agreement, which explains why the plan he outlined to me was the first step to winding back the clock on the past few centuries of equestrian social development. The point is that to support his position, he used my friendships to show how my path has been determined by destiny. The sonic rainboom that Rainbow Dash performed was a catalyst that led to the discovery of all of our cutie marks. Then we met in Ponyville and together we gained the elements of harmony and defeated you as Nightmare Moon. Twilight had been afraid that the reminder of her dark aspect would make Luna flinch. However, the Alicorn merely nodded her agreement to Twilight's words. I remember when we all told the Cutie Mark Crusaders the stories of our cutie marks, how we came to realize the bond that we had. Twilight sniffed, her eyes tearing up. I was so proud of it at the time. I even wrote a friendship report to Princess Celestia about it. But now, what Elderflower said, what he insinuated, that our friendship was born from destiny, that we were meant to be together, that none of it was really by our choice, that we were just pieces in a puzzle being put in our proper places. I thought I'd understood the elements of harmony, what it was that allowed us to use them. But now, a hoof gently found its way beneath Twilight's chin and lifted her eyes to meet Luna's. That same hoof gently traced under Twilight's eyes, brushing away her tears as Luna smiled fondly down at her. My dear little pony, she said, her voice as soft as the whisper of wine through the grass on a clear summer's night, you are such a wonderful mare to think about such things. I don't. Luna's smile widened. That Elderflower's words have caused you so much distress is a sign of how much you truly love and treasure your friends and the bond you hold with them. That is no mere construct of destiny. But, isn't what Elderflower pointed out true? Asked Twilight. It is, somewhat, answered Luna, and yet you know that his argument is lacking somehow, that there is a deficiency in his reasoning. That is the real reason this conundrum troubles you so. But I can't figure out what it is, said Twilight, once again lowering her eyes as her mind ran through the question yet again. It can't be that destiny is a false idea. Luna let out a loud, bellowing laugh that echoed through the empty space around them. Which should have been physically impossible since there should have been no objects for the sound to rebound off of, but Twilight forced herself to remember that this was a dream and conventional physics did not apply. Oh no, said Luna, destiny certainly does exist. I have known its power and felt its presence. It was destiny that led Tia and I to first stumble across the means to defeat Discord. Millennia later, you would discover those same means and use them to save me from myself. You met Tia by destiny, met your friends by destiny. However, Elderflower grossly overestimates destiny's importance. What do you mean? Asked Twilight. Let me pose it to you this way, said Luna, a merry twinkle in her eye. What did you think when you first met the ponies who would become your closest friends? Twilight blinked. Well. She paused when Luna held up a hoof. When I ask, I mean, what was your first impression? This may be somewhat difficult, but I need you to strip away the layers of depth and insight added by hindsight and a greater understanding of who your friends really are. Set that all aside for a moment and give me the completely unvarnished first impression you had of each of them. Twilight thought about her answers and slowly looked away, feeling guilt and shame beginning to pile up in her gut. Luna sighed. Let me take this moment to remind you, she said, that what is said betwixt us within the world of dreams remains in the world of dreams. Not that you say and do here can follow you into the waking world by my actions. Remember, I have a guise that forbids me from using the knowledge I gain from the world of dreams in the world of the waking. What you say here stays here even when next we speak again when we are both awake. Now, starting with the first pony you met, what did you think of them? Well, Twilight thought about it for a moment. Technically, the first pony she'd met had been Pinkie Pie, but that had been so brief it didn't really qualify as a meeting. So she went on to the next viable candidate. The first pony I really met was Applejack. When I met her, she was hosting a family reunion at her farm and preparing the food for the summer sun celebration. When I met her I thought. Twilight swallowed nervously. It was extremely difficult for her to imagine herself thinking of her friends this way after all that they had been through together. I thought she was pushy, did way too much talking and not enough listening. She latched onto me and forced me to meet all of her family, even though I couldn't have cared less at the time. Then she basically force-fed me a small feast of apple confections until I was almost too full to walk back to town. By the time Spike and I were done up at the farm, I just wanted to get away from her. Then I met Rainbow Dash. At first, I thought she was just a braggart, a pony who loved to talk big and show off. She was more interested in lazing about and fantasizing about the Wonderbolts than actually doing her job. Sure, once she got started, she did it ridiculously fast, but then she just had to rub it in. After that was Rarity. Just like Applejack, I thought she was way too pushy. She wouldn't let me get a word in edgewise and just dragged me back to her boutique and started planning to dress me up like I was some doll and not a pony. Even more annoying was the way that Spike completely latched onto her. I swear that crush of his was one of the biggest causes of my stress for a long time while I stayed in Ponyville. We had to sneak away before Rarity wasted any more of my time on a game of dress up. Fluttershy was next. When I first tried to talk to her, the first thought I had was that she was weak. She couldn't even tell me her own name for Celestia's sake. I wasn't even trying to be intimidating. If anything, I was trying to be nice and avoid scaring her, but she acted like a damn coward anyway. The way she cringes when you've done absolutely nothing to deserve that behavior, slinking about like she's terrified of you even when you haven't tried to scare her. It makes you want to give her something to actually be afraid of. To make matters worse, then she noticed Spike and then I couldn't get her away from me. She tailed us all the way back to the library because she'd never seen a baby dragon before. And then there was Pinkie Pie. I just don't have the words to really describe her. I thought she was the worst. It was like important things like logic and reason didn't matter to her and she just did whatever she wanted. She went and shoved her welcome party down my throat even though the last thing I wanted to do at the moment was a party. I had important things to get done and she just wouldn't shut up about having fun and making friends. All of them, they absolutely drove me up the wall. They were nothing like me. They didn't understand me at all. Those ponies were completely crazy. Twilight finally settled down out of her rant, panting for breath. Digging up her memories of those first impressions had also allowed her to re-experience all the anger and frustration the events themselves had caused. Those feelings had been unpleasantly vivid. Perhaps that vividness was due to the fact that Twilight was recalling those memories in the dreamscape. She looked up hesitantly at Princess Luna, expecting an angry frown. After what she said, Twilight wouldn't have been surprised to see Luna being upset with her. However, when her eyes met Luna's, all she saw was calm acceptance, as though Luna didn't mind at all what Twilight had said. In other words, said Luna, your first impression of those 5 was that you wanted nothing to do with them. They were simply items to be crossed off your checklist so you could get back to what you really wanted to do. Twilight sniffed and nodded. Luna strode forward and placed herself alongside Twilight. She spread a wing and laid down, the pressure from the appendage resting across Twilight's back forcing her to lay down too. Luna's wing curled inwards, pulling Twilight up against her side. For a moment they simply lay there, Luna gently nuzzling Twilight's mane, as though she were a mother comforting her foal. You need not be ashamed, said Luna finally, because, in a way, that was the entire point of this exercise. What do you mean? When you first met those 5, you could not possibly imagine them being your friends at all. In fact, you could not imagine having friends at all because you had far more important things to do than simply making friends. Twilight's head sank, a blush of shame covering her features as Luna tittered lightly. Tia told me a great deal about what you were like before you'd gone to Ponyville. I don't doubt that your first feelings regarding those 5 were echoed by them. They probably found you to be arrogant, condescending, and completely dismissive of the things that mattered so dearly to them. Twilight shivered against Luna's side. And yet, continued Luna, when I returned from the moon and you set out to stop me from bringing about Night Eternal, they came with you. They followed you into one of the most dangerous and treacherous places in all of Equestria, even though they didn't like you. And then, when you confronted me at the old palace, you recognized the things that drew you to them. You identified what bound you all together and affirmed those feelings within your heart. That is what allowed you to call forth the elements of harmony and use them to best me. Your meeting with the ponies that would become your friends may have been predestined. But the friendship that actually resulted was most certainly not. It may have been fate that you 6 met. However, it was your insight and your willingness to look beyond the flaws that stood out so starkly to you the first time you met them that allowed you to fully realize the bond between the 6 of you and what allowed you to wield the elements. Destiny could not do that for you. Only you, Twilight Sparkle, could take that next crucial step. What are you saying exactly? Asked Twilight. Luna smiled. That is how I understand destiny. It rarely works the way we think it does and almost never works the way we want it to, because it can only take us so far. Ponies like Elderflower want destiny to do all the work for them, to decide every pony's path through life so that they do not have to agonize over their own choices or doubt their own decisions. But, if you ask me, destiny cannot do that. Then what is it? Asked Twilight. Luna laughed, much more quietly than last time, but a merrier sound. Destiny is merely the starting line. It brought you and your friends together, but the rest was up to you. They could have easily chosen not to follow you into the Everfree Forest and merely look to their own. You could have ignored the virtues that they showed through the challenges that you overcame and focused upon your own actions. Twilight thought about Luna's words, turning them over in her head. She remembered the irritation she'd first felt about meeting those five. She then contrasted it to how her feelings had changed after everything they had faced together in their journey to acquire the elements, a journey that had ended with Twilight not wanting to leave them. There had been no grand revelation, no magical switch that had been thrown that made her suddenly like those ponies. Even now, the faults that had been so glaring to her when she first met them still persisted. Applejack was still prone to being unbearably stubborn. Rainbow Dash was still something of a braggart and an attention hog. Rarity was needlessly overdramatic. Fluttershy was still far too retiring at times for Twilight's tastes. And Pinkie Pie, Dot was still Pinkie Pie, completely unpredictable and illogical, a pony who frequently failed to understand that not every pony liked to have fun the same way that she did. But through her experiences, Twilight had come to understand what lay beneath those flaws, the things that had reached out and drawn her to them. Applejack was dependable and reliable when it really counted. Rainbow Dash never left a friend hanging, even if it meant losing the chance to advance towards her dreams. Rarity would drop everything in a heartbeat to work on a request for a friend. Fluttershy was endlessly caring, kind, and gentle. And Pinkie Pie, Dot was still Pinkie Pie, utterly dedicated to making each day an experience new and fresh, always seeking to brighten the lives of others. They were her friends, the ponies she held closest to her heart, along with her family and Colt friend. They were her anchor of sanity, even if they were the cause of much of the opposite. She could no sooner consider breaking things off with them than she would tearing off one of her own limbs. Luna was right. Their friendship had been born from their shared experiences, their willingness to look beyond one another's faults and embrace the things that made each of them different is something precious and special. Such a bond couldn't be attributed to a simple concept like destiny. It was brought about by understanding of each other, acknowledging one another's flaws and accepting each other as friends in spite of or even because of those very same traits. How do you feel now? Asked Princess Luna, smiling down at Twilight, who was now smiling back. Much better, said Twilight. Thank you for your wise counsel, Princess. You are most welcome, said Luna, once again leaning down to nuzzle Twilight's mane. When next you and the Baron come out of your respective corners, I suspect that you will have the edge over him. I'll give it my best, promised Twilight. Luna nodded. I shall take my leave of you now. I wish you pleasant dreams, Twilight sparkle. Good night, Princess Luna, said Twilight. Luna's body once again dissolved into a mass of stars and swirled away. The stars around Twilight faded away into a warm darkness that enveloped her. Soon Twilight's dreams were filled with the warmth, affection, and colors of the ponies she held dear. Twilight felt the sun's warmth across her face before her eyes opened and she saw the light streaming in through her library curtains. Reflexively, her mouth opened in a yawn and she stretched underneath the blankets over her bed. Given how troubled she'd been when she'd first gone to bed, she was amazed that she'd just woken up from one of the most restful sleeps she'd ever had the privilege of having. Maybe I should get more sleep counseling sessions from Princess Luna, she thought with a giggle. Rolling out of bed, Twilight noted that she'd risen a little earlier than normal. That was fine. She spotted Spike, still curled up in his basket, snoring away. I'm going to have to get him a proper bed soon, she thought. The little dragon was getting larger quickly now. She estimated it wouldn't be long before he reached pony size or bigger. She certainly hoped the predictions she'd made about his growth were accurate. If her assessments of Spike's nature were correct, his growth was actually being guided by subtle and slow shape-shifting magic that would allow his body to better adapt to his surroundings. That meant that there was a likelihood that he wouldn't grow beyond a pony's size because that was the size best suited for living amongst ponies. If that was true, then all of her previous worries over what to do once Spike outgrew the library would be meaningless. It would be the best for Spike given that he was now Apple Bloom's special some pony, some dragon, Twilight amended. It would be much easier on their relationship if Spike remained in the same size class as his filly friend. Twilight decided to leave Spike alone for now. Just because she'd woken up early, there wasn't any reason that Spike had to as well. Besides, she had some things she could take care of on her own before her number one assistant woke up. So how does this work? Asked Don, eyeing his mother curiously. The two of them stood in the basement of Town Hall. Before them laid a trio of boxes about 3/4 the Colt's size. They were just a few of the many boxes stored down in the basement. However, each one of this trio of boxes was marked with a border of green tape around the top of it. It's simple, replied Fluttershy with a smile, her silky pink locks bouncing slightly as she turned to look at her adopted son. We just need to inspect the bells we're using for winter wrap-up so that we can wake up all of our animal friends after their hibernation. That sounds rather easy, said Dawn. Is there any particular reason that we need to do it so far ahead of time? After all, winter wrap-up was over a month away. If there are any problems, we may need to order new bells, said Fluttershy. Twilight's always talking about how important it is to plan ahead for problems like that so that we aren't scrambling to do everything at the last minute. She would, said Dawn with a shrug and an amused smirk. He'd heard that before Twilight's arrival, the ponies of Ponyville had rarely, if ever, gotten spring to come on time. Once Twilight Sparkle had taken the reins of winter wrap-up, she'd managed to change things around so that spring now arrived on time routinely. Given how much Twilight valued proper preparation and pre-planning, it only made sense that she was also behind the little aspects of the work, such as the errand he and Fluttershy were running now. As his mother opened the first of the boxes, Dawn was surprised to note that the bells were all different shapes and sizes. Well, not all of them. But there was a surprising variety. So many different ones, he said. Fluttershy nodded. The important thing is to wake up all the animals gently and considerately. But many animals have different ranges of hearing, so a snake might react differently to a particular sound than a bear. We have to check and make sure that they're all in working order. Dawn frowned as he looked down at the bells. How do we do that? He said. I remember you telling me that some of the sounds certain animals respond to are out of the range of equine hearing. Can we actually test the sound of something we can't hear? We don't need to worry about that, said Fluttershy, her wing dipping into a saddlebag and pulling out a crystal of the same lavender color as Twilight's coat. Twilight made this for us to test the bells with. You just ring the bell by the crystal. If the tone is correct, then the crystal turns blue. If it's wrong, then the crystal will turn red and the bell will have to be fixed. Luckily, Miss Vinyl Scratch is good at that sort of thing. And how does it know which bells are supposed to make which sounds? Asked Dawn. Magic. Oh, Dawn decided to leave it at that. When it came down to magic, he tended to believe that he was better off assuming that Twilight knew what she was talking about. Fluttershy had evidently performed this task before, so it was at least fairly reliable. Dawn also noted, perhaps with a certain degree of cynicism, that Twilight seemed to be making use of a loophole in the rules that forbade the use of most kinds of unicorn magic to assist in winter wrap-up. During the time he'd spent traveling with his master, Dawn had seen similar events in other towns they had passed through during the transition between winter and spring. It appeared to be a common fixture in many towns where unicorns were a minority of the population, particularly agricultural communities, like Ponyville. In all of those communities, it had been the same. Unicorn magic was mostly forbidden. Dawn had always been curious as to why. Maybe Arkenstone would know the particulars, he thought, resolving to put the question to the knight at the next opportunity. However, that would come later. Right now, what was important was helping his mother with her task. Together, the two of them began to sort the bells, separating them out according to which animal they were supposed to awaken, so that each group could be tested efficiently. The work was pleasant and Dawn was more than happy for the opportunity to spend time with his mother. Ever since he'd gotten his job at the tea house, he'd begun to spend less and less time with her and more with his friends. Dawn supposed that it was the norm for ponies his age, but he'd gone so long without a real parental figure in his life that he felt that every moment he got to spend in Fluttershy's company was something to be cherished. So he worked and listened as Fluttershy cheerfully explained about which bells woke what animals, sometimes listing various interesting facts about them. He marked it as a day well spent. "How are ya doings, kid?" asked the mare as she grinned down at Sweetie Belle, a twinkle in her magenta eyes. Sweetie's pink and purple mane bobbed up and down as she jumped excitedly. "I'm doing great, Miss Scratch," she chirped back, her own pale green eyes sparkling as she gazed up at the mare in front of her. The mare and the filly shared the same white coat, but that was where the resemblance ended. Vinyl Scratch's mane was a tousled electric blue mess that ended in uneven spikes that draped down the sides of her neck. Her tail, both similarly colored and unkempt, kept twitching back and forth to some soundless rhythm that seemed to exist only in the back of Vinyl's mind. Her flank was decorated by a cutie mark in the form of a pair of eighth notes. Her face was practically glowing with energy and enthusiasm as she grinned down at her young protege. In contrast, Sweetie Belle's own mane and tail were much more well kept, having been curled into something similar to her elder sister's style. At present, her flank was still quite blank, a fact that had caused no end of frustration to the filly, seeing as she was one of the last of her immediate circle of friends to obtain her cutie mark. Still, that frustration took a backseat to her enthusiasm as she grinned back up at Vinyl with a smile that simultaneously contained all the innocence that a foal could convey, along with the potential for mischief that had always made the Cutie Mark Crusaders a name that caused fear and dread in equal parts with the amusement it inspired in those who heard it. "Ready to get started again?" asked Vinyl, already turning around to lead the filly into her house. Not bothering with a verbal response, Sweetie merely nodded eagerly and pranced in after her new mentor. While she had been in Canterlot with her friends and family for the heart's-warming holiday, a certain cellist had suggested to Sweetie that she seek Vinyl's instruction when she got back to Ponyville. Given that Vinyl Scratch was better known to Ponyville and Equestria at large as DJ Pon 3, Sweetie hadn't exactly expected a warm or enthusiastic welcome. Celebrities who might relish attention while on stage tended to react less positively to such attention when they were simply trying to live their lives. Sweetie had very much doubted that Vinyl would be excited at the prospect of having a novice filly underhoof during times when she wasn't working. So it was something of a surprise to Sweetie when she found out that her initial expectations had been very wrong. It had taken all of a few seconds for Vinyl to warm up to her, and once Octavia's name came up, she'd immediately agreed to teach Sweetie the rare form of magic that she practiced. Not that Sweetie had taken Octavia's word alone on Vinyl's qualifications. She had also asked Twilight about Vinyl. To her surprise, Sweetie learned from Twilight that, aside from being a successful DJ, Vinyl had also graduated from the Equestrian Academy of Arts and Sciences with a degree in sonothaumaturgy. "Okay then," said Vinyl, leading Sweetie into her house. She led Sweetie into her studio, where a seat and a stand were waiting. Sitting on the stand was a piece of simple sheet music. Once Sweetie was in place, Vinyl stood back, still grinning. "Okay kiddo, start tuning up." Sweetie nodded and ran through her warm-up exercises, which consisted of producing a full scale of notes with her magic. She started low and worked her way up to the highest notes on the scale before working her way back down to the low ones. Vinyl had been impressed by both Sweetie's range and accuracy, suggesting that the filly might actually be capable of accurately producing notes in the infrasonic and ultrasonic ranges in addition to those in the normal range of pony hearing. Next, she and Vinyl worked their way through some simple sheet music, with Sweetie reproducing the notes with her magic. They were basic pieces, considering that Sweetie was only just starting to learn how to read notes, but she was learning fast. The two of them experimented with some rhythms and different sounds. Sweetie also practiced producing more than one sound from her horn at a time. She even practiced singing at the same time she used her horn to produce notes. The results were often nothing short of amazing to the filly, and she was shocked whenever Vinyl would play back the brief recordings she made of some of their sessions. Once the lesson wound down, Vinyl and Sweetie adjourned to Vinyl's living room, where Vinyl put out tea for them. It surprised Sweetie to see that Vinyl even owned a tea set, much less the charming white porcelain one decorated with pink flowers growing from green vines. It seemed very out of place with the somewhat untidy image that Vinyl herself presented, especially on stage. Admittedly, Sweetie hadn't had much experience with Vinyl's stage persona. Many of Vinyl's gigs, as the mayor referred to them, were held at venues that Sweetie wasn't quite old enough to enter yet. Thus, she was limited to the few larger public performances that Vinyl was occasionally invited to do. However, there was no question that the image of Vinyl on stage, laughing, yelling, bobbing, dancing, and working her sets was a very different image from the calm, relaxed mare sipping tea in front of her. "Why are you so different on stage?" asked Sweetie, a bit nervous, wondering if she was traversing on territory too personal for discussion. Vinyl shrugged. "Well, a mare on stage has got to maintain a certain image if she wants to hold her audience. But the truth is, I sort of feel like a different pony on stage. Standing up there, in front of the crowd, feeling their excitement, it just makes the blood start buzzing in my veins and I get into the groove." "Oh," said Sweetie, her ears going back slightly as she tried to picture herself up on the stage like she had seen Vinyl doing. Instead of exciting her, the image of countless ponies staring up at her, watching her every movement, taking in everything that she said or did, made her skin crawl. Vinyl seemed to notice this and gave Sweetie a small smile. It's not for every pony, I know. You probably aren't the sort to go up there and knock their socks off with the power of rock. I guess, admitted Sweetie Bee, but what's the point of me learning this then? Vinyl shrugged, as though this very important question was actually rather minor. You have a knack for it, that's for sure. You have a really good ear for music and I can see you going far at the academy. Both Octavia and I went there, though we were in different years and different fields. I'll have you know that I hardly had any recitals or practical demonstrations. Sweetie cocked her head slightly to the side. Huh, why? 'Cause what I was doing were a lot of advanced theoretical courses, lots of experimenting with sound and magic. That's what sonothaumaturgy's about after all, using music as the basis for the structure of magic and its properties. But why did you become a DJ then? Asked Sweetie. It sounded like Vinyl had more in common with a scientist like Twilight Sparkle than an artist like Octavia or Sweetie's own sister. 'Cause I thought that was the best way to put what I'd learned to use, said Vinyl, rising to her hooves, grinning widely. It's the ultimate frontier, the crossroads between science and art, studying the impact of music and how it affects the pony who hears it, how certain sounds produce certain reactions, and learning to put all those together into a symphony of sensation. When you understand it, you have the power to make ponies dance and joy. You can make them laugh until their guts ache, or you make them sob like babies. It's the ultimate combination of causation and creativity, ever-changing, ever-expanding, always overflowing with unlimited possibilities. That is the power of music. Vinyl froze, one hoof pointing to the ceiling, her eyes wide as she panted slightly after her extended diatribe, only to realize that Sweetie was now staring at her like she'd grown another head. Sorry, said Vinyl, settling back into her seat and taking another sip from her tea to calm herself down. I get kinda carried away sometimes. I'm used to it, said Sweetie with a small shrug. She'd borne witness to similar outbursts from her own sister after all. What was more, she felt like Vinyl's words had ignited a spark of something inside of her. Her mind, instead of turning to the vision of herself on the stage, instead conjured images of Sweetie making new discoveries of her own, blazing new paths with music and the way it interacted with the hearts of minds of ponies. Those images made her pulse quicken. Vinyl couldn't help but grin, as though she could see that faint spark in Sweetie's eyes. You're worried about performing, but that's only one thing you can do with music, she said. That's just how almost every pony tends to think about it, because the musicians your average pony is going to know about are performers. We put our talent and skills front and center for every pony to see, so that's what they think about when they think about musicians. But for every performer, there's maybe half a dozen other musicians that no pony knows about. Take my friend, Buzzkill. He's the guy who built the equipment I use in most of my performances. Vinyl jerked her head in the direction of the music room, where her turntable set and its associated speakers rested. He and I worked together to build that beauty. It took a lot of work with applied magitech and other sciences to put that together. But we couldn't accomplish that if he wasn't almost as much of a musician as I was. The same goes for the ponies who make the other instruments we use. They're all as much musicians as we are, in their own way. Wow, gasped Sweetie Belle, I had no idea there was so much you could do with that. Vinyl nodded. Yeah, there's a whole world of possibilities out there. You have a gift. It's just a matter of finding out what you want to do with it. That's the reason I'd like to have you learn about producing infrasonic and ultrasonic sounds. But I thought ponies couldn't hear those sounds, Sweetie pointed out. Oh, we can hear them, replied Vinyl. It's just that we can't hear them the same way we hear normal, audible sounds. They can still produce a reaction from the pony that hears them, and they can have all sorts of interesting effects depending on what sounds or what combination of sounds you might be using. Oh, said Sweetie, her mind already trying to come up with possibilities, though she didn't know enough to really figure what such sounds might be capable of. We'll think of something, said Vinyl, but not until you really have the basics down. Sweetie nodded, looking forward to her next lessons under Vinyl. Author's notes. I'm pretty sure we all wish we could multitask while sleeping. I certainly wish I could do my job while sleeping. Lucky Luna. For Vinyl Scratch, I kinda thought it'd be fun to have her sit midway between Twilight and Rarity, sort of a mashup between the mad scientist and the dreaming artist. She's a fun character to write like that. Vinyl doesn't have a huge role in the story, but it's fun to get to write her nonetheless. Next chapter, Rarity does something epic. Not always right. Chapter 5, Not always right. The winter wrap-up was scheduled to take place over the course of a pair of days during the official transition between winter and spring. The preparations for it actually began well in advance. The weather team were already lightening the cloud cover and reducing the overall snowfall, slowly reducing the amount of snow that accumulated on the ground as spring approached, making it much easier to clear the rest of it away when the big day finally arrived. The leaders of the different teams were already getting organized as they mapped out the routes the migrating birds would use, which burrows would be visited first, and what order which fields would be cleared for planting. Fluttershy visited Twilight several times over the next few days, along with Rainbow Dash and Applejack, who represented the weather and planting teams respectively. Though Fluttershy wasn't in charge of the animal team, her newfound self-confidence sadly did not extend to taking charge of other ponies in such an important situation. She was still Ponyville's primary animal expert and the pony that every pony, including her team leader, consulted on all matters fauna-related. Over the course of several hours across a week, Fluttershy and her friends hashed out the division of labor and sequence of events required for Ponyville to make a smooth transition into spring. For the rest of Ponyville, most everything progressed as normal, with every pony quietly awaiting their assignments for winter wrap-up. Many of them had carried out the same tasks every year and had little expectation for things to change now, especially since Twilight had wisely adopted the old adage, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. The only changes required came when younger ponies grew old enough to help with more arduous tasks or other ponies had gotten sufficiently old that they needed to retire. Through all of this, Twilight's skill at organization saw everything through with a minimum of fuss. Are you sure about this? Asked Flaxseed nervously, shifting his weight from one side to the other as Rarity sat at the sewing machine in front of him in the workroom. I don't want to be a bother. As I said, it's largely up to you, dear, said Rarity without looking up from her work. I fully understand if you feel that you aren't up to joining in to help with winter wrap-up. Goodness knows, even with Twilight making everything run smoothly, things can still get quite confusing and hectic at times. Nearly every pony in town will be out and about doing some task or another. Flaxseed shivered at the thought of ponies moving frantically all around him, with only limited means to keep track of them at all. Even if he tried to stay with Rarity, there was still every chance that he might get separated and end up surrounded by a frantic packed mass of ponies, a situation that would not do his nerves a lick of good. I have spoken with Twilight at length about your situation. We both agree that we shouldn't even entertain the notion of making you do something that you aren't ready for. However, Twilight did say that she had something that might be up your alley, as it were. What's that? Rarity lifted her head up and smiled over her glasses at Flaxseed. If you feel up to it, she would like your help in handling the logistics of the affair, keeping track of our materials, our seed stores, tools, how much we use, how much we have left over, that sort of thing. I think it would be the perfect job for a pony of your skills. A great deal of it would be preparatory work and you wouldn't need to interact with too many ponies at once to get the job done. That doesn't sound too bad, said Flaxseed softly, his mind turning the idea over. Again, it's only if you feel up to it, said Rarity as she returned to her own labor. Flaxseed thought Rarity's words over as he watched the dress take shape beneath her skilled hooves. His nerves told him to stay inside the boutique, to not risk stepping out during such a hectic time, when countless ponies would be all around him, wandering about on their various jobs without a thought for anyone else. No pony would probably notice if some pony started following him, or began to slip closer to him in the crowd. Already, Flaxseed could see it in his mind's eye, a gentle bump against his side, a chill in his chest as some pony used the confusion and ruckus to slip a knife between his ribs. Some pony had tried that on him while he'd been living in Manhattan after all. At the time, Flaxseed had been lucky that the stab had missed glancing off his ribs rather than going between them and leaving the stallion with a scar that ran along the length of his barrel. The scar had faded and was all but invisible beneath the fur of his coat, but it was still there all the same. More importantly, Flaxseed still remembered at that moment where some pony had drawn a line of pain across his side. He'd been lucky to get away before his attacker had made a second try. Flaxseed shuddered and forced the memory back down. From what Rarity had told him, he wouldn't be out in the middle of things, but tucked safely off to the side, maybe in the library or town hall, where he could work through the numbers and only have to deal with ponies singly or a few at a time. In that situation, it would be much easier for him to keep from panicking. He also thought about the other concerns Rarity had for him. She'd told him about her desire to get him more comfortable with the thought of going out on his own, and Flaxseed had to admit that it made a certain amount of sense. He'd had fewer problems in the previous places he'd stayed, most likely because his housing had never seemed all that much safer than the streets outside. But here, in the Carousel Boutique, Flaxseed felt secure. The boutique was a sanctuary to him now, an island of absolute safety in the midst of an unsafe world, a place where he could truly let down his guard and not worry about any pony trying to take advantage of him. The kindness and consideration Rarity and her sister had shown him had worn through the stubborn stallion's defenses, and now Flaxseed was able to feel almost completely at ease here. Unfortunately, that meant that the world beyond the boutique's walls seemed to become even more daunting by comparison. Now that he was able to relax, Flaxseed felt less comfortable leaving and going out into a world where he would have to put his guard back up and resume watching his surroundings for any kind of threat. Though Rarity and her friends, including Dawn, had told him that Ponyville was a safe haven, especially for ponies with his condition, Flaxseed couldn't bring himself to act upon their suggestions or take their reassurances to heart. There, all done, crowed Rarity, rising up from the sewing machine and draping her finished work across a ponyquin. It was a fine dress of red silk with decorations of golden thread laid around emerald chips along the hems. It was excellent work, though nothing particularly daring by Rarity's standards. That's the dress for your client, right? Asked Flaxseed, looking the dress over carefully. Rarity nodded. Yes, she should be arriving tomorrow to get it fitted and pick it up. I've been getting more orders from other towns lately. I believe my publicity is improving. That's good to hear, said Flaxseed. He remembered Rarity mentioning this client before. She'd been working on the design before Hearts Warming, until she had been sidetracked by her desire to make her 5 closest friends special dresses for the winter gala. Now that she was back in Ponyville, Rarity had been working on the design on and off for the past couple of weeks, in between other more immediately demanding orders and looking after the needs of her new apprentice, who was out buying additional materials at the moment. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the boutique, along with Sweetie Belle's voice as she shouted an enthusiastic, "I'm home." Folding her glasses and setting them aside, Rarity smiled as she went out into the showroom, Flaxseed in tow, to greet her younger sister. "Welcome home, Sweetie," said Rarity. "I take it your latest lesson with Miss Scratch went well." Sweetie nodded eagerly, her head bobbing excitedly on top of her neck. "It's going amazingly. Vinyl's been teaching me all about producing infrasonic and ultrasonic tones." Both Rarity and Flaxseed paused, blinking for a moment before shooting one another a confused glance. "Why are you learning about that?" asked Rarity. Sweetie smiled. "Vinyl thinks that I could use my magic to make those tones and that I can do some really amazing things with them." "What sort of things?" asked Rarity. Sweetie tilted her head thoughtfully. "We're not sure yet. But Vinyl says that it's sure to be awesome." Rarity pressed her lips together into a thin line as she considered what counted as awesome in the mind of a cutie mark crusader, as many of their favorite ideas seemed to have led, one way or another, into wanton, and, during one particular incident involving a takeout restaurant, wanton destruction. She could only hope that, whatever Vinyl Scratch was teaching her, Sweetie's efforts wouldn't result in another bout of disaster that would have Rarity called to town hall to listen to one of Mayor Mare's lectures on keeping her sister from participating in the destruction of public property, or something like that. Still, it was interesting to hear about Sweetie's lessons over dinner. The more Rarity heard, the more she had to admit that Sweetie's interests seemed to be advancing in an entirely different direction from what she had expected. Perhaps I should look into tuition fees and the like for the academy. Miss Scratch seems to think that Sweetie would do well there. It wasn't an outrageous consideration. The Equestrian Academy of Arts and Sciences was a well-known institution in Trottingham. Rarity herself had left Ponyville in order to attend trade school. Still, she worried that Sweetie might be reluctant to leave her friends behind, though it was probably inevitable. After all, it was highly likely that Rumble, if he didn't simply go straight into an apprenticeship on the weather team after graduation, would likely be heading to a dedicated Pegasus institution on one of their cloud cities, as might Scootaloo, depending on what she wanted for her future career. Apple Bloom would likely remain in Ponyville to continue helping with the farm, possibly apprenticing with a local architect. Celestia only knew what Don Lightwing would be doing after he finished schooling. In any case, it was highly likely that the Crusaders would be going their separate ways eventually, for a time at least. Still, that problem was still an issue for the future. For the time being, Rarity simply settled in to listen to Sweetie Belle as she related her latest exploits under Vinyl Scratch's tutelage. The knot on the end of the cord hissed as it hurled through the air. Rumble swung the cord in tight circles before catching it on his shoulder and allowing it to wrap around his barrel. He caught the knot in his hoof, bringing the cord's motion to a stop for less than a second before launching it back into action with a sharp jerking motion of his body that sent the knot leaping out and away from him like a striking snake. From there, Rumble guided the knotted cord through swings of varying speeds and directions, moving it in circles and figure-8 motions, often sending it snapping straight out again over the course of his practice. Finally, Rumble wrapped the cord around himself once again, this time eating up its entire length in the wraps and bringing the knot to rest in one of his hooves as he settled back onto the cloud, panting slightly from the exertion. "Well done," said Stormfront with an approving smile. The Pegasus stallion's coat, mane, and tail were dark gray, with dark purple highlights that gave the impression of a heavy storm cloud. His dark green eyes had been watching Rumble intently, carefully observing his actions and critiquing his motions as Rumble went through his practice. Stormfront's body was well-muscled, though nowhere near the level of some pony like Big Macintosh or Bulk Biceps, the particularly bulky Pegasus flying with the Ponyville Weather team. Rather, his musculature was slender and subtle, implying a great deal of flexibility in his motion. Most of those muscles were obscured by a long-sleeved shirt of red silk that Storm wore. Tucked inside of one of those sleeves was Stormfront's meteor hammer, his favorite weapon and the one that he was currently training Rumble in. "Thanks," said Rumble, taking a moment to unwind his practice weapon now that their training session was winding down. The dark coils of the cord stood out starkly against his light gray coat, nearly perfectly matching his dark gray, almost black mane. Said mane was matted with sweat from the colt's exertions, flattening it down out of its normal smooth wave. When he was younger, Rumble's physique had been similar to that of a filly and he'd been mistaken for a filly on a couple of occasions. However, his body was now taking on a more coltish appearance, though his outline still seemed slightly effeminate. It had been a few months since Rumble had started learning how to use the meteor hammer from Stormfront. He still remembered, a little less than fondly, smacking himself multiple times with the knotted end of the practice weapon that Storm had made for him. Presently, it had been a few weeks since the last time he'd smacked himself. It was a sign that his control over the exotic weapon was improving. Like Don and Scootaloo, Rumble's training consisted of a great many forms that practiced stringing together the individual techniques that he'd learned. He'd only recently started on the first few forms for the meteor hammer, a few of which had been devised by Stormfront himself. It was a complex weapon, tricky to master, even if it was little more than a weight on the end of a cord. Most colts probably would have gotten frustrated with how slow their learning was progressing. However, Rumble actually enjoyed the fact that he had to work to learn to use the meteor hammer. Flying had come so naturally to him that he'd been flying as well as some adults when most foals were still learning how to take off and land without bungling it. He'd been called a prodigy by some ponies. It wasn't a designation that Rumble liked. He didn't feel all that special, even if he was a natural flyer, and was afraid that being called a prodigy would split him apart from other ponies his age and make it less likely that he could maintain any friendships. So it came as something of a relief that the meteor hammer was something that he wasn't immediately a natural at. Learning and practicing were difficult, painful even, but the experience was rewarding. Seeing that look of approval on Storm's face always made Rumble feel satisfied after a long training session, no matter how frustrating it might have been. "Oh, are you two finished?" Rumble and Storm looked over and slightly down to see another Pegasus fluttering up to join them on their cloud. The mare's grayish-purple coat was difficult to see in the fading light. However, her long, flowing, pale green mane was easier to spot. Flitter alighted on the cloud just as neatly as one of the trio of dragonflies that made up her cutie mark might land on a blade of grass. "Yes," said Storm, turning to smile at Flitter, "we were just about to head back." "Oh good," said Flitter, "it's nearly time for dinner and Cloud Chaser's making her special potato soup." "Really?" exclaimed Rumble, his jaw dropping slightly as he fought to keep from drooling. "We don't want to miss that," said Storm with a warm chuckle as he and Flitter exchanged an affectionate nuzzle. The two of them had been special sumponies for a few months now. Rumble had noted that Flitter had been spending more and more time at Storm's house rather than the house she shared with Rumble, his brother Thunderlane, and Thunderlane's filly friend Cloud Chaser, who was also Flitter's elder sister. Although, thought Rumble, maybe that's for the best. If she's spending more time with her colt friend, then she won't have to deal with the rumors anymore. Granted, Rumble hadn't heard those rumors in a long time, not even since before Flitter and Storm had started dating. However, Rumble still remembered them quite clearly. He and Thunderlane had both been born in Ponyville. Their parents had moved out to Cloudspire shortly after Thunderlane had finished his apprenticeship to the weather team. Thunderlane had opted to stay behind and had happily allowed Rumble to stay with him when Rumble stated he didn't want to leave Ponyville either, although convincing their parents to allow Rumble to stay had been more than a little challenging. Shortly afterwards, Thunderlane had started dating Cloud Chaser. Their relationship had been going strong for over a year when they decided to move in together. Cloud Chaser brought Flitter to join them and the four of them had shared a house ever since. That had been when the rumors had started. Both Cloud and Flitter were attractive mares, while Thunderlane himself had been considered quite the eligible bachelor when he was still single. It was perhaps somewhat natural that some ponies would begin to conjecture that the two sisters were sharing Thunderlane's affections, or, more disturbingly, that one or the other or even both of them might be forming some illicit relationship with Rumble. The rumors had amounted to nothing more than the irritated mumblings of gossipy old mares whispering about immoral relationships and licentious behaviors when they thought Rumble wasn't close enough to overhear them. Fortunately, nothing had come of it, but Rumble still shivered at the memory of the stares he'd received in those early days whenever Flitter or Cloud walked him to school or picked him up afterwards. Not that there was much chance of that anymore. Flitter had a stallion of her own now and was spending more and more time with him. Cloud and Thunderlane were still going strong, though Thunderlane still had yet to pop the question, something that Cloud continued to grumble about to Rumble in private. It seemed that, for the time being, everything was going well. Even though Rumble had yet to get his cutie mark, he wasn't overly worried about it. He was all too happy to continue enjoying his life with his friends, working at the tea shop with the other cutie mark crusaders and training sessions with Stormfront. Once winter wrap-up finished, school would start up again and life would continue. All told, things were looking good. The beads of the abacus clicked rhythmically as Flaxseed went through the Carousel Boutique's ledgers once again. Tax season was approaching after all, and Rarity had made things a bit more complicated for herself this year by taking on a new hire and an apprentice in short order. Flaxseed chewed the inside of his lip as he frowned over the numbers, regretting the fact that he'd never managed to go to trade school in order to train to be a proper accountant. However, Twilight Sparkle had informed him that he could take a correspondence course. In the meantime, he would eventually have to go over to Town Hall to get the proper tax forms so that he could work out what Rarity actually owed the government. At least they'd be able to save some money compared to the previous years, if Rarity's records were anything to go by. In fact, there was even the possibility that Rarity was eligible for a refund, given her lack of knowledge about certain factors she could take advantage of. For example, Flaxseed had noted that Sweetie Belle had spent the majority of the previous year living with Rarity rather than their parents, who were continuously traveling throughout Equestria. Rarity would be able to claim Sweetie as a dependent, which would make her eligible for a deduction at least. There were other deductions as well, charitable commissions and donations, as well as special services to the royal family. Flaxseed was particularly proud of spotting that last one. After all, Rarity had made multiple dresses for Twilight Sparkle over the course of the previous year. Given that Twilight's brother was the husband of one Princess Cadance, Twilight technically counted as a member of the royal family as far as the government bureaucrats were concerned. The fact that Rarity had never taken a single bit for the dresses she'd made for Twilight meant that Rarity's work counted as a special service rather than a paid commission. Flaxseed's ear twitched at faint sound of the bell echoing from the boutique's showroom. It was barely audible over the sound of the sewing machine coming from the workroom, and he wasn't sure that Rarity or Coco Pommel had heard it. Carefully, Flaxseed made his way out of his office, which had originally been where Rarity kept her ledgers and other assorted financial documents. He stepped out into the workroom where Rarity was working furiously to sketch out another design on paper while Coco used the sewing machine work the fabric over on the other side of the room. Stepping up behind Rarity, Flaxseed carefully tapped her on the shoulder. Rarity jumped slightly at the unexpected contact before turning to smile at the stallion. "Oh, I'm sorry, what is it?" she said with a warm smile. Flaxseed jerked his head towards the showroom. "I heard some pony come in," he said. "Oh," exclaimed Rarity, jumping away from her work. "Goodness. Is it that time already? My client must be here." Rarity immediately charged outdoor and into the showroom, leaving a nonplussed Flaxseed behind. Out of the corner of his eye, Flaxseed saw Coco look up from her work, then giggle slightly at his consternation. The stallion let out a sigh and returned to his office. A few minutes later, Flaxseed heard the sound of hooves going past the door. Looking up, he saw a yellow tail flicking slightly as it went past. That must be her customer then, he thought, wondering just who Rarity was entertaining. "I want to thank you for coming all this way to do business with me," he heard Rarity say from somewhere down the hall leading to the kitchen. Flaxseed knew that she sometimes liked to entertain her clients with tea, something she did to improve relationships with her customers. "It was nothing," replied the other mare in a slightly grating, haughty tone. "Absolutely every pony who is any pony nowadays knows about your designs. It is very much worth my while." Rarity said something back, but Flaxseed didn't hear it. His limbs had locked, his heart seizing within his chest at the sound of the customer's voice. A rush of terror slammed into him with all the force of a runaway freight train, causing Flaxseed to nearly topple over backwards from his seat. As it was, his chest refused to budge and he couldn't even bring himself to breathe, the sound of that voice ripping memories out of the back of his mind and bringing them directly to the forefront of his consciousness. "What the hey is up with you? Where do you get off acting so sulky? Come on now, are things really so bad? You need to open up to other ponies more. If you just keep hanging around under your black little rain cloud, you're just gonna end up alone. Oh, you want to be an accountant? That's nice. I hear that you can earn a lot of money doing that. Me, I'm training to be an actress. I'm gonna get my big break on Bridal Way and I'll become famous Equestria-wide. Maybe I'll let you handle my finances when I make it big. You know, you're pretty handsome when you clean yourself up. If you keep that look, I might even let you take me out. Thanks for the wonderful evening. You certainly know how to make a mare feel special." "Wah, what happened? Why did those muggers run? What deed did you do? Flax. What's wrong with your eyes? What are you? Stay away from me, you freak." "Of course not. There's no way I'd have ever started a relationship with that stallion if I'd known what he was really like. Don't you know he's some kind of monster?" I could barely believe my own eyes. I mean, it was hideous. Anyway, I did some digging and learned there's some kind of religious order looking to exterminate freaks like that. Of course I told them where they could find him. I actually went out with that scumbag. I'm trying to make it big. I can't have a disgusting relationship like that drag me down. It's best to pull things like that up by the roots." Rarity's ears twitched as she heard a muffled thump come from Flaxseed's office. Is something wrong? She wondered. "Excuse me, Ms. Camellia," she said quickly to her customer, "I have to check up on something." The dark pink earth pony smiled at Rarity over the cup of tea she was drinking. "Please go ahead, Ms. Rarity," replied Camellia with a wink of her leaf green eyes. "It sounds like some pony had an accident. It's so hard to find reliable help these days." Rarity hid her frown as she turned around and headed for the office. Slowly, she pushed open the door and carefully looked in. The place looked empty. There wasn't much to it just yet. The naked bulb shined down over the room with a harsh white light that cast shadows across the shelves and the single, mostly bare desk. "I really need to get a proper lamp installed." There were a few sheets of paper scattered across it, along with a binder containing her financial records. However, the pony who should have been sitting behind that desk was absent from view. "Flaxseed?" asked Rarity, taking a single step further in. "Flaxseed, darling. Are you all right?" She knew he had to be in the room. He'd been going over the accounts when Camellia had come calling. He'd returned to the office and resumed working. She knew he hadn't left, as Flaxseed never left without tidying his workspace up first. It was one of the things Rarity really appreciated about him. At the sound of her voice, the desk suddenly jumped, coming back down with a thud that made Rarity jump in turn. "He's hiding. Why?" "Flaxseed, I'm coming over," she said as clearly as she could, cautiously stepping all the way into the room. Walking slowly and carefully, she made her way around the side of the desk and slowly peered behind it, trying not to make any sudden or startling moves. Flaxseed was underneath the desk, hiding behind the panel that covered the front. He was curled up into a quivering ball, from which Rarity could hear faint, strangled whimpers, as though he were trying to completely silence himself but was unable to do so. Flaxseed, said Rarity in a soft tone. Flaxseed, can you hear me? Slowly, almost reluctantly, the stallion's muscles loosened and Flaxseed uncurled enough to lift his head and look at Rarity. His eyes were a vivid, crimson color, with distinct vertical slit-shaped pupils. Their strange appearance did nothing to hide the absolute terror that burned behind them as Flaxseed stared up at Rarity as though she were some hideous beast. What on earth, wondered Rarity, what could possibly have him so terrified? Flaxseed, dear, said Rarity, moving a little closer, it's all right. It's me, Rarity. She slowly lifted a hoof to reach out to him, but it had barely risen an inch off the floor before Flaxseed yelped and thrust himself away from her, slamming into the pedestal behind him and making the whole desk rattle. The impact jolted the binder and abacus off the top and sent them clattering to the floor, the sounds only seeming to worsen Flaxseed's panic. Oh no, thought Rarity, a strong feeling of distress rising in her stomach, he's having another panic attack. This one's the worst I've ever seen. I don't know if I can help him through it. If I try to touch him, he'll probably break that desk over my head. It was clear that Flaxseed couldn't even tell it was her. His senses were addled by his fear, causing him to direct his agitation at any pony and every pony around him. Right now, she was only a threatening figure looming over him. He couldn't even see that it was her. This was worse than the first time she'd met him, and that time Flaxseed had tried to crack her skull with a tree branch. What do I do? What can I do to possibly calm him down? What even caused this in the first place? As though in answer to her unverbalized query, Rarity saw Camellia step through the door. Did I hear right? Asked Camellia, looking slowly around the office, the light gleaming off her flowing, blonde mane. Did you just say Flaxseed? Rarity pursed her lips, unsure how to answer. At least she knew the cause of Flaxseed's panic now. The sound of Camellia's voice caused Flaxseed to let out a much louder whimper and curl back up. Rarity glanced back and forth between her client and her accountant, simply uncertain how to react. One wrong move could switch Flaxseed from quivering indecision to mad violence in an instant. In the closed confines of the office, there was no telling how much damage he could do to the two mares. The decision was taken out of her hooves when Camellia casually waltzed up to the desk and stepped around it, barely even noticing Rarity as she shouldered the alabaster mare aside. Her expression was one of idle curiosity as she peered around the desk. But when her gaze lit upon the gold-colored stallion staring up at her with bright red eyes, Camellia's eyes narrowed and her face twisted into a sneer of contempt. Oh, it is you, she growled, turning around and stomping towards the door. I knew this would happen. Geez, these things always come up at the worst possible time. Miss Camellia, what in Equestria is this about? Asked Rarity, still glancing back and forth between the two of them. Camellia turned to look back at Rarity, now wearing an expression of nauseated disgust. Shaking her head, Camellia managed to force the expression off her face as she regarded Rarity. I'm sorry I caused such a ruckus. I had no idea that this dirtbag was still alive. I thought those order ponies would have gotten him by now. What? Gasped Rarity, mortified by the utter contempt in Camellia's tone. Camellia sighed. I really inconvenienced you, she said in an apologetic tone, but at least you know what that stallion really is now. Once we're done here, you should drop him like the sack of manure that he is and find some pony else. It's bad enough that you already have to share the town with one of those freaks. You shouldn't have to have another one hanging around your home and business too. Excuse me, said Rarity, horrified by what she was hearing. Come on, said Camellia, once again heading for the door, you need to finish my fittings right. Maybe the freak will see himself out in the meantime. Rarity looked down again at Flaxseed. She flicked her ear as she heard a faint trickling sound, then her nose twitched as a certain odor wafted up from the floor. Ew, whined Camellia, apparently smelling Flaxseed's urine as well. He's disgusting and a coward. How filthy can you get? That last comment made something snap inside Rarity's head. Camellia was already out of the office and heading to the workroom. Once in the workroom, she automatically stepped on the pedestal that Rarity used for her fittings, clearly eager to get things over with so she could get away from Flaxseed as soon as possible. She looked over and spotted Coco, who had stopped working with the sewing machine and was now staring at her in confusion. You should get a mop, said Camellia, cleaning up a mess like that is an apprentice's work. Ms. Rarity shouldn't have to soil her hooves by touching that freak's. That is quite enough, snapped Rarity as she stalked into the showroom, her eyes blazing with anger as she fixed Camellia with a withering glare. What the? Gasped Camellia, staring at Rarity in clear confusion. What are you angry about? Do you have any idea what a freak like that hanging around your boutique could do to your reputation? Ponies like him are better off dead. Coco gasped, her hooves flying to her mouth, unable to believe what she was hearing. I said, that is enough, snarled Rarity, her tail lashing behind her as she stalked forward. I have had enough of your attitude, Miss Camellia. You will see yourself from my boutique this instant. What? Gasped Camellia, shocked by Rarity's words. You can't be serious. You'd take the side of that freak over me. How dare you treat one of your customers like this after I paid you for that dress? Rarity's response wasn't verbal. Instead, there was a loud crack as something slammed into Camellia's muzzle, causing her head to snap to the side. The object hit the floor of the pedestal with the jingle of coins. Looking down, Camellia saw a bag of bits sitting in front of her. She reached a hoof up to the painful throbbing on her muzzle. It came away bloody. Her nose and lip were bleeding. How dare you? There's your money, said Rarity, her voice an angry hiss. Take it and get out. Your bits are not welcome here. You, snarled Camellia, baring her teeth at Rarity. You think you can get away treating a paying customer like this? They'll see you ruined. You'll never sell that dress to any pony after this. This dress? Asked Rarity, her magic stripping the crimson gown off its ponyquin. It hovered between Rarity and Camellia. What happened next made Coco shriek. Flaxseed was slowly inching his way out of the office, carefully peering around to look for the two mares that had been in the room with him. His fear had reduced their conversation to simple, furious tones in his ears that he hadn't been able to make heads or tails of. He could hear those tones again, coming from the workroom. Both mares sounded angry and their voices were going back and forth. Then came Coco's shriek. It had been a sharp, abrupt shriek of surprise, rather than a drawn-out scream of horror. It took a few seconds for Flaxseed to process why, as his ears picked up another, softer sound under Coco's cry. The sound of tearing fabric, like a dress being torn up. Leaning so he could glance into the workroom, Flaxseed's eyes widened as he saw what was happening. Rarity had the dress in the grip of her magic and was methodically shredding it, tearing apart into a heap of red and gold scraps right in front of Camellia, who was staring at the dress in stunned shock. Rarity's tearing apart her dress. The thought abruptly snapped Flaxseed back to reality, surprise and amazement rushing through his veins and shattering the hold that mind-numbing fear had been exerting over him. It was an inconceivable course of action for Rarity. She invested hours in the design and creation of her dresses. She took a great deal of care in selecting the materials and paid close attention to each and every minute detail. She could have panic attacks that rivaled Flaxseed's own, though hers tended towards the dramatic rather than violent, if an accident resulted in a single tear. She'd fret over every single snarl and misplaced stitch. Even if she were to consider unmaking one of her dresses, Flaxseed would have expected her to carefully and precisely dismantle it so she could reuse the fabric in other works rather than simply tearing it apart. Thus, the sight of Rarity shredding one of her precious creations into pieces knocked him for a loop and allowed her voice to punch through the fog of fear that had been surrounding him. His eyes took it all in with a crystal clarity that he'd never thought they possessed, as though the room were brighter than before. Flaxseed seemed able to follow the faint fluttering motions of the cloth pieces as they fell to the floor. There you go, snapped Rarity, tossing the scraps into a pile at Camellia's hooves. If you want that dress so badly, you're welcome to it. Now get lost before I summon the guard and have you escorted out. Camellia took a step back from the boiling rage in Rarity's voice. Flaxseed realized that she was bleeding, blood trickling from her nose and mouth. Did Rarity hit her? Why are you doing this? Demanded Camellia. I have two very good reasons, declared Rarity firmly with an unladylike snort. First, you insulted, terrified, and threatened a very dear friend of mine, and, if his behavior is anything to go by, you did something extremely traumatic to him in the past. Secondly, her eyes narrowed sharply. You insulted my best friend's precious son. This affront is something that I will not abide. You will see yourself out of this place, this instant. If you have any sense in that head of yours, you'll see yourself out of the town next. Camellia's lips pulled back in an angry snarl as she bared her teeth at Rarity. However, Rarity did not waver, merely returning the full force of Camellia's glare with one of her own. The two mares looked as though they were about to lunge at each other. However, finally, Camellia gave in, her anger not fading, but at least falling more under control. With an angry huff, Camellia turned to the door, flicking her tail dismissively at Rarity. You'll regret this, she snarled. No, said Rarity with firm resolution, I won't. Camellia could only snort in response before she marched out of the workroom, through the storeroom, and out the boutique's front door. Only when the sound of its slamming shut echoed through the boutique did Rarity let out a quiet sigh and slump to her haunches. Miss Rarity, stammered Coco, her eyes darting about the room, from Rarity to the shredded dress to the figure of Flaxseed lurking nervously in the doorway. Her eyes widened when they met Flaxseed's and he realized that his own eyes must still be showing. Flaxseed shied away, shrinking back a little further behind the door. Coco's startled expression melted into one of quiet confusion. Miss Rarity, she said a bit more firmly, getting Rarity's attention. Rarity looked up at Coco to see Coco slowly raise a hoof to point past her. Rarity looked over her shoulder, seeing Flaxseed still lurking at the doorway, shrinking back a little more as Rarity's eyes found him. Right, thought Rarity a little morosely, it's not over yet. Flaxseed looked worse than she'd ever seen him. He was trembling from head to hoof, his body seeming almost on the verge of going into convulsions. His eyes were fixed on her, his gaze reminding her of the time she'd once stepped on Opal's tail when the cat was but a kitten. Opal had immediately tucked herself into a corner and had stared at Rarity with the same frightened eyes. Opal was much more jaded nowadays. However, it seemed that Flaxseed's condition was much worse than Opal's had been. She wasn't surprised. Flaxseed had been feeling very safe and secure in the boutique. Though she had no idea of the details, Rarity imagined that whatever had happened between Flaxseed and Camellia must have been extremely bad. Experiencing the source of such trauma in a place that he thought was safe must have made it feel as though the world itself had been pulled out from under him. Flaxseed was adrift in an abyss of fear and uncertainty. What he needed was a fixed point, something he could orient on, rely on, and trust in. With a nervous swallow, Rarity realized that she had to be that point. Flaxseed had placed his trust in her by agreeing to stay in her home. She had to show him, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that his trust had not been misplaced. Rarity heaved herself to her hooves, moving with deliberate slowness as she turned her whole body to face Flaxseed. She allowed her lips to curl up with a warm smile, a smile she conjured up from the fond memories of the time she'd spent with the stallion, memories of that sarcastic wit that broke out every once in a while when he felt safe enough, memories of that runny, sludgy, but still palatable casserole he'd made for hearts warming, memories of his happy expression when he'd gotten to experience the apple cider for the first time. Flaxseed was more than just the sum of his fears, traumas and neuroses. Rarity had to reach past all those things to call the true Flaxseed, her Flaxseed, back out. Still moving slowly, Rarity started to walk towards Flaxseed. As she lifted a single hoof up off the floor, the stallion let out a whimper and cringed. Rarity lowered the hoof, not moving forward an inch. I need to get past his reflexive reaction somehow, she thought. She realized that what she was doing could be considered rather dangerous. Flaxseed was whimpering and trembling now, but he could just as easily break out into screaming madness and start using his magic to try and beat her into a pulp. If it was her alone, Rarity might have been willing to take that risk. But Coco was here and Rarity didn't dare risk letting the young mare get caught in the crossfire. Coco, said Rarity, taking her eyes off Flaxseed for a moment and looking back at her apprentice. It was a calculated risk. Maintaining eye contact with Flaxseed while she was speaking with someone else might give Flaxseed the impression that she regarded him as too dangerous to look away from, which might have been true under the circumstances. But Rarity felt that it was better to show the stallion that she was placing a certain amount of trust in him by taking her eyes off him for a brief moment. Why yes, stuttered Coco, feeling as though she were standing on a sheet of thin ice. Coco, I need you to go to the tea house over by the library. Please tell Arkenstone that I need him here. I believe he'll understand. Are you sure? Asked Coco, looking nervously back and forth between Rarity and Flaxseed. Rarity nodded. Yes, she said, please hurry. Okay, said Coco, her voice nearly a whisper as she cantered out the door. Rarity let out a soft breath. All right, Coco's out of the danger zone at least. Now it's time to try something risky. She turned back to Flaxseed, relieved to see that the stallion had neither retreated nor advanced but remained exactly where he had been, still watching her with wide, crimson eyes. Rarity lifted a hoof again. Flaxseed's eyes immediately fixed upon the motion, but he made no sound. Rarity allowed herself to smile as she moved forward and set the hoof back down. She lifted another hoof and repeated the process, slowly moving in Flaxseed's direction, one single, deliberate step at a time. As she approached, Rarity began to speak. Flaxseed, darling, it's all right. You're safe here. She's gone now. She can't hurt you anymore. I won't let her. Flaxseed worked his mouth as though he'd forgotten how to speak. For a moment, Rarity was afraid that he might have regressed or even lost his capacity for conscious thought. However, the gold-colored stallion was eventually able to start formulating words. ARYYUSS sure. Rarity nodded, keeping the motion as smooth and deliberate as everything else she had done. She continued to close the gap between them until they were within reach of each other. Only then did Rarity speak. I promise that you're safe, she said in a soft tone, her smile widening again. I will never hurt you if I can help it. You're safe here. You're safe and welcome. I need to stay. It seemed an odd question, but Rarity knew what he meant. She swallowed again and took what seemed an even greater risk than the one she was already taking. Only if you want to, she said. She wanted him to stay. She was afraid of what might happen to him if he left, what Flaxseed might do in his addled state, what Sumponi might do to him. But she had to show trust in him and she had to allow him his freedom to choose for himself. Trying to keep him here would give Flaxseed the impression that she was trying to restrain or incarcerate him, which he might regard as just as threatening and an active effort to drive him out. Rarity lifted a single hoof and began to extend it towards Flaxseed. He watched her intently, but did not shrink away from her as she closed the last of the gap between them. She felt his muscles stiffen at the contact. However, he didn't flinch away. Rarity held her hoof there for a moment. Finally, Rarity felt him relax under her touch and she moved in closer, raising her other foreleg and slowly wrapping both limbs around Flaxseed's withers, drawing him into a light embrace that he could easily pull out of if he wanted. Flaxseed bent like a stalk of wheat in the wind, leaning in towards her and allowing Rarity to press his face into her shoulder. It's okay, she whispered, this is your home now. I'm here for you. It was like a dam breaking. Rarity. Flaxseed's cry was heart-wrenching to hear. He threw his weight against her and it took all of Rarity's strength to keep from being knocked over. But she managed to hold firm as Flaxseed threw his arms around her and sobbed into her shoulder, weeping like a foal. Rarity smiled in relief and tightened her hold of the stallion, gently nuzzling into his mane as he cried, taking a quiet solace in the feeling of his tears as they soaked into her coat. Author's notes. Sometimes, the customer is not always right. Insert fist pump. So now we get to see what Rarity's capable of when Sumponi really pisses her off. She'll put up with a lot from her clients for the sake of closing a deal, but there are some lines you just shouldn't cross. Next chapter, and that's 3. Melody of Healing Hearts. Chapter 6, Melody of Healing Hearts. Rarity wasn't sure how long she and Flaxseed stayed locked together in their embrace. Her ears twitched as she heard the door opening and closing, followed by the sound of no fewer than 3 sets of hooves that made their way across the outer showroom and into the back workroom. She slowly pulled away from nuzzling Flaxseed's mane. Coco was there, of course, as was Arkenstone. Between the two of them was a very distraught-looking Sweetie Belle. Flaxseed, she exclaimed, shifting to dash towards him. However, she was brought up short by Arkenstone, who raised a hoof and interposed it between Sweetie and the object of her concern. Remember, said Arkenstone in a gentle tone, slowly. Sweetie looked up at Arkenstone and nodded before carefully making her way towards Flaxseed and Rarity. When she reached them, she gently leaned up against Flaxseed's side, rubbing her cheek against his barrel in a gesture of reassurance. Are you okay? She asked. That mare didn't hurt you, did she? I'm okay, said Flaxseed hesitantly, Rarity and Sweetie's concern touching him through the layers of anxiety. Come dear, said Rarity, let's get you to bed. Would you help me, Sweetie? Yeah, replied Sweetie. She and Rarity managed to coax Flaxseed to his hooves. As he stood up, Rarity couldn't help but notice the damp, matted sections of coat on the inside of his hind legs. She suppressed the urge to order the stallion into the bath or shower. Getting Flaxseed comfortable and relaxed came first. She would have to shelve her normal sensibilities for the time being and simply focus on helping the stallion through this terrible experience. Rarity simply resolved to wash Flaxseed's bedding at the first possible opportunity. She also made a note to clean the office floor before the urine stained the wood. Rarity and Sweetie escorted Flaxseed up the stairs and into his room. They helped him onto the bed before Rarity used her magic to draw up the sheets and comfort her, tucking them securely around the stallion, as though she were tucking in a foal. The whole time, Flaxseed watched them anxiously through his still crimson eyes. Only when Rarity and Sweetie stood at his bedside, watching him quietly, did he relax sufficiently for his eyes to return to their normal almond color and his pupils rounded back out. Still moving with carefully, Rarity raised a hoof and gently caressed Flaxseed's cheek, smiling down at him. Get some rest, darling, she whispered softly. Do you want me or Sweetie to stay in the room with you? Flaxseed sniffed. I don't know if I can sleep, he whimpered. I'm afraid they'll come for me. They won't, said Rarity firmly. Arkenstone is here now. He won't let any pony hurt you. See, can he stop them? Rarity chuckled. Trust me, dear, they won't be able to lay a hoof on you. That's nice, said Flaxseed, but still. He sighed. The last time something like this happened, I had nightmares for weeks. They just kept waking me up. He let out a sound that was halfway between a sigh and a sob. Can I try something? Asked Sweetie softly. What do you mean? Asked Rarity as both she and Flaxseed looked curiously at Sweetie Belle. I'd like to use my magic, said Sweetie, stepping closer to the bed and rearing up so she could rest her forehooves on it. I think I can help you sleep better. It won't hurt, will it? Asked Flaxseed. Sweetie smiled and shook her head. Will you trust me? She asked. Flaxseed's eyes closed tightly for a second before opening again. His gaze met Sweetie's and he nodded slowly. Sweetie's face lit up and she stepped back away from the bed, prompting Rarity to step back as well. She cleared her throat and a tiny point of light blossomed from the end of her horn. With the light came a soft, clear tone. It was a lovely sound that made Rarity sigh happily. Sweetie used her magic to produce a different tone, then another one, then, she began to sing. There were no words for the song. Instead, Sweetie sang simple notes that were accompanied by the tones and chords formed by her magic. Together, they seemed to mesh together to produce a warm, soothing lullaby that settled across the room like a warm blanket. Flaxseed's head slumped down into his pillow, his breathing softening and his body relaxing. The tension seemed to melt out of him little by little as the song continued. Even Rarity felt her own eyelids drooping under the melody's spell. Sweetie continued to play and sing until Flaxseed was clearly fast asleep, the stallion's breaths only faintly stirring the corner of the pillow he rested on. Finally, Sweetie used her magic to levitate Flopsy, the old stuffed rabbit she'd given to Flaxseed to help comfort him on his first night in the boutique, and gently tucked the stuffed animal under the covers with the stallion. Flaxseed's legs moved reflexively to hug the rabbit to his chest, the only sign of acknowledgement he gave. Rarity had to blink furiously, then shake her head vigorously to snap out of the pleasant daze Sweetie's music had instilled in her. Rarity turned to gaze unashamedly at her little sister, who was beaming cheerfully at her success. Rarity's mouth worked silently for a moment before she managed to regain some of her composure. Finally, she and Sweetie adjourned to the hallway, where they closed the door behind them. Then, knowing that her voice was less likely to disturb Flaxseed's rest, Rarity whirled on her sister. Sweetie, that was amazing. How in Equestria did you do that? Sweetie's smile melted into a slightly confused look. Well, I was just trying to think of a way to help Flaxseed relax when I thought about the lullaby that Mom always used to sing when I had nightmares. I tried adapting it and using some of the tricks and magic that Vinyl taught me. That was incredible, said Rarity, you truly have a gift for music. Ponies would adore you on the stage. Sweetie shook her head. I was just trying to use the things Vinyl taught me. She was telling me about how certain tones and chords can produce a relaxing effect. That's all I was aiming for. That's why I didn't use words. I didn't want Flaxseed having to think or try to understand what I was singing. Rarity sighed. Sweetie, I think we need to talk about this. Your talent is so amazing. It isn't fair to yourself to let it go to waste. Sweetie tried to think of something to say. Instead she sighed and walked away from Rarity. Going into her room, Sweetie closed her door behind her, leaving Rarity alone in the hallway. Rarity found herself sighing yet again. What am I going to do with her? She made her way downstairs where she saw Coco tidying up her workspace. The sound of hooves drew Rarity's attention to the office where Arkenstone was now stepping out towing a mop and bucket behind him. I cleared up the spill, said Arkenstone simply. I figured you had enough on your plate already. Thank you so much, said Rarity, feeling truly grateful. That had been one particular task she had not been looking forward to. Would you stay the night here? She asked, giving Arkenstone a plaintive look. Even though she knew he couldn't read her expression, it would give me some peace of mind and would probably be a comfort to Flaxseed. I was planning to, replied Arkenstone with a smile. Ms. Coco has already agreed to carry some messages on my behalf explaining things to Twilight and the Foals at my shop. Oh, will they be all right? Asked Rarity, lifting a hoof to her mouth. Arkenstone chuckled. Don's gotten to the point where he could probably run the place by himself. He's quite taken with the work. The others are not far behind. He knows how to close the shop. I dare say things will be fine. That's good to know, said Rarity. She went back into the kitchen, where the tea she'd been serving Camellia was still set out. Rarity drained her cup and poured another, not caring that the tea had gone cold in the meantime. The flavor still managed to soothe her frayed nerves somewhat. Finally, she rested her chin on the table with a tired sigh. Between Flaxseed and Sweetie Belle, I seem to spend a lot of time dealing with difficult ponies. Arkenstone sat across from her with a soft chuckle. Difficulties often arise when reality does not match our expectations. A single white ear flicked as Rarity lifted her head up off the table. What are you saying? You are frustrated by Sweetie because you think she is deliberately ignoring what is right in front of her face, correct? Rarity stared at Arkenstone in consternation. How did you? The beige stallion raised a single eyebrow. This has been going on for a while. My hearing is plenty sharp. I could even hear the slight argument you two had upstairs. My apologies for eavesdropping. I suppose it can't be helped, said Rarity, slumping down to the table again, but I'm fairly certain that Sweetie is ignoring what she was meant to do. Her voice is magnificent, bordering on angelic even. Flaxseed climbed into bed a bundle of nerves almost incapable of resting and she sang him straight to sleep with ease. Arkenstone grinned. If there is one thing that life has taught me, there is no meant to do that determines a pony's cutie mark. The concept of a special talent is an oversimplification of the factors that determine a pony's cutie mark. If not talent, then what? Asked Rarity. Passion, replied Arkenstone. What moves a pony and what drives them to take action, the things that make a pony feel fulfilled because she is doing something she truly loves. But Sweetie loves to sing, said Rarity. It's just that she has issues whenever there's the possibility of a large audience. Perhaps that is because the singing is a means to an end, replied Arkenstone. For some ponies, particularly those similar to you, music is an end in and of itself, something that is indulged in for the artistry. For others, the music itself is not important so much as what they do with it. And how does that apply to Sweetie's situation? Asked Rarity. Just what does she want to use her music for? Why has she been studying and learning under Vinyl Scratch? Arkenstone chuckled. That question is hers to answer. But I think that what she did tonight might very well be an important clue. Mused Rarity. You think so? I'm as sure as a pony can be under circumstances like these, replied Arkenstone. Rarity nodded. I see. Perhaps I shall talk to Sweetie about it tomorrow. She needs her rest now as well. Perhaps, agreed Arkenstone, though he found himself wondering if that talk tomorrow would even be necessary. Rarity saw Coco off and then directed Arkenstone to the couch she kept on hoof for when she needed to faint. She was too tired to make dinner and Arkenstone had not expressed any particular hunger, nor had Sweetie come down from her room. Rarity hoped she hadn't upset Sweetie too much and made a light daisy sandwich from some leftovers in the icebox before retiring to bed herself. Sweetie Belle lay in bed, her eyes drooping. She was a little upset with Rarity, wondering why Rarity was always trying to force her onto a stage. Whenever Sweetie thought about the crowds, her body shuddered. Why can't I do something else? But what would I do? It was a question that had tugged on her mind ever since her talk with Vinyl. She had to admit that she liked singing. She remembered the question Octavia had posed to her. Who is my audience? For Sweetie, the word conjured up visions of vast crowds watching her on stage, visions that filled her with overwhelming trepidation. Perhaps that was the problem. She was thinking of the word in too narrow a context. Perhaps her audience wasn't a crowd. Perhaps it was a single pony. Her mind went to what she'd just done earlier that night. Flaxseed had been terrified from whatever he'd experienced earlier. His mind was shaken and he'd been unable to even think about sleeping until she'd started her music. At that moment, as Sweetie listened to her own music and watched the spell she'd woven with it take hold, watched it soothe Flaxseed's troubled heart, seen it relax him into a gentle repose, she felt as though she had discovered something amazing. Flaxseed had been hurting and frightened. At that moment, Sweetie had been able to use her talents to help him, to ease the burden of his pain. In a sense, her magic and music had healed him, maybe not completely, but she'd managed to accomplish what Rarity, probably the pony Flaxseed trusted the most in all of Equestria right now, could not. Maybe that's what my music should be for, thought Sweetie pensively. If my music could do that for Flaxseed, what could it do for other ponies? Could I help ponies who are suffering, who are hurt and afraid? Maybe they're my audience. Sweetie felt her lips curl up in a smile. She actually liked the sound of that. It felt right. With that pleasant thought in mind, Sweetie allowed herself to drift off into a peaceful sleep, completely unaware that beneath her blankets, a spark of light had erupted from her flank. A while later, the door to Sweetie's room slowly opened and Rarity peered in. She sighed when she saw that her younger sister had fallen asleep. Keeping quiet, Rarity crept into the room and looked over Sweetie. She'd been hoping to talk some more, possibly apologize for getting pushy regarding Sweetie's talent. But that would have to wait until the morning. With a quiet sigh, Rarity lifted up the blankets to tuck Sweetie in more securely. However, Rarity froze when she saw what was hidden beneath those blankets. Her eyes widened and her hoof went to her mouth to stifle a gasp. After a few seconds of staring, tears began to well up in her eyes. Oh, Sweetie. Rarity wanted to wake Sweetie Belle right away. However, she ultimately decided to leave the filly to her rest and wait until the morning. Rarity would come to regret that decision when Sweetie's joyous shriek shattered half the windows in the building, along with the bathroom mirror. Still, given what had just happened, Rarity figured that a few panes of glass were worth the price of the radiant look on Sweetie Belle's face when she came rushing into the kitchen to display her brand new cutie mark. And through it all, Flaxseed slept peacefully, without a care in the world. Dawn and Scootaloo were at Scootaloo's house, meditating in the living room while Melon Cream, Scootaloo's mother, was working in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. However, the peaceful morning scene was interrupted by a frantic pounding on the door. "Uh-oh," muttered Scootaloo, turning towards the door and creeping cautiously towards it. The last time some pony had pounded on the portal like that, it had been a deranged cultist trying to retaliate for some of the things she'd said about the cult Solar after getting sick of hearing one too many insults against Dawn. She'd blown the cultist out of the house, along with part of the wall. For all she knew, the poor stallion was still in a full body cast. She hadn't meant to hurt him that badly. However, given the situation, it was him or her. Reluctantly, Scootaloo turned the knob and swung the door open, bracing herself to dodge in case some pony hurled herself through the opening at her. However, she blinked when she saw who was standing there instead. "Sweetie Belle, what are you oof?" Scootaloo's inquiry was cut off as Sweetie tackled her and knocked her over onto her back. "I did it," yelled Sweetie at a volume that would have given the Canterlot royal voice a run for its money. "I did it. I've finally done it." "Gah," gasped Scootaloo, her eardrums not able to take much more abuse. "Done what?" That question seemed to be enough for Sweetie as she jumped off Scootaloo and turned sideways. "Look." "What? I don't see anything." Scootaloo's voice vanished when she saw the mark decorating Sweetie's flank. It was a single red heart. A white bandage was wrapped around it, extending upwards, forming the stem and flag of a single 8-note. "Wow," exclaimed Scootaloo, her own level of excitement rising. "You did it. Way to go, Sweetie Belle." "I know," said Sweetie, her voice shrill with excitement. "I can't wait to show Apple Bloom." "Wait," shouted Scootaloo, "this means..." Sweetie quickly caught on. "This means that all three of us have our cutie marks now." "We did it," yelled Scootaloo, jumping upwards in excitement. "The cutie mark crusaders have officially gotten their cutie marks." Said Sweetie, "what does that make us now?" Scootaloo paused and tapped a hoof to her chin. "Cutie mark, conquerors." Sweetie raised an eyebrow. "Why conquerors?" "'Cause we, I dunno, conquered our cutie marks." "What the hey does that mean?" Never mind. How about the cutie mark? Graduates." "No way, it has to start with a C." Why?" "Because alliteration is cool." "Allied or what? Geez, Sweetie, you get your cutie mark and you're still such a..." "Feathers, pluck, dress." "Shutting up no." Scootaloo and Sweetie were drawn out of their animated discussion by a wry snort from Dawn, who was watching from slightly behind Scootaloo in the living room. Behind Dawn stood Melon Cream, who was watching from the doorway to the kitchen. Both of them looked rather amused by the whole affair. Sorry," said Sweetie, her cheeks practically glowing red. "It's all right," said Melon, using one orange hoof to stifle her giggles, "but I'm wondering if you dashed out of your home without having breakfast." Right on cue, a rumbling growl made its way out of Sweetie's stomach, prompting her blush to intensify. Come in," said Melon with a chortle as she turned to head back into the kitchen. "Breakfast is almost ready and I think I can squeeze in one more." Rarity's ear twitched as she caught the familiar sound of Flaxseed's hooves descending the stairs. She already knew that he'd been up for a while already. Her first hint was the sound of the shower running upstairs. With a faint grimace of the task she knew awaited her, Rarity had already gone upstairs and changed the sheets on Flaxseed's bed. The old ones would have to be washed before they were usable again. After she'd brought down the sheets, Rarity had set to work making a hearty breakfast for her friend. Thus, as Flaxseed arrived in the kitchen, Rarity finished setting out a short stack of pancakes, along with a pair of eggs over easy. "Good morning, darling," she said pleasantly. "It seems as though you slept well." "I did," said Flaxseed with a slightly sheepish smile. His voice was soft, almost reminding Rarity of Fluttershy. He was less confident in his movements as well, only coming into the room and seating himself at the table after a fair bit of dawdling and looking about nervously. She supposed that yesterday's ordeal had probably drawn several of Flaxseed's nervous habits back to the surface. Hopefully, with her and Sweetie's help, Flaxseed could recover all the faster. "Well, go ahead and eat," said Rarity with a warm smile. "You went to bed without any supper last night. I suspect you're quite famished." Flaxseed nodded and began to tuck into the spread set out before him. Rarity kept her implements and ingredients out in case Flaxseed showed signs of being hungry for seconds. However, it seemed that what she'd set out for him had been sufficient to settle the stallion's appetite. After he finished eating, Flaxseed settled in his seat and looked around a bit nervously. "Where's Arkenstone?" He went back, replied Rarity. He does need to open up shop after all. However, both Red River and Stormfront will be nearby today, just in case. We've already confirmed that she left town last evening. Flaxseed let out a relieved sigh and his posture relaxed a little bit more. After a moment's contemplation, he looked up at Rarity, who had taken the seat across from him at the table. I'm sorry about the sheets, by the way, in the office. Rarity smiled. It's fine, she said. You were so terrified that I was afraid you'd just bolt off into the night. I'm just relieved that you're still here. After that, a little cleanup is a minor inconvenience at most. Thank you, said Flaxseed softly. Rarity lifted a hoof and rested it on the table. Flaxseed did the same. In an almost perfect reenactment of Flaxseed's first night in the boutique, the two of them linked the fetlocks of their forelegs and squeezed. This time, Flaxseed was reciprocating the gesture, which caused a warm feeling to flutter up from the pit of Rarity's stomach. You tore your dress apart, said Flaxseed. It's fine, dear, said Rarity. I was angry. I needed to take it out on something, otherwise that mare would be in the hospital and I would probably be in guard custody. But you worked so hard on it, said Flaxseed. You always put so much into them. Flaxseed, said Rarity, tightening her grip on his foreleg. What that mare said yesterday was a heaping pile of the most disgusting dross I've heard in all my life, and believe me, I've heard some gems. Seeing her stand there insulting you after everything you've been through, after the things she apparently put you through, I couldn't stand to let that go unanswered. That dress was made for her and her alone. It was made with her colors and her sensibilities in mind. I wanted to make it absolutely clear that what she had said and done were unacceptable. But still. Flaxseed, said Rarity, her tone softening, you are worth far more to me than any dress will ever be. Those scraps can be replaced. An entire dress can be replaced. Weeks, months even, of work can be done over again. It's unpleasant and inconvenient, but they are all something that I can just start over on. You can't be replaced. If it meant protecting you from ponies like her, I would shred my entire winter line in a second. Tears began to stream down Flaxseed's face. Thank you so much, he said, his voice becoming heavy from choking back sobs. Rarity let go of his foreleg and moved around the table to wrap Flaxseed up in a warm embrace. She held the stallion tightly as he sobbed against her. They stayed like that until Flaxseed's sobs subsided. For a moment, Rarity had thought that he'd cried himself back to sleep. However, she learned she was mistaken when she let him go and Flaxseed lifted his head to look at her. Do you want to talk about it? Asked Rarity. About her, I mean. Flaxseed blanched slightly beneath his coat and looked away. Rarity leaned in and gently nuzzled his cheek. It's all right if you don't want to, she said. It might help you to get it off your chest. But if remembering it is too painful for you, I won't force it. It might help, said Flaxseed after a moment. Rarity nodded and made tea for both of them, hoping that having some of the soothing drink on hoof might help with Flaxseed's nerves. Once everything was ready, she sat across the table from him and waited expectantly. For a long time, Flaxseed simply stared down into his teacup. Finally, he drank it, then looked up at Rarity and launched into his tale. It was about a year after I'd been forced to run away from my parents' home. I'd finally shaken off the cult's pursuit and was looking for someplace to settle down, hopefully where they wouldn't find me. Maybe it wasn't very wise, but I didn't want to live on the run. I'd never asked for any of this. I settled into Hoofington, where I hoped that I could just blend in with all the other ponies there. I ended up working as a waiter in a small restaurant. It wasn't an upscale joint, but it wasn't a dump either. The tips were good and I made a fairly decent wage. I didn't bother trying to get to know my coworkers. I wasn't sure I could trust any pony. He sighed. That's when I met her. Camellia. Flaxseed flinched at the sound of her name, then nodded. She started working there as a waitress. I guess she was trying to raise money to go to acting school. She'd already been in a few local productions. She even gave me some tickets when we started. Anyway, she wasn't like the others. Most of the ponies I worked with were content to leave me alone once it was clear I didn't want to answer any questions. They figured I was just some loner freak. And I suppose I was. But Camellia. I don't know why she took an interest in me, but she did. She was always trying to talk to me on breaks or when our shifts were over or before they started. She liked to talk, I guess. She told me all about her dreams and ambitions, how she planned to make it big on Bridalway. She'd also needle me, try to find things out about me, ask me questions, that sort of thing. After a little while, I guess she just wore me down. I started talking with her, sharing some stuff about myself. I never told her about my history or my condition. That was still too raw and painful, and I was certain that saying the wrong thing at the wrong time could send me on the run again. I guess I started to like her. She is a very attractive mare, Rarity conceded. That doesn't surprise me. Flaxseed nodded. We started going out. We had fun together. We made each other laugh. He groaned. Things were going so well. I dared to hope that I'd be able to put my past behind me, maybe settle down and start a family of my own. I was considering telling Camellia about my condition and what I'd been through. Then it happened. We'd been going out for a while. Camellia was looking at acting school, looking to make her big break in theater. We were on our way back from one of our dates. The laughter of the mare and stallion carried through the night. I can't believe you actually did that, said Flaxseed in between guffaws as he remembered the sight of Camellia chucking a bowling ball at a pinstriped clown. 1. Well, it was his fault for trying slime me too, protested Camellia. She froze as they came across the mouth of an alley. Hey, I know a shortcut back to my place from here. If we take this alley and cut over to the next street, we can avoid having to take that detour 2 streets down. Flaxseed glanced nervously down the alley. It looked like most city alleys, dark and dingy, with scattered overflowing trash cans resting along its length. The lights from the street they were on only reached part of the way down. The rest of the alley was shrouded in darkness. Flaxseed couldn't even make out the lights of the street on the other side. Are you sure it's this alley? Of course it is, snorted Camellia, giving Flaxseed an irritated look. Who's the native around here, you or me? Flaxseed couldn't help but sigh in resignation. All right, let's go. I knew you'd see things my way, said Camellia proudly. She began strutting down the alley. It took Flaxseed a second to marshal his courage and follow her with a nervous swallow. As they made their way down the alleyway, the darkness deepened, making it difficult for them to see the ground in front of them. Finally, Camellia came to a halt as the way in front of them was blocked by a solid brick wall. It's a dead end, noted Flaxseed. I can see that, snapped Camellia, absently chewing on her forehoof. It was a bad habit of hers that sometimes got her scolded at work. Damn it, I was sure that this was the right way. Maybe it was that earlier alley. Let's just head back, said Flaxseed. We'll take the long way if we have to. Camellia looked as though she didn't want to admit defeat, but no amount of protesting and complaining could make a wall not be a wall, so she ultimately had to give up and turn around. The two of them started to make their way back to the street, only to find their path impeded by a pair of brutish-looking ponies. Well, well, said one, a unicorn mare with her mane tied into knotted dreadlocks running down the length of her neck. Look who we have here. Her companion, a burly Pegasus who looked as though his coat had been slicked down with oil, leered at Camellia with a sick grin. Looks to me like we've got a couple of prime donors to our charitable cause. That got a laugh out of the mare. Yeah, I bet these suckers have enough to keep us afloat for a week at least. Both Flaxseed and Camellia were backing away, but quickly found their rumps against the wall. They froze in terror, realizing that they had no place to run. Flaxseed's mind was whirling, trying to figure out a way out the situation. His heart was thundering in his chest so hard that it felt as though the muscle might burst straight out through his ribcage. What do we do? Whispered Camellia. Flaxseed couldn't answer. The memories of his previous experiences, nearly being cornered by ponies who were Tartarus bent on killing him, were making his mind go blank. He was certain that there was no chance he would walk away from this alive. All right, said the mare, let's make this simple. Hoof over all the bits you've got jewelry too, lady. If you play nice, we might only rough you up a little bit. A lot, supplemented the stallion. Flaxseed felt something snap inside his head. His fear spiked and his limbs locked up. He was prepared to grab a trash can with his magic and start swinging away. However, the two ponies in front of him froze up first. What the hey, gasped the stallion. He and the mare froze, the two of them gaping at Flaxseed as though he'd grown another head. A second later, that confusion gave way to fear. He's a monster, screamed the mare. He's a freak, shouted the stallion. The two of them turned and bolted, leaving a pair of confused ponies in their wake. Wah, from her place beside him, Camellia peeked out from behind her hooves. What happened? Why did those muggers run? She turned to look at Flaxseed. What did you do? Camellia froze in place, her jaw going slack. Flax. Flaxseed raised his hoof to his face as though he could use it to feel the change that had come over his eyes. He realized what Camellia must be seeing. He'd only seen his eyes in the mirror once. He had to admit that they looked terrifying. What's wrong with your eyes? Gasped Camellia, now backing away from him. It's Flaxseed tried to explain. He wasn't completely sure what his condition was either. Camellia, this. What are you? Gasped Camellia, her rump now colliding with the wall perpendicular to the one that blocked the way through the alley. I'm a pony, replied Flaxseed frantically. Camellia, please. He plaintively reached a hoof out for her. Stay away from me, you freak. Camellia bolted out of the alley, following the course of their would-be assaulters. Camellia, moaned Flaxseed, watching her go with a leaden feeling settling into his stomach. I didn't see her for a while after that, explained Flaxseed. She was only a couple weeks away from leaving for acting school anyway. So no pony really questioned it when she quit her job the next day. I tried going to her apartment to talk to her, but she either wasn't home or she refused to open the door. Either way, it was like she'd blocked me out of her life. After a few days of trying, I decided to give up and hope that she might come to me. I was almost too depressed to work. There were days I felt so sick and disgusted that I didn't want to get out of bed. Only the thought that today might be the day I saw her again kept me going. Then, one night. Flaxseed hesitated and cringed, a faint whimper forcing its way out of his lips. If you want to stop, said Rarity, watching him intently. No, whispered Flaxseed, I need to finish this. Flaxseed sighed as he looked down at the sheets spread out on the desk in front of him. He'd taken the restaurant's ledgers home with him, his skill with numbers having garnered the attention of his managers. They were actually willing to let him go over the books and help with the budget, even paying him a few extra bits to take the accounts home with him and look them over before bringing them back the next day. He wasn't officially doing their finances, but it was a step in the right direction. But the absence of Camellia from his life seemed to strip away all the enjoyment he got out of the job. He just couldn't stop agonizing over whether or not he'd see her again. Would she eventually come around and talk to him again? Or would he simply have to start it with some pony else? And possibly have the same thing happen again later on? A faint click of a key in a lock made Flaxseed's ear twitch. He knew that sound. Camellia had a spare key to his apartment. He realized that she must have finally come around and had decided to talk to him. Flaxseed didn't look away from his desk. He could hear hoofsteps approaching from behind. She'd done this nearly every time she came to visit him while he was working. She would come up behind him and then rise up to hug him around the neck from behind, giggling as she rested on his back and nuzzled his neck, occasionally pausing to kiss his ear. The thought of being able to experience that feeling again made Flaxseed quiver. Almost too late, Flaxseed noticed that the approaching hoofsteps seemed heavier than he remembered. Camellia was a fairly light pony after all. Whoever was coming up behind him was a few dozen pounds heavier at least. The hoofsteps paused and Flaxseed was conscious of some pony looming over him from behind. With a yelp, he pushed back from the desk. He saw something cross his vision and lifted a hoof to block it. The reflexive action saved his life as his foreleg intercepted a wire that bit into the skin beneath his coat. At the same time the wire made contact, the pony behind Flaxseed grunted and leaned back, using his weight to pull the wire towards Flaxseed's neck. If Flaxseed lowered his hoof, the wire would bite into his neck next and probably crush his windpipe, strangling him. So he strained with all his might, pushing against the wire, willing it away from him. Give it up, monster, snarled the stallion behind him, pulling harder on the wire, which continued to get closer and closer to Flaxseed's neck. Flaxseed's first thought was to use magic to dislodge his attacker. However, he realized that must have been what his enemy was waiting for. Once he began channeling the magic for a spell, all the pony behind him would have to do was reach forward and bite his horn. The pain would probably rob Flaxseed of the strength he needed to continue resisting the wire and allow him to be strangled. With a growl, Flaxseed surged forward, throwing all his weight into moving the wire away from him. Blood trickled down his foreleg. The wire barely budged. However, dislodging it hadn't been Flaxseed's intention anyway. In order to counter Flaxseed's forward lunge, the pony behind him had been forced to shift his weight backwards to keep pulling the wire towards Flaxseed's neck. Because he was focused on pulling back, he didn't notice right away when Flaxseed dipped his head forward and lit his horn. Levitating an entire pony took a fair bit of juice, as far as magic was concerned. However, Flaxseed didn't need to straight up lift his opponent. Instead, he applied a telekinetic shove to his attacker from behind. The other stallion, caught off guard by the sudden shift, lost his balance and began to fall forward. Next, Flaxseed applied a levitation spell to the attacker's hindhooves even as he threw all his weight against the wire wound around the attacker's forehooves. The movement sent the stallion flipping over Flaxseed's body. The desk Flaxseed had been working at faced a window, resting just under its sill. His improvised throw sent the other stallion into the window and threw it, shattering the glass into fragments that glittered in the light thrown off by the street lamps below. Flaxseed's apartment was on the 5th floor of the building. The unknown stallion's scream lasted an uncomfortably long time before it was cut short by a wet crunch. Flaxseed flinched at the sound. For a moment, he could only stare dumbly at the window, conscious of the fact that he'd just ended a life. It had been frantic, carried out in the heat of the moment, but he'd killed another pony. Granted, said pony had just tried to garrote him, but that did nothing to stem the tide of revulsion in Flaxseed's gut. Instead, the revulsion rose, carrying with it the contents of Flaxseed's stomach. He turned to the side, heaving up the remnants of his dinner, his entire body convulsing with the force of the action. For a long moment, Flaxseed simply stared at the unpleasant mess on the floor in front of him, unable to care about the stench as its fumes wafted up to his nostrils. He was a murderer. That was all that mattered to him. There was a glint of light off metal that attracted Flaxseed's attention to another section of the floor, the section where his attacker had been standing only a moment ago. There, laying on the floor, was a single key. Flaxseed's eyes widened as he realized it was the key to his apartment, and the pony that had just tried to kill him had been the one carrying it. More importantly, it was the spare key he'd given to Camellia to let herself in. Flaxseed's nausea was cancelled out by a surge of fear at the sight of that key. The attacker had Camellia's key. Just how had he gotten it? Those questions raced through Flaxseed's mind at a breakneck pace. It must have been the thugs they encountered the other night. If they had told some pony about what they had seen and word got back to those weird zealots who'd been chasing him, then they might know about the ponies who he'd been associating with, including his filly friend. Camellia could be in danger. That realization alone was enough to galvanize Flaxseed into action. He nearly smashed down his own door as he rushed out into the hallway. His ears picked up the sound of ponies coming up the stairs. If that stallion had accomplices, they would have realized that he had failed by now and were on the way up to finish the job themselves. This was no time to risk a confrontation. Instead, Flaxseed turned and bolted the other way, going out through the door that led to the fire escape and rushing down the stairs. Rarity was quite glad for her immaculate white coat at that point. It hid just how thoroughly she had paled as Flaxseed's account went on. She carefully lifted a cup of tea to her lips and sipped it, not trusting herself to talk as she looked at the stallion in front of her, who had just admitted to killing another pony. She'd had no idea that Flaxseed had an event like that in his past. She also had no idea just what to think about it. Certainly, it had been in self-defense. After what he'd been through, she couldn't fault Flaxseed for doing what he had done. He might not have even thought about what he was actually doing when he had done it. There were, of course, those who would have pointed out that Flaxseed's attacker had deserved his fate. But that didn't change the fact that killing was killing. Flaxseed seemed fully aware of that. It was clear that the emotional scars left by the experience still bothered him, even now. His voice was raw and he was talking frantically, as though he could no longer stop. Camellia's apartment was the first place Flaxseed thought to visit. It only took him a few minutes to get there. He immediately began pounding on the door, calling out her name. There was no response from within. However, after a few minutes of continuous hammering, the angry landlady approached him and sternly informed Flaxseed that Camellia had gone out and that Flaxseed was welcome to follow her and not come back if he was going to continue causing such a racket. Having been booted out of the building, Flaxseed took a moment to think through his options. Camellia had apparently left alone, under her own power, so she hadn't been caught then. He decided to visit some of her favorite hangouts and see if there was anything he could glean from those places. Luckily, Flaxseed found her at the first place he looked, a pleasant little cafe where they chatted over many a cup of coffee. To his surprise, he saw Camellia sitting there with one of her friends who worked at the local playhouse. Flaxseed had never been terribly fond of the other mare, having always thought she was shallow and conceited. But it was clear that she and Camellia got along very well. Not much later, Flaxseed learned why when he learned the truth of what happened and the secret behind the large bag of bits that lay on the table. Any trepidation Rarity felt after hearing that Flaxseed had inadvertently killed a pony vanished, replaced by a disgusted fury at the very idea that she had allowed such a disgusting, revolting, uncanny, monstrous, hideous creature into her boutique and spoken to it as though it were a pony. That bitch. The snarl that forced its way out her lips almost seemed to strike Flaxseed with tangible force. To think that I allowed her to walk out of here with nothing more than a bloody nose. I should have shaved her tail and mane, made a rope out of them and strangled her. Eep. Flaxseed ducked down below the table, terrified at the anger radiating from the mare in front of him. Realizing that she had frightened her friend knocked Rarity out of her angry haze. She forced herself to take several deep breaths in order to calm down. Flaxseed, it's all right, I'm not angry at you. Are you sure? Asked Flaxseed, carefully poking his head up above the level of the table, his eyes transformed once again, ready to duck back down again at a moment's notice. Yes, replied Rarity, I'm sorry dear. I just couldn't believe that some pony would sell her cold friend out like that. To think that she betrayed you so completely. I don't like to think about it, said Flaxseed softly. His eyes returned to their normal state. I'm so sorry I forced you to relive such a traumatizing experience. Rarity smiled in spite of her words. Thank you for trusting me. It was the least I could do, said Flaxseed, bashfully looking away from her. After everything you've done for me, you deserve to know the truth. Rarity went to his side again, enfolding Flaxseed in a warm embrace. It's not obligation, she said, you don't owe me anything. It's trust. You finally opened up a little more. It's painful, it's frightening, but it's right and you did it. Thank you, said Flaxseed, leaning into her embrace. Can we stay like this for a little while? Of course we can, said Rarity, tightening her hold on him, as long as you want. This day is for you after all. For me. Rarity nodded. I gave Coco the day off, so there's no work for today. When you're ready, would you like to go over to the tea house, maybe chat with Arkenstone and Dawn for a bit? That sounds nice, said Flaxseed, a wry smile spreading across his face, but didn't we already have tea? Rarity let out a sound that was halfway between a giggle and a rather unladylike snort. Oh hush, she planted a light kiss on his cheek and went back to holding him tightly. She was all too happy to remain where she was. Yesterday, she'd been afraid that she'd nearly lost Flaxseed, that he would bolt out of the boutique and out of her life at the first possible opportunity. She couldn't stand the thought of him leaving. Being able to rest there and hold him was something she was more than happy to do. Flaxseed was home and that was all that mattered. Author's notes. 1. You had to be there. 2. Again, you had to be there. Apologies for the late update. I got a little caught up in real life stuff today, mostly filling out applications and going to interviews. I'm in the market for a new job, seeing as the retail company I currently work for has apparently now decided screw you is going to be their official stance towards long-standing employees anywhere below the management level. So I'm off in search of greener pastures where I can find more hours and, hopefully, something resembling a living wage. So, Sweetie Belle finally has her cutie mark. She was probably the hardest one of the cutie mark crusaders for me to come up with a cutie mark for reasons I don't completely understand. It isn't that figuring out what her cutie mark would represent was really hard, but I can't remember why, if there ever was an actual reason why I got so hung up on making Sweetie's cutie mark be something other than just singing, which is how it goes in most fics, seeing as this is what the canon is leaning towards as well. For some reason, I really wanted to do something different with her, even though I went ahead and made Apple Bloom's cutie mark represent the usual carpenter, architect, handymare, or is it hoofdmare, whatever that she often ends up as in most fics. Oh well. I don't have any real ideas for the real-world equivalent of the song Sweetie used. If one of you can come up with a suitable one, I might post it. When it comes to music, I tend to think I do less listening and more hearing, or, as I've heard it put in a music theory course in college, I'm more interested in absolute music, that is music itself divorced from any particular meaning or interpretation of it. Besides the fact that I'm an anime fan, the other big reason I like J-pop and music in other foreign languages is because I don't immediately understand what the singers are saying, so I don't get distracted by the actual meaning behind a song's lyrics and I can simply listen to the singers' voices as though they were additional instruments and enjoy how they mesh with the rest of the music. Does that make me weird? Next chapter, it's time. Wrapping up. Chapter 7, Wrapping up. But are you sure this isn't going to cause problems for you? Asked Flaxseed nervously, looking at Rarity over the cup of tea that rested on the table. Oh, I might expect a slight slowdown on my Manhattan orders, darling, said Rarity dismissively, but Camellia doesn't have nearly as much clout in that area as she thinks she does. But isn't she a successful actor? Asked Flaxseed, still feeling more than a little uncertain. She has experienced some success, yes, replied Rarity, however, that success has largely been limited to supporting roles on a few major productions. She might, if she applied herself, be labeled an up-and-comer. But that's a far cry from the runaway success of true stardom, otherwise her visit to my boutique would have probably been accompanied by a small swarm of paparazzi. But, in reality, everything I've read about her work in the theater reviews indicate that she's a middling-level performer who relies more on her talent than she does on actual effort. There are ponies in her field that are just as talented as she is and who truly invest themselves in their work. In all honesty, I probably did her a favor by forcing her to take that money back. How so? Asked Flaxseed, tilting his head. She's invested a great deal of her money into an expensive apartment, fine dining, and expensive dresses from well-known designers, answered Rarity. I'm careful about who I do business with, so I make sure to know certain particulars, such as whether or not they can really afford my work. There was a little more to it than that, but Rarity didn't feel the need to go into detail. For example, she was more than happy to put a great deal of work into a dress that was supposed to be cheap for a starving actress who was working her tail off and needed just such a dress to make a good impression on a prospective employer. She was less inclined to go above and beyond what was paid for the sake of a shallow mare who wanted to throw money that she shouldn't away on a dress for the sake of impressing her friends or to make herself look more important than she really was. Anyway, she's a mare who spends rather frivolously on needless luxuries that she ultimately won't be able to afford. She's the type of actress who's in the business, not because she genuinely loves her art but because she craves what it brings her, money, fame, and recognition. Rarity shook her head. I'm afraid that she won't get far with that attitude, especially if she doesn't have the motivation to apply herself. The damage she could do is limited. Rarity met Flaxseed's eyes again. But none of that really matters. Camellia could be the greatest actress in equestrian history with enough accolades to fill the royal palace. None of that would have mattered after the way she treated you. Flaxseed's cheeks turned bright red. Thank you, he said, shyly looking away for a moment. Well, it sounds like things turned out all right, commented Arkenstone as he drifted sedately past the table, a tray of tea balanced on his rump. I must admit, at least some good seemed to have come from that mare's visit, if Sweetie Belle's scream earlier was any indicator. I noticed she isn't here, Rarity observed, looking around the shop. Indeed, there was no sign of the white filly moving amongst the tables. The other crusaders could be seen attending to their duties. The only other absent one was Rumble. I went ahead and gave her and Rumble the day off, replied Arkenstone with a slight shrug. I figured I wouldn't have her for long anyway. Once Pinkie Pie gets her hooves on the filly, I suspect that Sweetie will be tied up for the rest of the day. Quite possibly literally, agreed Rarity with a tired sigh. Pinkie would undoubtedly be ecstatic to plan the cut center of the last of the original 3 cutie mark crusaders. Now Rumble and Dawn were the only ones left who had yet to gain their cutie marks. Surprisingly, neither of them seemed to be overly bothered by that. Rumble was fairly certain what he wanted to do with his future anyway, so it was entirely possible that his cutie mark would simply come in due course. Dawn, having only recently started spending time with foals his own age, had little concern for the normal attitudes foals regarded cutie marks with. Speaking of Dawn, he too passed the table as he went back and forth amongst the different groups of customers with their orders. His eyes met Flaxseed's frequently and Dawn always passed on a wordless nod of encouragement. It was doing wonders for the gold-colored stallion's nerves and Flaxseed was starting to relax once again. Said Rarity, what would you like to do after we're done here? Well, said Flaxseed, running a nervous hoof along his mane, maybe we could just take a walk around town, visit some other friends of yours, we could even go out to dinner at that one restaurant you keep telling me about. For a second, Rarity had to fight to keep herself from gaping at the stallion. Flaxseed had been amenable to taking walks around Ponyville before. He'd even been okay to going to the occasional restaurant so long as it wasn't too crowded and he could get a seat in the corner where he could keep an eye on the rest of the room and prevent any pony from sneaking up behind him. But this was the first time he had suggested those activities of his own volition. Rarity had been certain that, after the previous day, the only thing Flaxseed would want to do was return to the boutique. After what he'd been through, Rarity had been mentally preparing herself to walk Flaxseed back across the ground they'd already covered before. Instead, here he was showcasing an uncharacteristically adventurous spirit and readily suggesting something that he was normally quite uncomfortable with. Still, she had no intention of disagreeing with this wonderful development. It's a date then, she said cheerfully. It only took 3 seconds for the two of them to realize what Rarity just said. Their cheeks flushed simultaneously. Behind her, Rarity was unable to see Arkenstone's smile widen approvingly. I'm not sure I fully understand what changed, admitted Dawn as he and Arkenstone watched Rarity. It can be difficult to explain, said Arkenstone, but what Flaxseed went through was something of a less violent version of what you experienced from Red River and Stormfront. That made Dawn blink. Arkenstone continued, if a broken bone is not treated, it can still heal. But it might heal crookedly and the limb will be hampered. To fix it, the bone sometimes must be rebroken so that it can be set properly. Only then can it truly be healed. When that mare first betrayed Flaxseed, she broke his spirit. With no one to turn to but himself, Flaxseed's spirit healed crookedly and he was hampered by the result. Encountering her again yesterday broke it again. But this time, because Rarity and Sweetie Belle were there, Flaxseed's spirit received a proper treatment and he has now begun to heal properly. I don't follow, said Dawn, glancing up at Arkenstone. When Flaxseed first came to Ponyville, he clung to the boutique and to Rarity because they represented safety and comfort to his heart and mind. Because he had finally found that anchor, that stable, fixed point, he clung to it all the harder, which kept him from venturing away from it. When Camellia arrived yesterday, that safe place no longer seemed so safe and Flaxseed was no longer certain he would be secure with Rarity and her sister. That sense of safety and security was shattered. However, when Rarity chose to chase Camellia away and stayed true to Flaxseed, he realized that he could still depend on her, that he could truly trust in her and that his faith would be rewarded. Once you make a leap of faith like that, stepping out for a walk in the park seems like, well, a walk in the park. Oh, mused Dawn, beginning to understand what Arkenstone was getting at. A bone, once properly set and healed, continued Arkenstone, is stronger than it was before it was broken. Likewise, I think that Flaxseed's own spirit will emerge from this much stronger than it ever was before. In a rather unintended way, Camellia's arrival here served as a sort of karmic compensation for her original misdeeds. She departed, humiliated by the pony who was supposed to be providing her a prestigious service, and she ended up inadvertently pushing Flaxseed further along the path of recovery. Dawn found himself smirking. When you put it like that, I suppose we have this mare to indirectly thank for Sweetie Belle's cutie mark. That got a laugh out of Arkenstone. Yes, that too. This is so amazing, gasped Sweetie as she stared around Sugarcube Corner, which had been decked out in purple, pink, and white ribbons that seemed to cling to every available surface. Hanging across the ceiling in the middle of the room was a banner proudly displaying her new cutie mark. It had taken nearly a week for Pinkie to set up the party. The main reason for that had been because they needed the extra time to hear back from Sweetie's parents after Rarity had sent them a letter telling them about Sweetie's new cutie mark. Unfortunately, the traveling couple had ventured too far abroad to be able to return within a reasonable time frame and had urged Sweetie to go ahead with her Cutecinera without them. Sweetie hadn't exactly been all that surprised by the response, given that she'd hardly seen her parents in the past year, having spent more time as a resident of Rarity's home than theirs. But she supposed it was only polite to let them know. I'm happy for you, said Rumble, wrapping his wing around her as they made their way across the floor, heading for one of the many party games set out for their enjoyment. Sweetie couldn't quite suppress her giggle. You've been saying that several times a day. It's because I am, protested Rumble. His mouth snapped shut when Sweetie quickly turned and planted a kiss on his cheek. I know, she whispered before leaning her head against his thank you. Sweetie had been surprised to find that she had some very special guests at her Cutecinera. Upon hearing about her cutie mark, Vinyl Scratch had immediately insisted upon being in charge of the music, bringing her full set of equipment into the bakery and setting up a miniature concert that had the whole building jumping, literally, if the way the floor kept bucking beneath Sweetie's hooves was any indication. Even Flaxseed was there, showing surprising fortitude by willingly coming to a place that was crowded with ponies, even though he remained near the walls and refused to venture out into the room. Rarity mostly stayed with him, keeping him company and keeping him calm. Fortunately, he had yet to suffer any breakdowns. Even as Sweetie looked, she saw Flaxseed actually holding what seemed to be an animated conversation with the mayor of all ponies. Well now, commented a familiar voice from behind Sweetie, it seems you finally found your audience. Jumping out from under Rumble's wing, Sweetie spun about to see Octavia standing there with a smile on her face. Ms. Octavia, squealed Sweetie, what are you doing here? Octavia raised an amused eyebrow. Well, I must admit that I was quite surprised to receive an invitation to your Cutecinera. I have no idea how your pink friend got my address or how she was even aware that we were acquainted. Ventured Rumble, that's just Pinkie. She tends to know things. I see, said Octavia, her smile wavering slightly. Still, she didn't appear to be too worried. You must be Sweetie Belle's colt friend then. Yes, said the colt, my name's Rumble. It's nice to meet you. Octavia giggled. So polite. It seems you've found yourself quite the catch, Sweetie Belle. That's right, agreed Sweetie, grinning from ear to ear before she turned and planted another kiss on Rumble's cheek. I know you've probably been asked this 100 times tonight, said Octavia as she fell into step next to the pair of foals, but could you share the story of how you got your mark with me? I am quite eager to know how it turned out. Sweetie nodded eagerly. She had been asked about the nature of her cutie mark several times already that night. But it was a story she hadn't gotten tired to telling yet, particularly because she was so proud of how she'd gotten it. Octavia led them towards a small group of cushions situated against one wall where ponies could relax and converse, giving them a place where she was able to hear Sweetie's story in its entirety. Her expression grew stern when she heard about Camellia and just what the mare had put Flaxseed through. Still, she couldn't help but smile proudly when she learned how Sweetie had used her gift for music to ease Flaxseed's troubled mind and soul and given him a chance to heal. I must admit, she said when Sweetie finished, you do indeed have a remarkable calling. It sounds like I was right to send you to Vinyl. You can say that again, said Vinyl Scratch, seemingly summoned by Octavia's comment. How's it hanging, Octa? Octavia chuckled. I'm doing quite well, thank you very much. How about you, Vinyl? I'm glad to see you working in a respectable establishment for once. Vinyl belted out a loud laugh that echoed over the tones of her own music, which continued to pound rhythmically through the room. Yeah, this is a step up from the places I usually work, she admitted, and to think that it's because I volunteered to do it for free. Oh, gasped Sweetie, I didn't realize. I didn't mean to impose on you like that. Relax, kiddo, said Vinyl, running a hoof over Sweetie's mane, moving gently to avoid mussing it. This was my idea. Celestia knows, you're certainly worth it. Quite true, agreed Octavia. I trust you've already heard how Sweetie got her mark. Yep, replied Vinyl. It's a good thing that Camellia Mare split or I would have introduced her to my bass cannon. You're what? Don't worry about it, said Vinyl quickly. The only downside to this is that mare won't get what she deserves. Oh, I think otherwise, said Octavia, an edge of malice in her voice. I have played in the pit at a fair few Bridalway productions myself, so I have some contacts in that area. I'll make sure that word gets out about Miss Camellia's appalling behavior. I suspect she'll have a hard time finding roles in the future. Good to hear, said Vinyl, a slight growl in her voice. That mare may not have gotten her dress, but she deserves a little more than that for what she put that poor guy through. Octavia nodded in agreement. The two of them then realized that Sweetie and Rumble were watching them with a little bit of awe and fear as they listened to the two adult mares casually discuss ruining the career of another mare, even if said mare totally deserved it. Realizing that the foals were a bit intimidated by the conversation, Vinyl shook her head vigorously before looking again at Sweetie. Reaching up with her hoof, Vinyl tilted her trademark purple-tinted sunglasses up to rest at the base of her horn. How they hung so securely there, no pony could rightly say. Vinyl's glasses were a trademark of hers, though she actually needed them during the shows in order to protect her eyes from the strobing lights that often accompanied her music. She'd once admitted to Sweetie Belle that, if she hadn't worn them, she would have gone blind years ago. Sorry, the conversation got a little gnarly there, said Vinyl in an apologetic tone. I actually wanted to talk to ya so I could give you your present. Sweetie blushed and her eyes lit up. A present? You didn't have to. Vinyl chuckled. Yeah, but I wanted to. It's been a while since I've had such a blast with a student. Most of those kids are just looking for me to teach them how to be DJ Pon 3 2.0 so that they can go off and start their own flashy careers in the music biz. She sighed and shook her head. Most of them don't make it very far cause they don't try to do anything more than imitate what I've already done. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, commented Octavia Riley. Are the laziest alternative to originality, countered Vinyl. Anyway, I wanted to give you this, kiddo. Her horn sparked and she teleported in a large manila envelope, which she set on the cushion in front of Sweetie. What's this? Asked Sweetie, looking at the envelope curiously. It's application information for the Academy of Arts and Sciences, explained Vinyl with a grin. That's the forms and everything you need to submit the application. You're getting close to the end of your elementary years and you're gonna be looking at trade school soon, right? Sweetie nodded. Vinyl's grin widened. That's why I figured you might like this. Amongst other things, there are quite a few classes and seminars at the school that could help you refine your skills, especially if you're planning on doing what I think you're planning on doing. What do you mean? Asked Sweetie. From the sound of things, it seems that the field you'd be most interested in is musical therapy, explained Octavia, gently rubbing Sweetie's back with her hoof. There's been a great deal of research into using music for the purposes of promoting the healthy development in the body and mind. In other words, studying there could help you learn to help ponies like Flaxseed and many more besides. Sweetie looked back down at the envelope, her expression pensive. That would be wonderful, she said. However, her low tone suggested that something about the offer was troubling her. Vinyl didn't seem to notice as she pressed on. But that's not really my gift. You could get that information easily. That packet also contains a letter of recommendation from yours truly, personally recommending you for admission. She elbowed Octavia in the side. I was actually planning on asking Octavia to write one too. With the two of us, you'd be eligible for a full scholarship. It's pretty convenient that she got invited to this shindig, huh? Yes, agreed Octavia, raising an eyebrow and glancing at Rumble. It is rather convenient. Rumble merely grinned sheepishly and offered a shrug. Pinkie Pie, he said by way of explanation. Octavia's eyebrow rose a little higher, but she wisely decided not to question things any further. With a sigh, she turned back to Sweetie and Vinyl. In any case, I would certainly be happy to lend my support, she said, giving Sweetie an encouraging smile. I think you could go quite far. Thank you, said Sweetie. Excuse me. I need to step out for a moment. With a speed that shocked the two mares, Sweetie quickly bolted for the door, letting it swing shut behind her. Vinyl and Octavia shared a confused glance. What did we do wrong? Asked Octavia. I don't think it was anything you said or did, said Rumble as he picked up the packet and tucked it under his wing, but I think Sweetie's a little leery of the idea of leaving Ponyville. I guess that makes sense, admitted Vinyl. I probably should've thought about that before springing this on her. It's a pretty big step after all. It'll be okay, said Rumble. I'll talk to her. Thank you both. He followed Sweetie's path to the door as the two mares watched him go. My, observed Octavia with an approving smirk, he's certainly a fine gentlecolt. You don't find colts that polite and observant just anywhere. No kidding, agreed Vinyl with a laugh. I'd say he's a keeper. Vinyl's gaze drifted sidelong to Octavia. So, I hear you might have landed yourself a prince. Octavia let out a faint giggle. Not a prince, actually, she said with a smirk, a duke. To be honest, I think I much prefer him to any prince. So, said Vinyl, flashing a smirk of her own, you'd better start sharing those juicy details. Sweetie sniffed and rubbed furiously at her eyes, trying her hardest to wipe her tears away, barely conscious of the cold seeping into her coat from the outside air. She was mortified that she was acting like this during her quinceanera. This was supposed to be a happy occasion and here she was blubbering away like an infant. After Vinyl and Octavia had both been so generous to her, she'd repaid their kindness by running away and crying because of her own selfishness. But, she thought, I don't want to leave Ponyville. She was barely conscious of Rumble's arrival until she felt his wing wrap around her back and pull her up against his side. He didn't say anything as Sweetie leaned against him, but simply held her as she sniffled into his shoulder. He'd done much the same on occasions where her anxiety over not having a cutie mark had gotten the better of her. I don't want to leave Rumble either, she thought. Gradually, her tears subsided and silence descended on them. Rumble, she said. Yeah. Should I? Sweetie swallowed. Should I go to the academy? Yeah, said Rumble without missing a beat. But, Sweetie took a second to get her voice back under control, but I'd have to leave Ponyville. I'd have to leave you. That's true, admitted Rumble as he turned so that he could rest his hooves on Sweetie's shoulders, but it's not forever and it doesn't mean the end of anything between us. You know that. But what if we start growing too far apart? Asked Sweetie. It happens all the time. Ponies move away from each other and they start growing apart and... Sweetie, snapped Rumble, the sharp tone of his voice yanking the filly out of her panicked downward spiral. His eyes peered deeply into hers until he was absolutely sure he had her attention. Look, he said, you're right that those things don't always work out. But that's up to us. We can make it work if we really put some effort into it. There's something more important at stake here. He opened the wing opposite the one he'd been holding her with, showing Sweetie Vinyl's packet. When you helped Flaxseed the other night, you learned something important about what you wanted to do with your talents in your life. I'm not exactly keen on the whole long-distance relationship thing either, but this is your future we're talking about. He leaned in and planted a kiss on Sweetie's lips, letting it linger for several seconds before pulling away. What kind of cold friend would I be if I held you back just because I didn't like the idea of you going to school out of town? But Dot, are we sure that this is what's best? Asked Sweetie, her voice still uncertain. I think so, said Rumble. It's not like this is the first time either. Remember when you comforted me after Scootaloo turned me down? Sweetie nodded. And then there was that time after Willow came to town. You know, when I told you girls about my accident. Rumble blushed and averted his eyes. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Sweetie nod again. That's how I know, he said, turning to look at her again. You don't like seeing other ponies hurting and you want to help them. That's what your music is for. You told me about what Octavia said about your audience. The ponies like Flaxseed, the ones who are hurting, your music is for them. He smiled and lifted his free wing to brush a tear out from under Sweetie's eye. Don't let me keep that all to myself. Sweetie sniffed one last time before she leaned in and tucked herself up against Rumble's chest, nuzzling in under his chin as his wing joined his arms in wrapping around her. Thanks, she whispered. Rumble tilted his head to plant a kiss at the base of her horn. You're welcome, he said. Let's go back to the party. It's cold out here. The two foals went back inside and Sweetie was able to enjoy the remainder of her Cutesinera, even agreeing to take both Vinyl and Octavia's recommendations for the academy, though she hadn't yet stated whether or not she would apply. Still, she enjoyed herself, happy that her days as a blank flank were now behind her. So why is there so much emphasis on not using unicorn magic for the winter wrap-up? Mused Don as he and Arkenstone prowled through Whitetail Woods. Arkenstone paused, his nose sniffing before he oriented on a tree. Once there, he carefully planted a small flag, marking the position of an animal burrow nestled between the roots. Part of the reason is the cultivation, explained Arkenstone. Winter wrap-up is about more than just clearing the snow. When we wrap up winter, we are also laying the magical foundation for the year's growth. The act of plowing away the snow, followed by plowing the fields, followed by the planting, lays the magic of the participating earth ponies down into the earth, coaxing it back to life, sparking the first steps of growth within the newly planted seeds so that they will grow healthy and bountiful. More than a community event, Winter Wrap-Up is actually a large-scale ritual of earth pony magic. A unicorn's magic can interfere with the process and alter the results, in a manner similar to how inserting something as small as a single decimal point into an equation can drastically alter the result. Earth pony rituals aren't nearly so complicated or precise, but the overall principle is the same. Even for little things like birds' nests? Asked Don. Arkenstone shrugged. It's hard to say where a unicorns might cause interference. I doubt the birds would refuse to return to those nests if they were made with the assistance of magic, but that isn't a certainty, and even a small disruption could ultimately lead to dramatic results. At some point, I think ponies just gave up trying to figure out the ifs and whens of how a unicorn's magic might hinder the coming of the season and passed a general moratorium for simplicity's sake. However, because very few ponies, even earth ponies, have a formal understanding of how earth pony magic works, magical reasoning was simplified into tradition, and now many ponies hold to that tradition because that's the way it's always been done. I'm certain that, with time and study, Twilight or some pony like her could probably figure what tasks would be safe for a unicorn to use their magic on. However, between the countless ways unicorns use their magic and how those ways might interact with different aspects of the whole ritual, it would be a long and tedious process to figure things out, to say nothing of the fact that the face of unicorn magic is always growing and changing. New spells and magics are born all the time, and each one would have to be examined. It comes across as a job that's far too large to bother with, especially for an event that only occurs once a year. And yet we Pegasi are allowed to use our magic, Don noted. And Pegasi always have, answered Arkenstone. Before towns like Ponyville had a large enough Pegasus population to host their own weather team, Pegasi were simply called in from the nearest cloud city to clear away the cloud cover. Pegasi have always been a part of winter wrap-up since the earliest times. Besides, their magic involves the sky, which doesn't interfere with what the earth ponies are doing down below. I see, mused Dawn, already in the process of marking out another burrow. Even for a wildlife manager as dedicated and knowledgeable about her charges as Fluttershy, keeping track of every den and burrow used by the hibernating creatures was a task that would outstrip what she could accomplish alone. Thus, she had simplified things. The hibernating animals were assigned zones where they could pick out locations of their choosing to settle down for the season. That way, ponies knew where to look when waking the animals up for spring. However, even within those zones, there were any number of places where the animals could secret themselves. That was where spotters like Dawn and Arkenstone came in, tracking down said burrows and den, marking them out for the rest of the animal team to come by with the bells and wake the animals up. It was normally a tedious, drawn-out task. However, between Dawn's wind sense allowing him to pick up the changes in airflow created by the burrows and Arkenstone's sense of smell, which homed in on the sleeping critters, the task was going by far more quickly. Dawn and Arkenstone had already gone through 3 zones in the time it had taken the rest of the animal team to manage one. Scootaloo, much to her excitement, had been tapped to join the weather team in clearing away the cloud cover. They were primarily waiting for Twilight's signal, which would come once the animals were in the clear. Another group of the weather team, containing Rumble, were already on their way to guide the migrating birds back north. Sweetie Belle was joining her sister on the nest building detail. Sweetie wasn't feeling particularly enthusiastic about the task but was eager to work alongside Rarity in preparing the nests that would serve as homes for the newly arriving birds. Apple Bloom was helping with the planting team first by ensuring that all of the equipment was in good working order. Then she would also be pulling a plow and planting seeds alongside her elder siblings. Spike, naturally, was working alongside Twilight, helping to manage her lists and keep her organization organized. His was probably the most demanding job as he was constantly having to shuffle priorities to keep up with the changing circumstances of winter wrap-up. Though Twilight was in charge of making the decisions, it was Spike who helped keep track of what those decisions were and what decisions still needed to be made. Perhaps the biggest surprise of the event was Flaxseed, who had stepped forward and volunteered to help with Twilight's organizing, keeping a detailed ledger of equipment and materials to track what they had, what was being used, and what was left over. He was mostly sequestered away in Town Hall, being somewhat hesitant to step out into the open during the flurry of activity that was going on. Still, he was participating and that was what mattered. From Dawn's perspective, things were going smoothly. By all accounts, all the tasks were proceeding according to, or even ahead of, schedule. He suspected that, rather than coming on time, spring might be a little early this year. A smile spread across the Colt's face as he realized that this was the first time in a long time that he was truly eager to greet it. In Canterlot, the sun was already shining brilliantly in the sky. The clouds had been clear and green sprouted forth from the countless gardens around the castle. The yearly ritual to transform the city from its winter form to its spring form had barely taken half a day. Already, ponies were enjoying being able to walk about without coats or boots. Naturally, amongst the unicorns that made up most of the city's population, a great many derisive remarks had been made about the poor, unfortunate earth ponies in the towns lower down, who had to work throughout the day, and often the night as well, to bring about the change in the season. From where he sat, Elderflower, Baron of Dream Valley, could see the clouds still hovering over the lands down below, like a fluffy blanket that seemed to stretch out for miles closer to the mountain's base. In its own way, it was every bit as beautiful as the sweeping vistas of snow-covered valleys during the clear days of winter or the rolling green fields of the spring and summer. Elderflower enjoyed being able to relax under these circumstances. It allowed him to appreciate how hard the ponies below Canterlot were toiling. They did so, not merely because they were some lesser breed, but because it was in their nature. They were fulfilling the role that had been laid down for them since time immemorial. In the Earth Pony towns, ponies, irrespective of what foolishly whimsical path they might follow, came together to recognize the purpose of their kind and fulfill their duty to the land. It was a day for ponies to be reminded of their place. "You're certainly enjoying your leisure," observed the Baron's visitor as he came into the sitting room. "I always find you impressively composed for a pony with so much on his plate." "Of course I am," replied Elderflower, not bothering to turn his head to regard the other pony. "A stallion in my position must always maintain his composure as much as possible. It is our responsibility to not show weakness before the masses." Given his position, Elderflower's visitor didn't really deserve any more consideration than he was already being given by being allowed onto the Baron's estate in the first place. That he'd walked in and started talking without the slightest pretense of acknowledgement for Elderflower's rank was another slight that the Baron had gracefully chosen to overlook. That was especially true, considering that the other pony should have been much more useful in his given role. He was in a position to know and hear a great deal of the information that passed amongst the highest levels of the royal palace. Yet most of what he passed on was information that Elderflower could have easily learned through his own intelligent sources. And yet, every once in a while, the stallion managed to bring forth a little pearl of knowledge that convinced Elderflower that he could be useful for a little while longer. "I admire your dedication to maintaining your image," remarked the other stallion, casually planting himself on a cushion next to Elderflower, maintaining a polite distance. "Maintaining appearances is an important duty, no matter how shallow it may seem," said Elderflower with a sigh. "Commoners often dismiss it as little more than vanity. They talk about how action is more important than appearance. They'll say that a pony's looks are secondary to what she actually does. But the truth of the matter is that they are all too often swayed by appearances. They look up at those who lead them and evaluate said leaders according to such minor appearances. If ponies applying for a job have equivocal qualifications, it's only natural that the one who presents herself better will get the position. Ponies look to us nobility and expect certain things of us because of our rank. We are to be immaculate in our appearance, dignified in our bearing, and we must express our superiority as naturally as breathing. We are infallible paragons of equinety." Elderflower's guest raised an eyebrow. "And I suppose that maintaining appearances is even more important amongst your peers." Elderflower snorted derisively. "Of course, just as with any game that pits you against canny opponents, losing your composure reveals your weaknesses and gives your next move away. As a baron, I am too low in the noble hierarchy to depend on my rank for protection. That must be why you wore such an impressive poker face when you came back from your trip to Ponyville empty-hooved." Elderflower's nostrils flared the tiniest bit, but he refused to dignify the other pony's words with a response. Besides, even though he had not succeeded in swaying Twilight Sparkle to his cause, Elderflower had gained important insight into the way her mind worked. He now only needed to figure the best way to take advantage of the knowledge he'd gained. Instead, Elderflower decided to guide the conversation in a more productive direction. "Since you are here, I presume that you have some relevant information for me." The other pony nodded. "Yes, I thought you might find this interesting. The Parliament is preparing to discuss the qualifications for the royal warrant and the selection processes for the applicants. I already have a list of both which is likely to make it through as is at this juncture. As you might expect, Dame Rarity and Dame Applejack both qualify as applicants. So now it is merely a matter of successfully making the grade through the selection process." Elderflower's eyes narrowed. "Is that all you've brought me?" he asked. Once again, his inside source had brought him information that he would have easily found through his normal channels. "There's more," replied the other pony with a slight smirk. "Are you planning on allowing those two to obtain the royal warrants for their respective businesses?" While I'm sure it would be quite convenient if they were prevented from obtaining the royal warrant, I see no profit in intervening, Elderflower pointed out. After all, the entire reason I removed Viscount Eventide from the picture was to stop him from trying to manipulate Twilight Sparkle through her friends and loved ones. That is highly liable to be counterproductive in the long run. And yet some are trying, noted the other pony. Elderflower heaved a disappointed sigh. Whilst I have taken the lead position in this little venture, I can't restrain my allies nearly as well as I would like. I am frequently reminded that, as a baron, I rank below many of them in terms of nobility. At least a couple of my more well-funded allies are backing rival claimants to the royal warrant, assured that both Rarity and Applejack have no hope about maneuvering an opponent with greater resources. That seems foolish, noted Elderflower's visitor. Of course it is, conceded Elderflower. As it has been said, necessity is the mother of invention. If anything, the fact that they are more financially limited than the competition is likely to drive them to making innovations that will turn the issue of resources on its head. The other pony nodded. I'm impressed by your willingness to look beyond the obsession that most nobles have with their bit purses. I suppose the information I have will confirm your opinion. This made Elderflower's eyes narrow. And what information is that? The visitor smirked. Recently, Applejack has succeeded in domestically cultivating a new variety of apple, one of magical nature, similar to that of the Zap apples her family already grow, with Twilight Sparkle's assistance, I might add. From the sound of things, it's sure to make a profound impact once they reveal it to the world at large. In fact, I suspect she is planning on using to secure her win during the selection process. As for Rarity, she, also with the help of none other than Twilight Sparkle, has apparently invented a new fabric that will likely reshape the fashion industry. I dare say that no pony else in the running has anything remotely like it. So it's exactly as I figured, mused Elderflower. It wasn't that big a surprise. For all that his allies had harped upon how great an advantage their money would afford Rarity and Applejack's competitors, they overlooked the fact that Rarity and Applejack had some powerful connections of their own. That Twilight Sparkle's influence would give them such an enormous advantage over the competition was only a sign of how important it was to have her cooperation. Interfering with the selection process to obtain the royal warrant was a risky proposition. Since everything was being hammered out by the ponies in Parliament, the interference of the nobility in such an event would likely be construed as an unauthorized intervention by the noble court outside of the bounds of their authority. However, Elderflower wondered if perhaps there was a way to still swing this to his advantage. Yes, he had disdained the notion of using Twilight's friends to secure her cooperation. But that was generally through the lens of using Twilight's concern for their well-being as a means of coercion. Perhaps there was another angle to exploit. But first, thought Elderflower, I need more information. Applejack's farm is out of my reach at the moment, so finding out about those new apples of hers is out. But Rarity, a smile slowly spread across his face. Yes, in Rarity's case, I have some pony already in place. I love it when a plan comes together. I'm sure that, with Coco Pommel's help, I can obtain all kinds of useful information. You seem to be thinking of something amusing, noted the other pony. My apologies, said Elderflower, I was just thinking that perhaps it is time for me to send Perlin Bluestreak on a little errand for me. He has been getting a little stir-crazy, since I've had so little for him to do lately. The visitor chuckled. Oh yes, how is he working out for you? Elderflower's eyes narrowed. He is the most disagreeable pony I've ever had serving me, but he's useful nonetheless. I suppose I should be grateful to you for recommending him. Sitting across from Elderflower rested another unicorn. His coat was a dark shade of brown that clashed harshly against the strangely off-white color of his mane and tail. His crimson eyes always seemed to glitter, even when there was no actual light source to illuminate them. However, the stallion's most prominent feature was the horn that projected out of his head. While most unicorns sported a coat of velvet over their horn that matched the natural color of their coats, this pony's horn was an unsettling off-white color, similar to that of his mane. Seeing it always made Elderflower's skin crawl. It gave him the impression that the horn was an extension of bone growing straight out of the other stallion's skull, rather than an outgrowth of alicorn, which all unicorn horns were composed of, and from which the alicorn pony type derived their name. Rather than velvet, the horn seemed to be sheathed in a substance that seemed almost crystalline. When the light hit the stallion's horn, said light seemed to shift and refract strangely, as though there was something about the pony's horn that didn't conform to the natural laws of the world. Whiteshade was officially the majordomo to Princess Luna. Few ponies were as close to the princesses as he. Thus, he was in a position to learn all sorts of useful information that even Elderflower's own agents were able to glean from the palace staff. At least, that was what Elderflower had assumed the first time they had met. However, Whiteshade had proven to be of limited usefulness. Still, at least the handicapped unicorn managed to at least provide something useful every once in a while. He had even gone so far as to arrange Elderflower's meeting with the underworld mercenary Perlin Bluestreak. Though Perlin was a willful and capricious pony, he'd proven to be an extremely useful tool to the Baron. It is a pity, thought Elderflower as he eyed White's horn, that his condition prevents him from using magic. Without that, he doesn't even qualify as a unicorn. If he could use magic, I might have still had a use for him when all of this is over. I'm glad that I managed to be of some help to you, said White. I should be getting back to the palace, lest Luna misses my presence. I look forward to our next conversation, my lord. Yes, said Elderflower, somewhat reluctantly, until next time. The door closed behind White and Elderflower sighed, grateful that he was able to spend the remainder of the afternoon in peace. Perlin could be called for later. White made his way through the halls of Baron Elderflower's manor. He scarcely paid any mind to the tasteful decorations that made up the decor. There were a fair few paintings, here a portrait of a long-lost ancestor, there a marble bust of the Baron himself, throw in a priceless vase carved from Eravada ivory, and you had just about everything you could expect from a noble's mansion. White had to admit that Elderflower was a good bit more restrained in his sensibilities than many of his peers. But, like all of his ilk, there was nothing he liked more than showcasing his wealth and influence, even if it was to the few that were able to make it into this part of his home. A rattle of metal caught White's attention as he approached a juncture between two corridors. Looking for the source of the sound, White's smile widened as he spotted the pony who'd made it. It was a young stallion, young enough that some ponies would probably still refer to him as a colt, though he was practically an adult by this point. His coat was a light cream color, dotted with flecks of gray, though most of it wasn't visible as his body was covered by a pitch black cloak that covered him from the shoulders all the way down to his haunches. The colt's mane was a dark grayish-blue color. He regarded White with a pair of yellow, hawk-like eyes. Hello Perlin, said White with an easy smile, it's been a while since we last spoke. Are things going well for you? The young stallion shrugged somewhat indifferently. Hey, it's a living. Things have been a little bit boring around here lately. I can't complain too much, I guess. White's smile flattened out into a slightly more neutral expression at Perlin's rather lackluster response. Granted, Perlin had never been one for excited outbursts of emotion, but he seemed particularly subdued this time. Is something the matter? Asked White, raising an eyebrow. Perlin sighed. I've just been given a few things to think about lately. In some sense, I suppose I never truly appreciated how much easier it was when my late father was making all my decisions for me. True, he was fashioning me into his personal killing tool, but at least I had my future mapped out for me. Thinking for myself is hard. White couldn't help but laugh at that. I suppose it is. It's quite easy to simply play the role that others lay out for you and abandon your own thoughts and feelings. Many ponies are all too happy to just go with the flow, as it were. At least you're making an effort. Perlin sighed and looked away slightly. I have been thinking about your offer again. Have you now? Asked White, his eyebrow climbing higher. You gave me a rather blasé rejection when I first made it. I'm surprised that you are reconsidering it now. Circumstances have changed, said Perlin. I am reconsidering. I see, said White. I won't ask what changed your mind. Of course, my offer remains open to you. Please feel free to let me know once you reach a decision in the matter. Perlin favored White with a smile. Thank you. Now, said White, if you don't mind, I am expected back at the palace soon. I must take my leave. Good day. Perlin bobbed his head slightly in response to White's words and watched as White made good his departure. Once again, the young stallion sank deep into thought. Author's notes. So winter wrap-up ended up being a fairly small portion of this chapter. However, I'm glad for the chance to hash out my reasoning on why unicorns aren't allowed to use their magic beyond simply defaulting to racism. It operates off of what I call the airplane principle, namely how with airplanes there is a prohibition on using electronic devices when taking off and landing, and how there used to be a general moratorium on electronic devices years ago. It wasn't because any of the devices used actually caused some form of interference. If I recall correctly, there are no plane crashes that actually resulted from, say, somebody using their cell phone while the plane was landing. I could be wrong, of course. The prohibition is in place because the people who manage airline safety aren't sure what devices might interfere with a plane's systems and err on the side of caution. It doesn't help that technology is always evolving and changing, so there are always plenty of new things out there to be worried about. Trying to figure out what does and doesn't cause interference costs time and money, so it's both easier and cheaper to just play it safe and ban everything. You could say that the reasoning behind winter wrap-up is similar. Next chapter, it's time to say goodbye.